Welcome to Fiction Audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, like and subscribing would be greatly appreciated. If you have any recommendations for novels, comment below.
Please join my Patreon at https://www.patreon.com/fictionaudiobook.
Chapter 98, Jeonchi Unleashed and New Pawn. With his lovers at his side, Romonus was much happier than before. While he was perfectly fine fighting a war against a world alone, knowing that his lovers would not hesitate to fight alongside him filled him with certain warmth in his demonic heart. They all knew what to expect, but when they did cross over the gate he constructed into Lucifate, a massive mountain of skulls was not it. However, Latia instantly began to geek out as she ran over to the skull throne where a bunch of demon knights stood. They had been standing around it taking joy in their work, but when Latia walked toward the throne they glanced up at Romonus. With a motion of his hand, they stepped aside as she climbed up the mountain. As creations of Romonus' soul, they knew something about him and his lovers were one of them. With a big smile, Latia made it to the top where a throne made of skulls infused with Romonus' infernal divinity. Romonus smiled as she sat on the throne before she looked down from the mountain. Latia crossed her arms as she looked at Romonus with a slight smile. "So, when would you tell me about the skull throne? Are you feeling a little corn-like, my love?" Romonus shook his head. "That throne has only been up for a few minutes. I knew you would like it, but it is mine. My demons made it for me." Latia turned her head to one of the large demon knights standing around. "You made them like God made angels, right?" Romonus nodded. "Yes, thanks to Valerie's modifications which merged with my soul, life force, and bloodline, I am immortal. I could make more if I wanted, but I do not need to do so at this moment." Latia began to tap her finger on one of the skulls that formed the handrest of Romonus' skull throne. In Romonus' mind, she looked extra arousing on that throne of skulls. Make me a bloodthirster. He had nothing against making one for her, but what did she want it for? Why? Without answering she pointed at the Pride of Damnation, her titan. The giant war engine was currently observing the crumbled city. Near it was a greater demon who was observing the nearly the same height as it. The AI that controlled the titan began to scan the demon before it spoke. Analysis complete. A demon formed from divine energy tainted by demonic energy. Chances of victory, 35%. Requesting update from Demon Smith. Latia frowned as she heard that her titan only had a 35% chance of beating a single one of her lover's demons. Isn't that some bullshit? I want that bloodthirster to bind it to my titan like a warpsmith. Good old Iron Warrior, stuff your gods in machines. Romonus shrugged as he was just that strong, however, the fact that Titan even had the chance of beating one of his greater demons was impressive. Sure, I don't mind. Anyway, we will stay in this world for maybe a month. That is all, after we are done we shall return home and consolidate our power. Do whatever you want, it won't matter in the long run. Run any experiment, and cast any destructive spell. Do anything that runs through your minds, I know I will." Romonus' dark eyes glowed with a dark malevolence that had always been there even before he became a demon god. The 8-pointed stars in the middle seemed to spin as he started to plan out what he would do. While he did that, Latia stood up from her throne and leapt toward her titan. She landed on its head before she whistled. Instantly, her Necron Legion and her demon engines began to march south. "I will be leaving first, I will be searching for rare metals to feed my forge. If anyone wants to come with me now would be the time." As her war machines marched, Walburga flew over before landing next to Latia. "I will go with you, I want to see what kind of thing you do this month. Be my guest." As Latia, Walburga, and the mechanical army marched, Vespera turned to Romonus. "Before I go, time for me to get my due." When she reached his side, she began to levitate a bit to reach his neck. He smirked to himself as he craned his neck a bit before she bit down on him. With how durable his skin now was courtesy of the consumed vampire, werewolf, and azure dragon bloodlines, he had to reduce his skin's durability. This allowed Vespera's fangs to pierce his skin. When she began to drink some of his divine demon blood, her eyes opened wide. Instantly, her entire body began to steam as a vast stream of power began flowing through her body. She released him as she staggered backward. He saw her grit her fangs as she stood tall and allowed her demonic vampire bloodline to adapt. He reached out and held her hand as the process of his infernal divinity began to merge with her demonic energy. Romonus expected a large explosion of energy, but that did not happen. Vespera merely took a deep breath before the energy flowing through her dissipated through her form. To Romonus' eyes, she became even stronger. Her demonic vampire bloodline took his energy and bloodline to evolve past her limitation. Thanks to Valerie's modifications, she quickly adapted to feeding on Romonus' divine blood. When she breathed out, superheated acid escaped her mouth as her stomach acid had vaporized when it came in contact with his blood. "Sweet demon god, that was painful, Valerie, get your share." Valerie was not a fan of pain, and if it was bad enough to make Vespera grit her teeth, how bad was the pain? Ah, I will hold off. With a shrug, Vespera waved her hand and released her household from her shadow. An army of lesser vampires, thralls, and undead, all made from human and devil prisoners. All are guilty of the most heinous of crimes. The rest were magical wolves and several types of monstrous bats. Suit yourself. As for me, I am leaving. If Latia is moving south, I will move north. Sylvana rested her scythe on her shoulder before she walked over to Romonus. See you in 31 days. He leaned down and kissed her pretty lips. Of course, have fun. From her shadow, Sylvana did something similar, but rather than a bunch of humans and devils, she unleashed a horde of undead beasts she had hunted in the unexplored regions of the underworld. One of them was a large underworld horse which she mounted before running off east. With 3 hordes moving in 3 directions that just left west in the human world where most of the gods had their domains. He did wonder what was the state of the world since he had traveled 10,000 years in the past. The Pleistocene was coming to an end around, and with it the extinction of most of the Ice Age megafauna. Some of which had been his favorite creatures. If any still lived, he could bring some back with him. He snapped out of it when he turned to the rest of his lovers. With the 3 army makers gone, what do you all intend to do? I will be fighting a near non-fighting campaign against the gods for 31 days. What will you do in the meantime? Not all of his lovers were open to the idea of slaughtering a bunch of people even if they were in an alternative universe. Rias for one had a better idea. I don't know. I think I am not going to be much help in this. I agreed to come help you with this, but I don't think you need my help. All I am good for is fighting, and with those demons with you, you won't need me. Venelana patted her on the back. Don't let yourself feel down, Rias. Take this opportunity to find something to do. Explore a path to advance and get stronger. Rias began to ponder on this before she looked at her mom. Mom, can you come with me? With a smile, Venelana nodded. Of course. Sweetie, you don't mind. Romonus shook his head as he turned to address his legion. As he walked away, he began to grow larger until he was back to his 7 feet 5 inches height. No, I honestly recommend that you all form groups and do whatever you want. As for me, I will be going to battle immediately. Kuroka turned to Chiron before having an idea. Let's go to Japan. I want to see what is going on 10,000 years in the past. With a nod, both Nakusha teleported to Japan. As for Rahvdall, she had an idea. I am going to explore the unexplored regions of the underworld. I want to know what is out there this far back in time. Roygun instantly went to join her. Wait for me, 2 of us will be safer. Together they teleported to this world's Japan, leaving Valerie, Miria, Aquino, Sikvera, Natsum, and Itsuki. Romonus turned to address the 6 girls who remained. Anyone want to come with me? I am going to fight the Greek gods. Miria smiled as she cracked her knuckles. I am. Aquino, Itsuki, come on, let's get into it. Aquino reached up and touched her face with an expression of pure delight. I get to torture Zeus, count me in. As for Itsuki, smiled happily as that sounded fun, but knowing Romonus, it was not a good idea. I would love to go with you, but you will finish all of it, Romonus. I am taking Valerie and I am going to China. Consider me taking on the Chinese gods for now, you can join me later. Walking over to Valerie, Itsuki picked her up on her shoulder before teleporting away. Romonus crossed his arms as she did have a point. That is true though. While I have you here, Miria, Aquino, how do you feel after my ascension? Since you are my demonic pieces, and they are linked to me, how do you feel? Miria thought about it as she had felt something change with the evil piece in her body. Now that you bring it up, I can feel the rook piece in my soul changing slightly. As it changes, I can feel a strange energy that is much stronger than my own fused with my demonic energy. I will take that as your divine energy. Itsuki nodded while Miria had a rook piece. Romonus had used 4 pawns to turn her. Out of those 4, all of them were doing the same thing Miria described. I can feel it as well, you know. They are changing and your divine energy is added to my own. Acneo, you feel this too, right? Aquino did feel it, and considering she had god blood flowing through her veins, the effect was even bigger with her. Her divine energy, which was mixed with demonic and holy energies, was now being mixed with infernal divinity. She went from a Nephilim fusing demonic and holy energies to mixing divinity and infernal divinity. However, the change was just starting since Romonus had only been a god for a few hours. It is a big change, but it is just starting. I think the best that we can do is fight it out until we adapt. Natsum suddenly spoke up. Romonus, what pieces do you still have? Romonus opened his hand and brought out his queen, his 2 normal pawns, and his mutation pawn piece. Miria and Chiron are my rooks, Aquino and Valerie are my bishops, Tobio and Sylvana are my knights, Itsuki is my pawn of 4 pieces, I used 1 pawn with Cookie, leaving me 2 normal pawns, a mutation pawn, and a mutation queen piece. Natsum hummed before she made a request. Can I be your third pawn? Romonus squinted his eyes as he looked at Natsum. She was very talented and she had Griffin, the Cheongchi as her sacred gear. Considering she was still human. He looked at it purely logically and he would lose nothing in the end. Sure, you would get stronger and I would gain another peerage member. With a wave of his hand, he sent one of his remaining 2 normal pawns toward Natsum which entered her body and soul. Instantly, her mana began to be converted to demonic energy that had been infused with infernal divinity. This infernal divinity through the link to Natsum began to flow into Griffin, breaking his restrictions. He jumped off Natsum's shoulder and landed on the ground as his hawk-like body began to warp. His wings turned into paws, his feathers changed into fur, his beak widened into a fanged mouth, and his talons also warped into stripped tiger paws and legs. His tail feathers fused into a large spiked tail and his entire body expanded in size until he returned to his true form as he looked in life. The Cheongchi, the fiend of deviousness, was back to the land of the living in a sense. When Romonus saw that, he was surprised as this had not happened with Byakusa, but he had not been a god when he turned him into his pawn. When the transformation was over, Griffin shook his head as he jumped toward Romonus, who reached out and caught the big tiger. The fiend began to lick his face with his rough spiked tongue. "Aw, you're welcome, Paul." He began to run his hand down his back, which was covered in a few spikes. As for Natsum, when her transformation ended and her energy settled down, she glanced over at Griffin. Why does he look like that? Romonus hefted the large tiger into his arms like he was holding a kitten. This is what he is supposed to look like. The whole hawk was God's design. By breaking his restrictions, he got to return to his true form. When we come back, I'm going to go to heaven and see if nothing is left of his true body. His eating should allow him to regain most of his power. As for you, see if you can't bond closer to Griffin and maybe rename him. He set down the tiger, who ran over to Natsum, pinning her down and covering her face in drool. Yuck. Nasty. With a smile, he turned to Sikvera, Miria, and Aquino, who were left. Well then, girls, let's get to killing gods. My demons, attention. At his roar, his greater demons, demon princes, and the 10,000 demon knights marched into formation. Before they left, he turned to his lovers. Anyone want to back out? Sikvera, Aquino, Miria, and Natsum just smiled, causing him to smile back. Well then, let's go. Romonus teleported them all to Greece as he had plenty of battles to fight this month. Chapter 99, A Brutal Campaign. Even though Romonus had traveled 10,000 years into the past to get to where Lucifer had created his devil army, the Pantheons were not living in the Stone Age. The Greek Pantheon was still in what would become present-day Greece. Unlike in the future when the gods limited their interactions with the mortal world, here the gods ruled with an iron fist. Zeus, the king of the gods following the defeat of his father Cronus, lived as king. His empire was growing and expanding at this point, and it was war-torn among the many pantheons in the world. The gods rose civilizations only to get worshipped, but allowing their rivals to grow stronger on the beliefs of their mortal servants would be foolish. As such, wars among the gods were frequent to reduce the worship of their rivals. Currently, Zeus and his pantheon had settled in what would one day become Greece. Though with how often pantheon wars happened, their budding civilizations were prone to being wiped out with few signs of their existence. At the top of Mount Olympus, Zeus sat on his throne, next to his sister wife Hera. Much like in the myths, Zeus was a serial rapist and cheater which bit at Hera's divinity as the goddess of marriage. She hated her husband and brother with a passion, but she could not leave him. The last time she betrayed him, he hung her from chaos, threatening her to drop her. As she looked at him, she remembered her wedding night, which was just Zeus forcing himself on her. She had thought she was nursing a small bird back to health, only for the bird to turn into Zeus and rape her. Forced by her divinity and Zeus, she married him and had 3 children with him. While Hephaestus was her son, she and Zeus shared in their dislike of the smith god. He was far too ugly to be their child, so she tossed him from Mount Olympus. She smiled as she thought of that, only for Zeus to notice her smile. What makes you smile like that? With a frown, Hera snorted. Oh, nothing, just thinking of Hephaestus. Zeus' face broke into a scowl when he thought of his ugly son. That failure? Whatever for? Hera didn't get a chance to answer as they both suddenly felt a wave of power hit them. Zeus nearly buckled from his throne at the sheer weight of Romonus' aura. Romonus himself, after teleporting into what he could only call the start of the Greek civilization with his legion, fully released his divine aura. He crossed his arms at the front of his demonic legion. Nisilord, his maid, stood at attention next to him. Lilith had stayed behind in Lucifade as Romonus didn't see much point in taking her with him. He did tell her to keep an eye on Leviathan, which was not hard for her. Leviathan was much too afraid of Romonus to even dare rebel. She was technically his servant now, but even she didn't want to admit that. I always wondered how the gods are supposedly older than human civilization. It seemed that they just raised their civilizations with them. Aquino was now curious about something. That is a good question to have, so if we traveled 20,000 years to the past of even 1,000,000 years the gods would still exist. Romonus nodded. Probably, but their civilizations were probably kept in pocket dimensions. Regardless, I am about to end it. All of it. Romonus reached behind his back and grabbed Ruin Maker and Malakota. Here is where we start, my demons, forward advance, no mercy. With bellowing roars, the 10 greater demons gathered their 10 demon princes and their 1,000 demon knights. They split into 10 attack groups as he had ordered. As for Romonus, he was going to move on to hunting the gods that would match his domains. Aquino, Myria, Natsum, Sikvera, this is a good opportunity. You should do the same as me and find gods that match your unique powers. Aquino, how about you taking the divinity of Zeus over lightning? Myria, since you use demonic lightning, how about Thor or Indra? Natsum, the best I can tell you with Griffin here is to feed him more powerful monsters. Sikvera, find Kronos in Tartarus. If you want to go with me, that is fine, or take one of my 10 demon battalions for yourselves. Nisilord, as for you, I recommend hunting down Boreas the Greek god of ice and winter. His divinity would suit your ice magic well. Myria and Aquino looked at each other before they began to play rock, paper, scissors. They played best out of 3 and quickly enough, Aquino won 2-3. Seems I get to not just kill Zeus, I get his divinity. Myria snorted. Take it, I don't need it, but that is a good idea. Romonus, I am going to go after the Norse pantheon to get Thor, are you sure you don't mind me taking one of your attack groups? Romonus shook his head. Not at all, just one of these greater demons is enough to end a pantheon, much less with me. Getting permission, she blew him a kiss as she leaped onto the shoulder of one of the 10 greater demons. Knowing what she wanted, it teleported her and its battalion to the Norse realm. Once she left, he expected Aquino, Sikvera, or Natsum to want to leave, but they didn't. Sikvera walked next to him with a smile. I think we want to stick with you. We want to help you. Seeing how Aquino, Natsum, and Nisilord shared her sentiment, made Romonus smile. Well then, let's get hunting. Romonus for the first time since his ascension used his devil trigger and the sheer infernal divinity released by his transformation caused all his demons to become invigorated. Even his devil lovers felt the effect which caused them to become far more excited. He was massive, almost double the size of the largest of his greater demons meant he was taller than Great Red was long. However, looking at him in his divine form caused the mortals who looked at him to have their minds crumble like he was some eldritch god. In a brutal campaign, his demon knights moved through the Greek civilization or whatever it was called. They looted everything of value and slayed any who resisted them. The people who fled were allowed to flee, but those who resisted had their skulls and souls collected. The Greek gods, angry at the attack, tried to resist. Ares and Athena unleashed their armies and like in wars they put aside their differences. Athena was in charge of the strategy, while Ares was in charge of leading their forces. Normally, the combined efforts of the two war gods would be enough to defeat armies of stronger forces, but Romonus demons were not normal. Each demon knight had a regenerative factor that made them effectively immortal. Ares leading his divine troops, mortals he had taken after death could defeat even the strongest foes. Monsters and even divine champions of other gods had fallen at the hands of his soldiers. But these demon knights just refused to die, and that was if their weapons got past the magical armor. The knights began to butcher his troops in small attack squads, taking on many more of their number. Ares grit his teeth as he bellowed orders at his troops in the thick of battle. He gripped the handle of his sword, his symbol of power, and slashed diagonally, severing 3 demon knights in half. He saw their purple-black blood spill from their waists only for it to be absorbed back. They healed nearly instantly, which made him grit his teeth. No matter how much they were cut apart, how much he blasted them, or tore them apart, they always put themselves back together. Athena was on the brink of pulling her hair out of her scalp as Romonus and his demon were outsmarting her at every turn. Romonus had not moved since he transformed into his demon form, merely taking the chance to learn the art of commanding. They considered this a good experience, but Ares grit his teeth as he hefted his sword over his shoulder. The divine weapon was enveloped in a golden-red flame before he surged as much of his divine energy into it. Die. With a bellowing swing, a tidal wave of divine fire surged through the city, killing any unfortunate humans who were in its way. Romonus, who was the target, saw how his knights were enveloped in the flames. Their armor began to melt, and their flesh began to singe and bubble. However, they kept advancing as if the pain was unknown to them. As for the divine flames that were surging toward him, Archaon opened his jaws. What seemed to be a black hole formed in the metal jaws of Archaon. The force was so great that the entirety of Ares' divine flames was devoured. Shutting his jaws, Archaon burped. I guess that is enough. Romonus glanced at Ares, who glared. Now that he got the leader's attention, his attack was treated as nothing more than a snack. You fucking piece of shit. Just as Ares was in the middle of cursing, he was forced to jump out of the way as Griffin leapt at him from Romonus' shoulder. The evil fiend in his shrunken form was the size of a regular tiger, but with a surge of Natsam's demonic energy infused with Romonus' infernal divinity, his size began to grow. In a matter of seconds, he was larger than an elephant, but even then he grew larger until he was even larger than the demon princes at 25 meters. Ares gripped his sword tighter as he gazed at the unleashed Kionki. The evil fiend squinted its eyes with Natsam on his back before something terrible happened. His loyal troops he had trained himself had their eyes glaze over. The fiend of deviousness was starting again, and with his power, Ares' troops lost control. With a bellow, their negative feelings rose to the top, their jealousy, their hatred, their envy, their lust, their worst emotions elevated to 11. Natsam had never used this, but with the support of Romonus' pawn piece, she could get it down. Ares bellowed at his troops to stop their actions, but they were too into it. They slaughtered each other, tried to force themselves on each other, and even ate the corpses of the dead. Ares was forced to cut off the head of one of them as the men tried to backstab him. "You fucking bitch, I will kill you all." Natsam took a deep breath as she looked down at her sacred gear. "Griffin, kill him." With a roar, the demonic tiger lunged at Ares, who rushed at him. "If I kill your bitch, you're nothing." He leapt over Griffin's lunge, only for Natsam to bend her legs and enhance her physical abilities with Tuki and demonic energy reinforcement. She pulled her fist back with her whole body glowing a dark crimson red with black highlights. Griffin, to help her land, swung his head back, stabbing his horn through Ares' chest. Potent poison surged into his body only for Natsam to land her hit to his face. While Natsam was not as flashy as the other girls, she was in no way weak. Romonus had trained her himself, and she was of similar skill level to Tobio. With some of Romonus' infernal divinity mixing into her demonic energy, the force of her blow nearly tore off Ares' head. He got launched into the distance like a rag doll, spinning and smashing through buildings. When he came to a stop, his neck was twisted at a wrong angle and the poisoned wound on his chest refused to close. Fuck. Just as he was going to force himself up, he heard footsteps and saw one of the demon knights standing over him. Looking into the demon's eyes, he saw pure glee as it raised its sword at him. Before he could make a sound, he heard its words. "A fine skull for the throne." A heavy clang was heard as Ares, the famous Greek god of war, lost his head. The demon did not forget to prevent his ichor from spilling or allowing his divine essence to leave the body. That could not be allowed for his god, his father. Also, should I continue my Wyvern That Hunts Dragons fanfic or my Toji Fushiguro fanfic? Chapter 100, A Divine Feast. Once Ares was killed, all the Greek soldiers felt like they had lost their brutality. Their spark for war was extinguished, causing them to rout and flee for their lives. The demon knights who were already slaughtering them began to grin behind their dark helmets. Seeing the human soldiers fleeing like insects made them fun targets to crush. Though, for the sake of his lovers, he held back the brutality of his demons. He let them kill all they wanted, but he kept their torture at a minimum. Romonus was not much into prolonged torture unless it was against those who had truly wronged him. Though, he did make sure to collect all of the souls of those who were killed. In a way, that was worse than torture, as he had a truly dark purpose for these souls. Eternal slavery as his shadows. While the souls of the dead were valuable to him, his best prize was the corpse of Ares. When it was dragged to him, the demon knight that slayed him raised its prize to him. The severed head of Ares with both hands. "My lord and master, demon god of destruction, I offer to you this." Natsam, who was still riding on the back of Griffin, cleared her voice. The demon turned his head to look at the frowning face of Natsam. "We did most of the work." The demon squinted his purple-red eyes. "Me and my brothers were the front line. We endured the god's attack enough for you to ambush him." Natsam glanced up at the towering form of Romonus. Romonus hummed as he found himself in this situation. He looked at the offered head of Ares and he could see that the eyes of Ares were still full of malice at his death, but it did not stop the fact that he was a corpse. Romonus finally made up his mind. "I do agree that you both played a hand in the defeat of Ares. Natsam, they did endure his attacks head-on enough for you and Griffin to kill him. You both did well." Natsam glanced at the demon holding the head of Ares. "I guess he does have a point." The demon nodded. "My creator and master is wise, I shall acknowledge your part to play." Natsam reached up and began to rub her right arm slightly. She hurt herself, but she wasn't used to the sheer potency of infernal divinity. It burned some of the energy pathways in her body, but they were going to need to adapt. The soul link that Romonus' evil piece shared caused his infernal divinity to enhance his peerage. It did give them an advantage compared to his other lovers and apprentices, but he did have a solution. His demonic saint cards he had created all those years ago. Now that he was a god, he could link them to his soul just like his evil pieces. That way, his lover and some of his apprentices could gain the enhancement of his power. While he was in deep thought, Natsam spoke up. "So, how are you going to use the body though?" "I will show you." Romonus held his hand out and dragged Ares' corpse and head into his giant palm. In his palm, a dark purple flame began to incinerate Ares. The infernal divinity in his flames began to refine the divine essence held in Ares' body and his armor. In a matter of seconds, Ares' pure essence was purified and ready to be absorbed. He focused on his domains and as he expected, battle was reacting. While war and battle were not the same thing, they had many similarities. Especially Ares, who was the Greek god of the brutal aspects of war. He began to absorb Ares' divine essence to enhance his domain of battle. The process did not take long, only a few moments, but when he did he felt a bit of an upgrade in that particular domain. To make sure he did not cause any instability, he took a quick moment to use his Annuncia tattoos to instantly stabilize his domains. With that out of the way, he was ready to continue. Seems my theory works. I have plenty of prey to claim. Nisilord, who was standing on his shoulder, spoke up. Master, should I make my way to hunt Boreas myself? Romonus shook his head. No, I will personally help you for. I don't see why I would not. Are you all ready? Natsum, Sikvera, Aquino, and Nisilord, who were still here, all nodded. From here, Romonus was not going to waste any more time. He ordered his demon princes and the 9 greater demons to start pulling their weight. The moment the order was given, the Greek gods' end came even faster. With Romonus at their head, they began to move through their civilization. The rest of the gods with the death of Ares preferred to attempt to flee rather than stay. However, they were not permitted to leave as Romonus kept them trapped inside Mount Olympus. When the mountain was raided, Aquino led a small force of 50 demon knights to make it to Zeus' throne room, which was her target. Zeus' divine soldiers stood in her way, but she incinerated them all with blasts of infernal divine lightning. The mixture was volatile and it erased most of what it struck with quick efficiency. When she made it to Zeus' throne room, the god king instantly attacked, throwing a massive bolt of lightning from his master bolt. Aquino, rather than dodge or block, took the full-force lightning bolt from Zeus head-on. Zeus, when he saw that, began to laugh and gloat as his attacker had been ended without being able to react. I knew Ares was not worth his reputation. What a damn failure. However, when Aquino walked out of his full-power divine lightning bolt, he was left horrified. Not even her leather clothes had been singed. She dusted herself off as Romonus prided himself on his blood-borne suits. Careful not to damage the leather. Honestly, that was rather wimpy. Here is a real lightning bolt. Pulling her arm back, she charged up a large blast of lightning. When her divine energy and Romonus' infernal divinity mixed, they became a volatile golden-purple bolt in her hand. Here, see if you can survive this, baby. She launched her lightning bolt at Zeus, which caused every one of his survival instincts to tell him to dodge. Despite being almost the fastest of the Greek gods, he was not fast enough to dodge. It was almost poetic that Zeus' lightning bolt blasted Cronus off his throne, and now lightning would blast Zeus off of his. When the bolt struck him, it scorched his entire body, pulverized his bones, and struck his essence all in one. When his divine throne was destroyed and the top of Mount Olympus was sheared off, Zeus and the rest of the Greek gods felt their loss was guaranteed. Hera, who managed to survive only because she was not the target, felt relieved and horrified at the power of these invaders. She could only watch as Aquino collected Zeus' master bolt and his body before dragging him away. When the demon knights entered Mount Olympus, or what was left, they began to drag some gods away. Hera was one of them, having her skull cleaved off her head by a demo knight looking to draw favor from his creator. One of them is Pallas, the titan of battle and warcraft. Even his son, Kratos, the god of strength, was killed and absorbed by Romonus. Nike, the goddess of victory, was taking as well to be fed to Romonus. Even Athena was not spared this fate because she held the other side of the war domain. While Ares personified what was brutal of war, she was the goddess of the strategies of war. Once all of the gods he desired were consumed, he ordered his demon legion to pillage the warehouses of the Greek gods. While Romonus devoured the gods he felt matched him, Griffin, the evil fiend of deviousness, had other ideas. He killed Artemis, the goddess of the hunt, because her divinity would enhance his power. Hermes tried flee using his speed, but Aquino caught up to him and tore him apart. He was not of use to Romonus, so after he finished his feast, Romonus moved on with his legion. Following the assault of Mount Olympus, Romonus led his legion to the underworld. There, he led another attack on the realm of Hades. He once again killed Hades, but this time he hunted every single one of the Grim Reapers. He used their powers over death to enhance his death domain and necromancy. While he was in the underworld, he also hunted down Hecate, as she was the titaness of magic and spells. Already he had killed several Greek gods, but he was far from finished. While in the underworld, he led an assault on Tartarus, leading his demon horde into that cursed place. Sikvera found Cronus, the titan of time, and after ending his tortured existence, with Romonus' help, she absorbed his divine essence to enhance her clan ability. Thanks to Romonus using Annuncia in the ritual, she didn't face much resistance and even felt her devil bloodline beginning to mutate thanks to the presence of divine energy. Romonus expected that, much like what happened to him, demonic energy would turn that divine energy into infernal or some equivalent of it. While he was in Tartarus, Romonus single-handedly killed Nyx and Erebus, the primordial gods of night and darkness. In his rampage, Romonus even slayed Tartarus and Chaos, two more Greek primordial entities. All four fed his void domain, causing his already great power to begin to surge. Once he devoured all of these divine beings, he began to feel his power swell. Of course, it was not without issues, as growing his domains in this way was not normal. Two gods of the same domain could take it from each other, but the process was usually slow. Romonus used the fact that he was not bound to the divine laws to achieve it, but even he was starting to feel his domains grow slightly unstable. Romonus returned to his human form and sat down in the middle of his demon legion. Much like before, it did not take him much effort to force his domains to stabilize. All of Valerie's modifications and his Enuncia tattoos allowed him to always be able to stay at his peak. In less than a minute he was back to full strength and even stronger because of the enhancements to his domains. From his mouth, he exhaled out the impurities found in the Greek gods. Canon, who had already absorbed the divine essence of Zeus and was working on processing it, was jealous when she saw the ease he did that. She was still holding the master bolt, but it did not call to her. She was planning on having Romonus reforge it for her, or even Silvana. Both of them were the blacksmiths of their group, but Latia was also a good option. How did you do that, so quickly? Here I am still trying to get my energy stable. With a smirk, he answered her. Enuncia, it is quite effective for anything related to rituals, and I am a god. If I couldn't do this, would I be a god, or would I just be a god? Canon shook her head as he emphasized the capital G. We get it, stop showing off. With a smile, he stood back up. I will try, regardless. If you want, I can place some of my Enuncia tattoos on you. They only light up when you want, so it doesn't ruin your skin if you call it that. Sikvera and the rest of his lovers knew who gave him Enuncia, but not why it did what it did. What is Enuncia? I know it is from 40k, but how does it work? Romonus was not so sure himself, but he did explain what he knew. A magical language that warps reality to its words. Let us say that if a normal human spoke even a simple word in Enuncia, like the word blast, they would explode their mouths and throats. It is not for the weak, and only someone exceptionally durable can use it effectively. Natsum remembered something. I once heard Latia talking about Enuncia from 40k. Does that mean 40k is real? Romonus nodded. Of course, every single book, movie, and show you know about is real in the infinite omniverse. Any manga, anime, or game is real. Even if it doesn't exist in our universe, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist in another. That is how the omniverse works. Canon hummed. Interesting to know. Romonus nodded as he relaxed in the devastated land that was Tartarus. Very. Take this time to relax, because after we get Boreas for Nislord we are moving on to the Norse pantheon. Nislord, Natsum, Sikvera, and Canon all nodded. They took the chance to relax, but the best thing was that Karn, Grimaldus, Azidahaka, and Mephiston were done with their evolutions. Hearing them wake up filled Romonus with glee at the devastation his familiars would cause with him. Chapter 101, Milestones. With a smile, Romonus felt how his four familiars began to wake up. He was quite pleased. It had just been a few hours since they began to evolve, but being without them sucked. While he took this time to relax, he turned to one of his greater demons. You, track down Boreas and his daughter Chione for me. With a bow, the giant demon teleported away to get that done. In the meantime, Romonus, he released his familiars from his soul as they wanted out. Karn, the honey badger, did not look any different other than the fact he was a bit bigger and more streamlined. He did double in size, but that was still rather small. His colors were still white and black, but his claws were no longer blood red. They were a dark purple and they glittered like gemstones. Next to him, Grimaldus the living automaton Wolverine also did not look any different. Through the contract he shared with Latia's and Ajuka's creation, he could feel that the AI programming and soul of Grimaldus now ran on infernal divinity. Grimaldus was also an intelligent self-learning AI with a soul, but now that he effectively also had divine energy running through him, his weapon system so got an upgrade. Now, I worry what you two little insane weasels are going to do. Rather than respond, they both just climbed up his legs to get to his shoulders. As for Azidahaka, the three-headed dragon was even bigger than before. Before, he used to be 80 meters long, which was almost as big as Great Red, who was 100 meters long from nose to tail. Now, Azzy was around the same length as Great Red. Hey, Azzy, I wanted to ask you a question. Since I am a demon god and you evolved in my soul, does that make you a dragon god? Azzy sat on his butt as he began to think on that like a philosopher. I can feel my dragon heart now has a spark of your infernal divinity, and even my soul which is contracted to you has the same. However, to be classified as a dragon god, I would need to have a concept of my own. I am a dragon made to kill gods, and I am the dragon of demonic origins, but that doesn't mean I have a concept. I would need to find my concept if I want to be considered a dragon god. Nislord turned to the giant three-headed dragon and asked a question. What about the concept of curses or forbidden magic? Those are your specialties, are they not? Dahaka hummed as he tapped on the chin of his main head, while he used his two other brains to increase his thinking power. Not a bad idea, Dahaka, dragon god of forbidden magics, sounds interesting. Natsum looked up at Azzy, who always seemed to get along with Romonus. However, he did rarely speak to them. Hey, Azzy, I got a question. One of his heads lowered to look at Natsum, who was holding Griffin, who looked like a small tiger cub at the moment. What is it? How do you feel about being in a contract with Romonus? He did kinda force you. Azzy nodded. I respect him, he proved to be my better and I follow him as a result. Though, if I ever become stronger than him, I will enslave him to my will as he did me. With a smirk, Romonus looked up at his evil dragon. I respect that, though you do realize the chances of you being able to surpass me are slim. Dahaka began to chuckle as he looked at Romonus. That is true, but then again, we are only as powerful as he allows ourselves to be. Since you are superior, you are the master. If I leave you in the dust, guess who will serve? Me. Good luck. Romonus turned his head to look at his fourth and final familiar Mephiston, his royal griffin. He walked up to the creature and began to run his hand down his eagle head. I still love your species. He hugged the griffin's head, who nuzzled into his armored form. Seeing this, made Sikvera smile, as if there was one thing about Romonus, he loved his familiars. If that was how he treated his pets, thinking about how he would be as a father made her happy. Romonus, I do have a question. If you had to get one of us pregnant first, who would it be? Without even looking back, he answered. Latia, she is my first fiancée, so it makes sense I get her pregnant first. When he turned around, he could see that Sikvera was proud of him. Latia was her best friend and the first to get engaged to Romonus. Makes sense. If you had to have a boy or a girl, what would it be? Boys are simple. Give them food, a cool pet, and a cool sword and they are happy. Though, I do want a cute daughter to raise like me. Sikvera, Natsum, and Aquino looked at each other as they imagined a female Romonus. It was kind of hard because of how damn masculine he was. However, a daughter of Romonus that took after him would be scary. As for Niselord, she didn't care, as she was just the maid, nothing more. Though, if her chosen master wanted her to warm his bed, she would do so. Her mother had raised her, Graphia, and their sister to always please their master. Though, thus far, Romonus was far too focused on his strength. Speaking of that, now that Dahaka, Karn, Grimaldus, and Mephiston were awake, he was ready to start his next campaign. He had limited time and he was on a timeline. Just as he was going to leave, the greater demon he sent out returned with his targets. In his giant hands were Boreas, the Greek god of winter and ice. He was also the personification of the north wind, and his daughter Chione, goddess of snow. Both of the Greek gods were alive, as the greater demon had captured them instantly. What you asked for, master. Thank you. When the two gods were set at his feet, Romonus held his hands out as he looked through the memories of Hecate. She had some pretty dark spells, and he also had some of Dahaka's spells and his own. A large 8-pointed star formed under the two gods before Romonus' infernal divinity activated the ritual. It was rather a painless process, as the souls and divine essences of the two gods were refined into a pure energy that Niselord, who had been resurrected by Romonus, could use. He drew that energy into his palm, the distilled essence of two gods. He clasped his hands together and he formed a small crystal that released a blistering cold aura. It was divine energy refined in his own, which he handed to Niselord. Here, this should upgrade your clan ability up a notch. Thank you, master. She held her hand out and she took the crystal. The moment her hand touched it, it burst into a stream of energy that entered her body through her palm. The divine essence of the two gods had been refined into infernal divinity, which was already flowing through her body. She closed her eyes and took the chance to activate her Lucifuge clan ability, which began to absorb the divine energy. He had already given her the talent of Rahvdall, and now he gave her the refined essences of two gods. Thanks to the fact she was one of his demons, she quickly adapted. In a few short moments, she finished absorbing the energy contained in Boreas and Chione. When she was done, she took a few moments to get a feel for her new abilities. As one of Romonus' demons, she was already blessed by the refined Rahvdall and two gods for her. She felt great, strong enough that she could defeat anyone who came against her or her master. I feel great, thank you, master. She bowed before Romonus stood up. You are very welcome, come on, we are leaving Tartarus. Natsum looked up at him with a curious look on her face. Who are you attacking next? Heaven. My demons, prepare for combat. We are going to speed up our campaign. Since Miria left with one of his attack groups, he only had 9 greater demons, 90 demon princes, and 9,000 demon knights. Though, with his familiars awake and evolved, he didn't need more than that. Sikvera, Aquino, Natsum, and Niselord prepared themselves as Romonus teleported them all directly into the first level of heaven, called the First Heaven. The first floor of heaven, where the low-level angels reside. It also serves as the front line of heaven's defenses which Romonus breached. At the end of this level of heaven was a towering golden gate, and since Lucifer's rebellion had been a mere 100 years ago, the angels were slightly depleted. 1/3 of angels joined Lucifer, and that was not counting the amount killed on both sides during the fighting. To create his angels, God had to use his soul, life force, and power, so he weakened to make them. He would recover, in time, and in the last 100 years, he had been recovering the number of angels to offset those who betrayed him and died. Currently, God was in the 7th heaven, where he was constructing the initial sacred gear system to add to his current God system. This is where he lived, where he created his angels, and where he would one day create the sacred gears. This was also before he discovered the existence of Trihexa, so he was still much stronger than he was when he died. As he was working on his sacred gear system, his God system began to blare alarm bells in his mind, informing him of intruders. His omnipotence had not informed him of this because Romonus also had the domain of omnipotence. When he was focused on the 1st heaven, and he saw the army of demons, he was alarmed. What kind of creatures are these? No, what is that thing? When he looked at Romonus, he knew that one of the devils, the foul creatures that Lucifer and his fallen became, had become a god. He knew all of his angels, but he did not recognize Romonus. He didn't have time to react as Grimaldus moved forward. In a burst of infernal divinity, the automaton opened his mouth as he brought forth one of his more deadly weapons. Phosphex, something Ajuka had made, but locked away behind several safeties. However, during his evolution, Grimaldus had removed them all, releasing his most deadly weapons. In the back of his throat, a pale purple and green flame began to burn. After a few short moments, Grimaldus released his breath, unleashing a corrosive and toxic incendiary compound utterly inimical to life. Grimaldus moved his head from right to left, releasing a massive burst of the stuff that expanded and ignited on contact with air and magic. The flames, once they caught fire, turned into a seething liquid mist that burned with eerie purple-green flames that were attracted to movement and magic. The ground of heaven caught fire as the magic used in its construction was used as fuel by the Phosphex. The angels that were hit burned alive in the flames that started at their halos and wings, which contained their magic. Then, their bodies, and lastly their very souls. Grimaldus, with a grin on his face, bent his upper body down as from his back several sets of rocket launchers formed. Salvo after salvo of Phosphex missiles and artillery hit the gate leading to the 2nd heaven. Angels fled in panic, only for the seemingly sentient flames to chase after them. Seeing this sight, Maid Sikvera turned to Grimaldus. "What the fuck is that?" The answer came straight from the Wolverine's mouth as he turned to her with a grin. Phosphex. That was quite shocking to her that he could speak, but Romonus had known the entire time. Grimaldus, Karn, and Mephiston could speak just like as he could. They just chose to not speak since they didn't care about it. Romonus grinned at the sight of true Phosphex being used. He made sure to commit this to memory to show Latia, who would want to see her child use Phosphex. He collected the souls of the dead angels as he ordered his demons to advance. Move forward. Without hesitation, the demon knights, demon princes, and greater demons moved into the purple-green flames. The flames flowed over and on the demons, but it did not harm them. Instantly, the entire demonic army was covered in a coating of Phosphex. The flames had decided to buff the demons. They did the same to Romonus, Sikvera, Aquino, Nisilord, and Natsum. When they were covered in the stuff, it made Natsum close her eyes, expecting to be burned. However, when she opened her eyes, she saw she was covered in the flames, but not being hurt. Romonus chuckled at the sight. They won't hurt targets, Grimaldus decides to spare. Come on, we are on a timetable. As they began to advance through the burned-down gate to the 2nd heaven, God intervened. His divine energy flowed through the 1st heaven, trying to extinguish the Phosphex and to save his children. However, the sentient flames refused to die out as they burned with Romonus' infernal divinity through his contract with Grimaldus. Romonus pressed back with his infernal divinity. "If you want those flames to go out, you better come down and face me, Romonus the demon god." God to God. Chapter 102, The Demon God is Supreme. God from the 7th heaven watched as the deadly, nearly sentient flames seemed to spread. His angels, which were made from fragments of himself, hurt him to see them die. Despite them trying to flee and calling for him to save them, the Phosphex refused to let them go. As long as each angel contained magic in their bodies, it was like they were giant lightning rods that attracted the Phosphex. As for Romonus, who stood at the front of his army, he was looking straight at God. Seeing the smirk on his face made God feel furious. He stood working on his sacred gear system, which was still in its early stages. He sent an order to his Seraphim to gather at his side as he was going to expel this foe from his territory. God's domain began to push against Romonus' domain, which made him smile. Sure, he was being challenged, but it was not like he was losing the domain clash. Romonus had always been a fighter, and while God could fight well, he was more of a creator. After calling his 7 Seraphim to him and his war gear. Once they were gathered, God gave the order so that the cadre and other powerful angels to join them in the battle. Romonus' greater demons squinted their eyes as they held their great swords. As the phosphex burned across their armor and weapons, they began to feel an urge to let loose. They turned to Romonus, who was thus far holding them back from attacking. Romonus though raised his free hand to them. Hold just a little longer. Aquino blushed as she watched thousands of angels be incinerated by the phosphex. Their agonizing death shrieks were pleasing to her ears. My goodness, how dreadful. No one believed her as Sikvera and Natsum looked at her a certain way. She just smiled happily, while Nislud stayed next to Romonus. His cape continued to billow from behind, now covered in phosphex. Romonus' demons held their positions, and just as he expected, God and his seraphim teleported to the first heaven in a bright flash of gold. The sheer amount of divine energy released when God teleported and caused even the phosphex to be pushed back. Though, the flames began to burn brighter, refusing to be snuffed out. Romonus grinned as he saw Gabriel, at least this reality Gabriel. There you are. From his spatial ring, he called to the Malbranche. All 11 began to awake as he spoke to them. Are any of you interested in one of the 7 seraphs? Instantly Barbaricia and Scarmiglione answered his request. The other 9 Malbranche were not interested in angels, so they remained dormant. Romonus allowed the 2 Malbranche out of his spatial ring while still in their human forms. When they were released, their super devil level auras were discharged, which caused the seraphs God brought with him to recoil. The power these demonic creatures showed was overwhelming, not counting the legion standing behind Romonus. Speaking of Romonus, he stepped forward looking straight at God. Looking at Romonus made God feel sick, as if Romonus had done some foul thing to him. He didn't know how he knew that, but when he looked at Romonus, that information entered his mind directly through their domain clash. When he learned just how Romonus had achieved godhood, he was beyond disgusted. You are a blasphemous creature, demon, no better word can describe you. Not demon god, no other title you call yourself is good enough. Romonus smiled as he stepped forward. That is fine with me. No matter what anyone says, I am the demon god, and now how about we test that out? God to demon god, demons to angels, men to men. You can refuse, but you are just going to end up dead either way. Romonus reached behind his back and grabbed Malakota, his demon spear, and Ruin Maker, his trusted sword. With his weapons in hand, he grinned as he bent his legs. God squinted his eyes as he extended his hand and pulled out an intricate golden spear from his right and a golden longsword from his left. I got God. Without waiting, Romonus drew on his domains, which had been enhanced from all of the gods he had devoured. When he used Godspeed, which Suji taught him, he ran through a void tunnel, reaching God instantly. He covered his body in demonic Tuki, and he created a new demon god technique. His domain of battle enhanced his strength, his magic domain enhanced the power in the blow, his void demon caused the weight behind the blow to intensify, his death domain covered Ruin Maker in a necrotic aura, and destruction caused his authority over destruction to combine with the other 5 domains. All held together by his omnipotence domain, causing the blow to be one that could sunder all. Demon god technique, Heaven Breaker. When he released his technique, Romonus was right in God's face, with Ruin Maker coming down with the force to sunder stars. God, using his omnipotence, clashed against Ruin Maker with his sword, catching the massive sword. God rarely fought personally, but when he was forced to fight, he was stronger than most beings in this world. Before creating his angels and heaven, he had been far more powerful, but he still had enough power to slap around an upstart demon. However, when he clashed against Romonus' technique, not only was his sword destroyed, but in that same swing, Romonus cleaved off his arm at the shoulder. His blow was so powerful that not only did he slice off God's arm, he cut through the 7 levels of heaven. He even reached God's domain in the 7th heaven, destroying it and the initial sacred gear system. The blow kept going and it traveled into the sky, cleaving the moon in 2 pieces. Whoops. When God felt his systems be hit, he roared with fury as all around him began to storm. As a pure entity, he was not supposed to feel hate, but by hating Samel, he had created the Dragon Destroyer. In that same light, his hate of Romonus was so great that his spear began to drip with demon-killing poison. Though, killing Romonus would need more than destroying his body and soul. Since he was effectively deathless, you would need to erase him from existence to truly kill him. However, he would fix that by becoming a multiversal entity as soon as he figured out how to do that. God, seeing that Romonus had paused for a few moments, ignored the feeling of pain in his soul from Romonus' attack. He lunged forward at Romonus with his spear going toward Romonus' exposed face. Romonus' eyes followed the spear covered in poison, but he opened his mouth and bit down on the spear, breaking it. In the same movement, he spun around and kicked God in the throat, crushing it into a paste and launching God into the ground. When God fell, the phosphex was waiting and it lunged for him, wanting to incinerate him. Romonus squinted his eyes as he drew on the abilities of what used to be Incinerate Anthem. He had sacrificed it for his ascension, but its abilities had become his. In front of him, a massive orb of demonic and holy flames began to spin around each other. Adding to the mixture, he added extreme gravity, causing the orb of flames to be crushed down into a small burning stone. God coughed as he wanted to yell, but his throat was smashed. God was not immortal, as he was dead in modern times. He could not even resurrect himself like other gods who could be brought back as long as their essence was not erased. God, on the other hand, had one life. In just a few moments, he felt he was going to lose that life. Despite all of his power, Romonus was a fighter and he focused all his abilities on combat. His blacksmithing and alchemy all made him stronger, his domains each focused on fighting, and he could not be killed. He was made to fight gods and kill them. As he saw God pick himself up while covered in phosphex, Romonus grinned. This was fun, but not as fun as this will be. He sent the stone of compressed fire at God, who opened his eyes. His divine energy began to try to heal his wounds. However, in Romonus demon god, breaking heaven, he had cut heaven in half. Along with it, he had killed most of the angels in the upper levels of heaven. Their souls were then dragged toward Romonus, drawn to his death domain only to add to his collection. Demon. When the stone of fire hit God, it exploded into a storm of compressed flames. It mixed with the sphex, causing God to burst into flames. Romonus let go of Ruin Maker, which floated by his side. He held his hand out and drew the essence of God into his hand. He used God's pure divine essence to enhance not just his domain of omnipotence, but also his infernal divinity. This was the biggest gain of strength so far, but with his omnipotence domain enhanced, it meant his other 5 domains also got an upgrade. When Romonus closed his eyes, he grinned to him. He looked back down as he saw his demons rushing forward as they began to butcher and massacre any angels they got their hands on. Azidahaka was staying back as he was not needed. Karn, Grimaldus, and Mephiston also stayed out of it as they let the demons have their fun. However, Barbaricia and Scarmiglione rushed forward at the seraphs who had survived Romonus' attack. Specifically, Barbaricia was after Gabriel, while Scarmiglione wanted Uriel. The 2 seraphs who saw the Malebranche charging at them wanted to defend themselves, but the stronger demons reached them before they could. Barbaricia tackled Gabriel and wrapped her arms around her. "You're mine." Gabriel was not a fighter compared to her siblings, but she would still defend herself and heaven. Though, with her father dead, it made each angel feel as if their souls were crushed. They felt grief, pain, and loss, but they could not mourn as they were in battle. Gabriel raised her sword above her head, planning to stab the demon holding her through the back. However, Barbaricia grabbed her halo with her hands, and through the contract she shared with Romonus began to flood at the source of Gabriel's angelic power with her demonic energy, which contained Romonus' infernal divinity. In a few moments, the golden halo which began to glow an ominous purple, causing her to scream in agony. Michael, who saw this happen, grit his teeth as he rushed down to get to Barbaricia. "Let go of her." Suddenly, Natsum got involved. "Griffin, get him." With a roar, the Cheonchi leapt from Natsum's arms, flying at Michael. She jumped on his back to join the fight. This interference forced Michael to focus on the fiend, or he would be killed before he could save Gabriel. This allowed Barbaricia to fully corrupt Gabriel's halo, which caused her pure white wings to start to take on a purple coloring. With even a small amount of Romonus' infernal divinity in her halo, it was far too late to save her. With a grin, Barbaricia hugged Gabriel, forcing a soul contract with the angel before she reverted into her weapon form. A black and red longsword, which Gabriel, as if in a trance, took in her hand. Her bright blue eyes glazed over as they turned into a dark purple, and even her hair changed to match her new eyes. When Gabriel spoke, it was not her voice. Barbaricia grinned, causing Gabriel's white teeth to begin to sharpen into fangs like her leader and brother Malakota. Her 12 wings flexed as they began to snap as spikes emerged from them, the feathers turned into demonic steel, and they gained more mass. Finally, a proper host, and such a good one too. Her brother Scarmiglione had done the same thing to Uriel, without interference. However, Uriel was of stronger will and was still trying to get Scarmiglione out of his body. However, with his halo corrupted and the soul contract forced on him, he would fail. A super devil-ranked demon would always beat any of the seraphs in a clash of souls. Scarmiglione, after crushing down Uriel's resistance, flew off to join Barbaricia, who was standing among the fields of burning phosphex. In Uriel's hands was a massive halberd which he spun around like it was weightless. With a cold look on his face, he turned to Barbaricia. He was bitter that he was not chosen to be the weapon of Romonus. However, their leader was stronger than all of them, and only he was worthy to be the armament of the demon god. Uriel would have to do for the time. "Excuse me, sister, I have angels to slay. Don't leave me behind, brother." Both of the released Malebranche flew off into the air on their glowing purple wings. While Michael was fighting Griffin and Natsum, the other 4 seraphs were Raphael, Chamuel Jophiel, and Sadkiel. The last 3 were less famous than the Great 4, but they were still seraphs. They would fight to avenge their father and their brethren. Only that in a few short moments, the 2 Malebranche killed them all. Being killed by their corrupted siblings was more painful than if Romonus killed them. Michael, who was fighting Griffin, turned his head at the crucial moment. Natsum ran down Griffin's back and off his head. She pulled her arm back as she was promoted to Rook. Her muscles were enhanced as she punched Michael in the chest, breaking his chest plate and his ribs. Griffin lunged with open claws that turned him into a shish kebab. Even worse was that Michael could feel toxins begin to enter his body through Griffin's claws. He looked up in anger as Natsum grabbed his head. Sorry about this, nothing personal. With a flex of her arm, she ripped off Michael's head. With his death, all of the 7 seraphs and God were dead. Romonus, who caused all of this, smiled as he knew he would not be able to act like this in his home reality. He had to take this chance to cut loose and let his inner demon out. Kill the rest, leave none alive. With roars of joy, his demons rushed forward, making sure to savor the carnage they caused. Sikvera and Aquino, who had not done anything, looked up at Romonus. When he saw them looking at him, he smiled. My bad. Sikvera shook her head. You're fine, leave some for us though. Even Natsum got to have some fun. Romonus flew down to join them as he let his demons do their brutal work. Already he could see them opening a portal to Lucifade to add to the Skull Throne. Seeing that, made Romonus quite happy that he would get a Skull Throne. Which reminded him, he was sure to invade the realms of chaos. Though, he liked Khorne and he would love to fight him. He made it his goal to not only fight Khorne but take his place and take his domain. When his demons finished with the angels, it was time to move to the next campaign. His target would be the Celtic realms and then the Japanese, then African, then American, Aztec, and Germanic. None would be spared until the whole world knew his name. Chapter 103, The Demon God's Slaughter. This chapter is quite quick-paced as I don't want to drag this arc out too much. I want to get to the Eviatold War and then Romonus finding a way out of Dragon Deus to other worlds. Once Romonus finished his campaign against Heaven and God, and all of the angels had been killed, he got to looting. First, he claimed all of the souls of the dead angels that survived the Phosphex and he set his demons loose to pillage. Once all of God's treasures were taken, including the trees of knowledge and life, his demons were happy. While angel souls were one of the best commodities, he also harvested the souls of the believers of God in heaven. That increased his soul stores by a substantial amount. Though, his demons also collected the angels' halos, weapons, armor, and even wings were cut off. Once heaven was taken for all it was worth and the Garden of Eden was ripped out, Romonus began to absorb heaven itself. Heaven had been formed from God's divinity, essentially making it part of him. With the death of its master, Romonus wanted to form his own divine domain. He could have warped heaven to his needs, but he didn't want to bother, so he absorbed the energy that God had used to create heaven, not to let any of it go to waste. When he was done, heaven was just a memory as the angels in heaven were extinct. Once the campaign was over, the demons began to return to Lucifade with their dark offerings to their master. More skulls for the Skull Throne were added to the mountain in Lucifade. Aside from Lilith and Leviathan, no one lived in Lucifade as Romonus had killed them all. The 2 women watched as angelic skulls were piled high. Lilith merely sighed and avoided looking at the demons, while Leviathan began to feel something. With each skull she saw added, she began to rub her neck. She wondered if her end would simply end with her skull on that throne. Lost to the pile, never to be remembered in the long run. Regardless, once the skulls were offered to Romonus' Skull Throne, and the campaign in heaven was done, Romonus moved his legion against another pantheon. This time, he moved against the Celtic realms, which was where Sylvana's mother and patron god were from. Unlike the Greek pantheon and heaven who were caught unaware, the Celtic pantheon had brought their army to face him directly. All of the gods had prepared as best they could because there was truly no being on the planet who could oppose Romonus in single combat. Even still, the gods knew that it was better to die in combat than to die like cattle. When the grand army of the Celtic pantheon had formed, Romonus was tempted to release his demonic legions without mercy. However, it seemed that Khorne was feeling restless, so he allowed the badger to start the attack. When the small badger had walked forward on his now longer legs, the Celtic army felt they were being mocked. How could this small creature possibly kill their divine army? Yet, they soon realized that it would have been better to be killed by the demons. The instant Khorne released his restraints, his rage heart that never stopped burning was released. A tidal wave of rage began to burst from the badger, causing his body to bulge and twist. Khorne, during his time adapting to Romonus' godly soul, had focused on his rage heart. Now, his rage came infused with infernal divinity, and through the pact he shared with his master, was always ready for a fight. In a matter of moments, Khorne went from being a small little critter with the heart of a berserker to a creature the size of a titan. In a grand display of carnage, he charged as a cyclone of blood, rage, and hate into the heart of the army. Each swipe of his crystalline claws launched waves of rage energy, killing all. The gods themselves rushed at this creature to put him down, but even their divine weapons would not pierce Khorne's thick fur and skin. When they did pierce through, it was only a few inches, which spilled blood boiling from the rage felt by the badger every second or every day. Once the attack was started, Romonus set his demons loose, who bellowed great oaths of blood and rushed in after Khorne. Grimaldus instantly rushed to fight next to Khorne as his living mechanical flesh began to expand much like Khorne. Once he was the same size as Khorne, he released his deadly weapons except Phosphex. Using that substance freely would cause it to make the planet uninhabitable too soon. If used without consideration, the stuff would burn for decades without going out. Even in the grim darkness of 40K, phosphex is practically outlawed because of the danger. However, that did not mean that Karn's multitude of other deadly weapons were not up to the task of massaging worlds. Including the forbidden magics of Azzi-Dahaka, and even Mephiston, the weakest of Romonus familiars, was a beast in combat. In a matter of a few minutes, the entire army of the Celtic gods were butchered when they faced Romonus' legion in combat. Every single one of his demons had been formed from Romonus' immortal self, so they shared his immortality. Only by fully destroying the bodies, souls, and essences of the demons could they be put down, but Romonus always healed them before they reached that point. Even if they were killed, he could turn back time to before they died and bring them back. This essentially made his army, a giant army of immortals that would regenerate from any wound, felt no pain, and were fiercely dedicated to their slaughter. Once released into the battle, they went in spurred by the brutality of the angry ones. Even Azzi-Dahaka began to buff them while he stayed back with Romonus standing on his back. With all these advantages, the armies of the Celtic gods were massacred in a few short brutal minutes. The gods who went against Romonus were not only killed but also refined to enhance the abilities of his lovers. To upgrade his domains, he absorbed Erewhon not just to upgrade his battle domain, but also his death domain. Erewhon was just one god who fell, as several other gods and spirits of death existed in the Celtic pantheon. Some of them were also gods of war and battle, which made them even better material for Romonus. Don, St. Morton, two other gods of death aside from Erewhon who fell. For gods of war, Romonus slayed Neat, the Morrigan, Caturix, and Mars Nabetius, four Celtic war deities, to enhance his battle domain. Already more than 20 gods had been consumed and Romonus' power was swelling to an absurd degree. Romonus checked to make sure that he was not harming himself, but he was perfectly fine. While he was in the Celtic lands, he didn't even spare Baylor, who would one day be sealed into Gaspar for Biden Baylor view. His destructive power was used to upgrade the destruction domain. He also helps his lovers with him. For Aquino, she killed the lightning and storm god Tyrannes and he helped her absorb his divine essence. Nisilud, with the aid of the demons, tracked down and in single combat, killed Kale Leech, the personification of winter. Seekvera, after absorbing Cronus, had been amped up on his divine energy and had her time abilities enhanced to absurd levels. Using this new power, she fought Dagda, the brother of Lugh the sun god, the god of the seasons and time. Speaking of Lugh, Romonus absorbed his divine essence as well as it would come into use later when he built his sun forge. Though, Romonus was proud that his lovers did not need him to fight for them. All of them, after many years of training in the time chamber and Valerie's modifications, were absolute powerhouses. Even more so after consuming gods that matched their specific abilities. Romonus would need to help the girls who set off on their own to do the same unless they were doing this already. Regardless, Natsum didn't need any gods to consume, as it was better for her to just feed Griffin the Cheonchi. The more the evil fiend fed, the more power was available to her. Thanks to her strong will, she was not affected by the brutal thoughts of her sacred gear. However, he could tell that she was not holding back as much as before. It was like she was allowing herself to be affected on purpose. He would need to ask her about it later, but regardless, he decided to hold off. While he was here, he did collect more gods that matched the abilities of his lovers and kept them in stasis in his giant spatial ring. He also had to deal with the Surzekas peerage had taken with him. They could be useful in the long run, but he still had not decided what to do with them yet. However, he did not delay long and moved to continue his campaign. This time, he moved over the sea to the Americas. There, he waged a war against the Aztec gods and the gods of the Native Americans, and then he went to South America to fight another war against the Incan gods. In quick succession, one after the other, those pantheons and their armies were destroyed. When those pantheons were slaughtered along with the Greeks, Celtics, and Christians, Romonus once more moved. This time, to Africa, which made him feel like he was Alexander the Great waging a campaign against the known world. In his case, he was waging war against a world without mercy. With each successful campaign, Romonus' power continued to surge ever higher. Not only that, but the Skull Throne in Lucifade grew with each battle. The demons kept adding to it, and by now, Lilith and Leviathan, who had remained in Lucifade, were seeing that the skull offerings were starting to speed up. The speed at which Romonus fought and the brutality of it had increased. Now, the skulls numbered in the millions. Leviathan in particular had decided to get rid of any thought of retribution. If she even tried, she knew that her skull would be added to that sick throne by those demons. As she watched them pile the skulls higher and higher, she could tell they felt pure joy at this. It had a truly profound effect on her, as currently, Romonus was off waging another campaign against the Germanic gods. Leviathan and Lilith were standing near the skull throne as demons began to open portals as they dropped pile after pile of skulls. Some were the skulls of gods, others were the blessed divine soldiers of the gods, while others were just normal mortals who decided to fight against them. Lilith crossed her arms as she looked at Leviathan at her feet. The former Satan kneeled at the skull throne with her head down. She clasped her hands together and began to pray to Romonus of all people. Are you praying? Leviathan didn't open her eyes, but she nodded. I am. I didn't take you for a believer, not after what happened with the rebellion and things. Leviathan opened her eyes and stood up before turning around and turning her back to the skull throne. Lilith, look at what this is. Lilith looked at the skull throne as a portal opened with several demon knights and even a demon prince dropping off his offering of skulls. A pile of skulls. The demon prince snarled as he turned his head. With a snarl, he corrected her. Not a pile. A skull throne. At his bellow, all the other demons bellowed back. Skulls for the skull throne. Souls for the master. Lilith bowed. I apologize for the slight. With a snarl, the demon prince ignored her after dropping off his skulls. Once the demons were finished, they returned to Romonus for the next campaign in Australia. He was not going to spare a single pantheon, no matter where they were. All that mattered was power, and he would get it at any cost. Chapter 104, A Melancholic God. Once Romonus finished off the Australian pantheon of gods, he returned to Lucifade where the skull throne continued to grow. Seeing the throne continue to grow with each campaign of slaughter was cathartic in a way. Just like his power, the throne represented his insatiable desire for more power. Currently, Rahvdall was standing behind the throne like a mighty guardian while Canon and Grimalda sat on his shoulders. As for Mephiston, the griffin was lying down at his feet like a cat, which relaxed his soul. As his demons took their positions throughout the crumbling city and Romonus sat on his throne of slaughter, he decided that it was time to speed things up. Once he sat down on the skulls that formed his throne, he used his connection to all his lovers to call them back to his side. We are speeding things up, I need you all to return to Lucifade and pronto. He didn't wait for a response. As he opened his eyes he could feel Leviathan and Lilith looking up at him from the base of the skull throne. When he looked down, he squinted his eyes. What is it? Lilith began to walk up the mountain of skulls, taking care to look at each individual that made up this macabre creation. There were millions of skulls and each one was a reminder of the brutality of the god she now called master. Only a truly deranged psychopath would take pleasure in such a sight. When she finally reached the top where Romonus sat on a throne formed of skulls, she looked down at the massive griffin at his feet. The creature was 30 meters long and covered in dark purple, bright gold, and blood-red feathers and fur. His beak seemed to glimmer like metal, and that was not counting the giant three-headed dragon behind Romonus. Even now, he could see that Rahvdall was smirking at her, mocking her. Even the little things on Romonus' shoulders seemed to see her as nothing more than a pest. As for Romonus himself, he didn't even look at her at all. When she looked at his eyes, they were a shade of purple so dark that they seemed like glittering dark gemstones, and those 8-pointed stars in them blazed with divine energy. To her, Romonus was what she expected would happen if a demon ever became a god. What is it, Lilith? Even without looking at her, he could see everything. Do you feel any remorse for what you are doing, my lord? None at all. Why? Because I am a demon, I will never regret my actions, I will never think of what ifs. When I decide to take a life, destroy a planet, or wipe out a race, it is my will alone and I need to never regret it. Lilith nodded as she bowed to him. I meant no disrespect. I took none. As Romonus was thinking, he sensed Myria teleport back to Lucifade along with his demons. When his demons arrived they began to drop off the skulls they had collected in the Norse realms. The skulls of humans, elves, dwarves, giants, trolls, and so many more. Myria, when she teleported in without skipping a beat, arrived at the skull throne before jumping up to where Romonus sat. I am back. As she walked over to Romonus she first ruffled Mephiston's feathered head before she sat down on Romonus' lap. Canon and Grimalda simply moved off his shoulders to sit on the throne itself as he wrapped his arms around her. Did you have fun? You bet I did. I electrocuted Thor to death, beat Odin to a bloody pulp, and ripped Loki's head off. Oh, and I even decided to take Sleipnir as my mount. Before I forget, here. She pulled out Gungnir and the sword of Surtur for him. Brought these for you. Now that he considered it a good gift. Thank my love. Look after Sleipnir, okay? Myria nodded as she took a moment to relax before looking at Lilith. So what do you plan to do with her? Romus glanced at Lilith before snorting. Probably nothing. Myria got off Romonus's lap as he was acting weird. Are you saying you don't find her hot? Lilith was not sure what was happening, but she stayed silent. I do, but just because she is hot doesn't mean I find her worthy to join my harem. Romonus stood up from his throne as more of his lovers began to teleport in the center of Lucifade in front of his throne. Latia, Walburga, Serafal, Roygun, Sylvana, Vespera, Valerie, Itsuki, Kuroka, Chiron, Rias, Venelana. Aquino, Natsum, and Sikvera also joined back with the entire family who seemed to be looking up at the skull throne. Latia was a big fan while someone like Valerie who was still much kinder than the rest seemed a little dejected at the sight. Romanus sighed as he stood up from his throne before walking down to join back with his family. I know it is dark, I didn't even order it made. Valerie could tell he was telling the truth, but when she looked at his soul, to her it looked like a purple star. A truly divine creation that showed his godhood. You're telling the truth, can't you tell your demons to stop doing this thing? Latia turned her head to Valerie like she was speaking something horrible. Oh come on, don't be boring. A demon god needs a skull throne. Vespera grinned as she saw the towering state of the throne. I do have to agree with Latia, this throne just seems awesome. What do you all think? Walburga shrugged. Seems a bit edgy. Rias just pointed at Romanus. Romanus is an edgelord, or did you miss that? Romanus now felt offended, but in a sense, he could be called an edgelord. He just didn't think he was fake like those, as he was just demonic. Can we not call me an edgelord? Rahvdall shook her head. No can do, that name is going to stick from now on. Anyway, what is left? Romus was almost done in this world. We just need to end the Hindu pantheon, the Japanese, Chinese, and while we are here loot this world for all it is worth. Let us hurry so we can return home. Venelana did have a question. Son, I get doing all this to be stronger to face those foes you have talked about, but what happens after that? Do you plan to start traveling to other realities? Probably, since I do owe Rahvdall. He allowed me to be this strong and I plan to not let the debt go unpaid. Plus, when you are immortal, finding a pastime would be useful. Finding new realities and new sets of power has been a desire of mine for a time. But to achieve that, power is needed and it will not be enough. Rias remembered all the anime, manga, and comic books she had read in her spare time. So, all those fictional stories could be real. Of course, that is how the omniverse works, I think. Regardless, I need to hurry since I want to leave this world already. A wave of his intent roused his demons, who once more gathered ready to add to the skull throne. Seeing those powerful creatures, Sylvana wanted to know what would happen if she fought with them. To answer your question, Sylvana, I say you have what it takes to take down one of my greater demons. Your abilities can maybe get past the immortality of my demons. Sylvana liked the sound of that. I am glad to hear that, guess our training has been good for a reason. Romanus nodded as in a burst of infernal divinity he returned to his demon form as towering as Great Red. It was the same size as Azzy, who was also a giant in his own right. Romanus waved his hand and tore open a portal to India. He turned to his head to address his lovers. You do not need to join me, but if you want you can. Rias jumped off the ground and onto his giant shoulder. I will go with you, but I know for a fact there won't be anything for me to do. If you move like this, you will kill everything by yourself. He looked down and he could see all his lovers felt the same. Romanus was the strongest because of his demon bloodline, his ascension to godhood and how many gods he had devoured. He was only going to continue, so once no one other than Rias chose to go with him, he left with his familiars and his demons. When he was gone, Roygun crossed her arms as she turned to her fellow harem members. She sighed as she could tell Romanus was feeling a bit down. He loves being strong, but he hates being the strongest. I mean, throughout his life has he ever been challenged? Venelana now thought back to her son when he was little. Back then he had plenty of foes, but after he became a demon he had lost any challenge. He had grown stronger and stronger with nearly no limit. Now that he ascended to godhood, he had even fewer foes to challenge him. She could sense a true melancholy in her son because he had always wanted to fight a battle to the death. A fight to push him to the limit, something to make him feel alive, and he had been denied that. No, he hasn't. I think he came to this world expecting a challenge, but all he faced was disappointment. My boy. Romanus was not like Cerzex, who loved peace. Romanus had the heart of a fighter. A peaceful world without conflict was the worst thing that could have happened to Romanus. No one to fight, no one to kill, no one to push him. She sighed as she knew Romulus would keep looking for a fight to test him. Latia, as Romanus' first fiancée, walked over to Venelana and patted her on the shoulder. We shouldn't worry too much about Romanus, he will eventually find what he is looking for. I guarantee it, and when he finally gets that fight he craves, I know the grin on his face will be ear to ear. So, what do we do until our husband returns to us? When she said the word husband, that seemed to set off a light bulb in the eyes of these girls. Sikvera now thought about it. When are we going to get married? Romanus is past 18 and we are all adults. Shouldn't we get married soon? Chiron nodded. Let's plan it. Kuroka smiled as she looked around. That sounds like fun. While Romanus went off to war, his lovers began to plan his wedding. That would most likely make Romanus quite happy, as he did want to be a husband. He much prefers his lovers to be his wives. What he would look forward to was the honeymoon. Plus, he still had to look forward to the distant future when he became a father. While they planned a wedding for everyone, Romanus was currently in the thick of it in India. He set his demons loose, and he was currently attacking Svarga, the realm of Indra followed by his demons and familiars. Rias, who sat on his shoulder, watched everything with awe, as seeing the way her brother fought was brutal. Any god that came against him was cut down in 3 blows as he held back to enjoy himself. It didn't matter what god moved to challenge him, either Ruin Maker took their heads after cleaving their arms off, or Malakota ripped out hearts. It was brutal, but even she could tell that there was a growing sense of rage in her brother's eyes. He was bellowing roars of challenge, hoping someone could match him even for a minute. Weak. Why is everyone so weak? Fight me. Challenge me. Give me a fight. The more gods and their armies died, the more angry he became. When was he going to be challenged? When Svarga was looted and the gods devoured and dead, he roared to the sky, shaking the planet in his rage. Next. While still in the Hindu pantheon, he moved against the Asuras and Shiva, which meant more gods to slay. Shiva lasted longer than the rest, but even then they all died by his hand. When it was time to go, he moved to the Chinese pantheon as if no one could match him. More gods would have to fill the void of a good fight. Chapter 105, A Real Chao Lang. When Romonus and his army got done with the Hindu pantheon, including Shiva and his faction, he moved toward one of the final pantheons remaining in this ravaged world. The Chinese pantheon, which considered a rather strong one, and instantly the Jade Emperor and the Celestial Court moved to meet him in combat. In his youth, Romonus had wanted to become a cultivator since he thought it would make him much stronger. That was before Rahvdall gave him the Sparta bloodline, which he loved and appreciated. He just hated how it took away the danger of dying. It even made him far stronger than anyone at his level or above because he was so damn hard to kill. Valerie did not help either by enhancing all of that, but he was grateful to the lovely Damper. Not only was she adorable and sexy when she was bashful, but her abilities were also broken. Instead of focusing on what he didn't have, he focused on what he did, which was absolute power in this small world. Romonus continued to lead his vast demonic legion and his familiars through the pantheons of gods. Already, the pantheons of North America, South America, Africa, Europe, Australia, and now Asia would all die. The more gods that he killed, the more cataclysmic events continued to devastate the world because of how many gods he had murdered. When he made it to China, with his demons, Azzy began to chuckle at what he was seeing. Look at that, the Chinese, Korean, and Japanese all decided to work together. Isn't that adorable? Romonus sighed as he looked at his last foes in this world, other than maybe Ophis, Trihexa, and Great Red, if they graced him with a fight. Thus far, the dragon gods of this universe had not bothered him yet. He was kind of hoping they would, but instead here he was having to exterminate weak gods. Rias, who was sitting on his shoulder, looked at how bored he seemed. You okay? No, I am not. I am a battle maniac, and yet I lack fun battles. It is the worst kind of hell for someone like me. Rias smiled as she had an idea to make him happy. Tell you what, when we get home and you start doing your paperwork, I will give you some service to motivate you. Does a blowjob from your sister sound nice? She even stuck her tongue out, and for a guy with an incest fetish like him, that did sound nice. Even better than nice, since it was coming from his twin. Yes, it does. Guess I better finish this up fast. He turned to address the army of gods, which included Tsukiyomi, Amaterasu, Jade Emperor, and many more gods he didn't want to bother to name. Rather than deal with them, he just drew on his domain of destruction and void. I have decided to just not play. The end. At his words, a giant rolling black hole formed above his head before fusing with the manifestation of pure destruction. The process was instant before he released the power, causing a wave of pure destruction to not just obliterate the army of gods, but destroying all of Asia. Romonus did not forget to gather all of the released divine energy into a concentrated orb of the stuff. He might find a use for it, as he felt stuff from all the gods he had consumed. He would need some time to truly relax and fully understand how much stronger he was. Rias blinked a few times as her brother simply stopped playing with his food. With that, he had effectively killed every single god other than the ones he captured for his girls. With his victory here, Romonus' time in this world was over. With a sigh, he returned to his human form, causing Rias to fall into his arms. He lowered his head and pressed his face into her huge breasts. The world is sad and hard, but boobs are happy and soft. Rias smiled as she wrapped her arms around his head. Are you still sad that everyone around you is weak? Yes, it is hell, but then how can I let myself be sad when I still have my sexy sister with me? With a blush, Rias pulled him in for a kiss, which made Azzy Dahaka retch. Gross, get a room. Romonus scoffed as he pulled back from the kiss to address the giant dragon. Just cause you're sad and single doesn't mean the rest of us are. He put Rias down, but not before giving the finger to Azzy Dahaka. Azzy just returned the favor, which reminded Romonus why he liked the big dragon. Though with Romonus back to his normal self, Azzy shrunk himself down and landed on his shoulder. With a thought, Archaon returned to Romonus' soul with the rest of his profane gear, leaving just Romonus in his black leather suit. Karn, Grimaldus, and Mephiston gathered around him as he teleported them all back to Lucifade, or what remained of it. With the end of the gods, his time in this world was coming to an end. When he returned to Lucifer, he relaxed, as it was not good to get caught up in the fact he was so powerful. Instead, he should be grateful for his power, because more power is always better. It was not like he was willing to seal himself to make fights more fun. He would just need to search for proper foes in the future, which he would find someday. Though, when he and his demon legion returned to Lucifer, his lovers were waiting for him and Rias. All of them approached him as he sighed and he shook his head. You know, I fully expected more of a challenge. Though, it was not to be. Venelana walked toward him, grabbed him by his shirt, and pulled him down. It was kind of hard, as he was still 7 feet 5 inches, so he allowed himself to shrink back to his usual 6 feet 10 inches. When Venelana got him, she stuck her tongue out and gave him a sloppy kiss. The kiss was in no way what a mother and son should share, but devils and demons didn't care. When Venelana stopped kissing him, she held his face close. You will find your fight someday, Romonus. I am sure of it. With a smile, he leaned in and rested his head against hers. Thanks, Mom. Well, I think we are done in this world. We can all return home. Suddenly, the demons began to panic as they looked at their proud skull throne. One after the other they pointed at the throne they had worked hard to make. Seeing the sadness in these demons' eyes, which were essentially his children, made Romonus sigh. And we will bring the skull throne with us, of course. One after the other his demons cheered that their proud icon was not going to go to waste. With a shake of his head, Romonus started to look around Lucifer. You know, I just thought of something. Latia, you need more materials for your creations, right? Latia nodded. Yeah, more metal for my demon engines. Why? Romonus smiled as he had an idea. Then, why don't we take the entire underworld of this world with us? Sikvera gasped at the scale of what Romonus was suggesting, but it would work. The underworld is vast and nearly endless, and adding another dimension to our Earth won't cause issues either. Even Sylvana had use for this underworld. I would be able to keep hunting the monsters to add to my undead legion. Romonus, how hard will this be for you? Not hard at all. Me and Azzy should be able to get it done in a few hours. While Berga hummed as her cat tails began to wag behind her. In that case, mind if I help? Can't let you and 3 heads do all the magic now, can I? Azzy, who was resting on Romonus' shoulder, chuckled. Sure, help us, crazy girl, and slow our work down. Romonus turned to look at Azzy, who looked down on other mages. He was one of the best mages around when it came to forbidden magic, and he was beyond intelligent. However, while Berga was not dumb either and rather talented in the path of magic. Be nice, Azzy. Fine. Let us hurry this up since I want to go home. Anyone else want to help? Aquino smiled as she walked forward while letting Romonus do it would be quick. It could be a fun challenge. Sounds fun. Sikvera and Latia decided to join in with Azzy, who was going to coach them in this. As for Romonus, with the mage girls wanting to take a crack at making a spell to take the underworld, he decided to spend some time with the rest of his lovers. He waved a hand and created a large table for them all to sit. Once everyone was seated, he turned to address them all. I think I want to get married. Miria hummed as they had just been talking about this. Did you overhear us? No. In my head, I keep calling you all lovers, but I rather that change to my wives. Would you all do me the honor of marrying me? Roygun chuckled before reaching across the table to hold his hand. Of course, you big dummy, we were going to ask you if you wanted to get married first, but here you go getting the jump on us. Latia herself leaned forward with a smirk. I get to kiss you first on the wedding day, right, since I am the first fiancé and I did let you have a harem. Sylvana pointed at herself. Then I should be second since I am the second official fiancé. The rest of you are only girlfriends. Venelana shook her head. Hey, I am his mom and soon his wife. So, without me, there would be no Romonus. While Berga turned her head at that moment. Hear yourself talk. If you were human you would be thrown in jail. Venelana though had no shame. Hey, I am a devil, a creature of sin and lust. Who cares what humans would do? Vespera, who was sitting nearby, turned into a small bat before flying over to Romonus and landing on his head. Well, shouldn't I, his ancestor, also be called more than a girlfriend? I used to be his sword for a time before he saved me, like my demonic knight in spiky armor. Rias also got up and grabbed his arm. That is my brother, I should marry him after Mom. This kept going back and forth, which made Romonus smile. No need to rush, I will marry all of you, and if you want, give you double weddings. One for all of us as a family, and private ones dedicated to you, my queens. Suddenly, Romonus felt a powerful presence teleport at his table. When he turned his head he saw this reality Ophis. She was tall, not as tall as the great red he had met, but she was still around 6 feet 2 inches. Image here. She looked like an adult version of herself, making her quite attractive. Ophis. What is it? All of his fiancées, as he would now call them, turned their heads to look at this dragon god. Ophis raised her head to look at him with not a care in the world. "You're the strongest left now." Romonus stood up as he looked at Ophis. "I hate to disappoint, but I am not going to fight Great Red for you." Ophis squinted her eyes as she looked at him. "You must." "No." Romonus' mind suddenly clicked as he found what he was looking for. He grinned and he started walking toward Ophis. "I think you answered my prayers. I wanted to fight someone strong and you were just the person for the job." When he stood in front of her, Ophis met his gaze as if she was not going to cower. Right now, Romonus felt joy when someone came to challenge him. Would he finally feel the rush he so craved in a fight to the death? Chapter 106, Fighting an Equal at Last. When Ophis looked up into Romonus' eyes, she could see that the 8 eight-pointed stars in them were spinning. His face was split by a bloody grin that desired nothing more than to fight. His emotions right now were so volatile anything would set him off. Realizing they would probably be in danger, his fiancées all made the sound choice to teleport away to safety. Ophis on the other hand was collected as always, but out of nowhere, Romonus lost his patience. He pulled his arm back and he threw a powerful punch with the full force he could manage to Ophis' chin. He hit her with such strength that he broke the dimensional barriers and threw Ophis out of the underworld. Ophis still kept her collected expression as her back hit the moon, causing it to shatter into many pieces. She sat up unharmed as Romonus had not hit her, he had hit the infinity that surrounded her body. Much like Gojo's infinity, only at a much higher level, but now she was angry. Her expression was filled with a scowl as she looked down as Romonus leapt after her, jumping out of the underworld and onto Earth. With a bellowing roar that shook the planet, he bent his legs down and he leapt into space after Ophis. "Come. Fight me." Ophis stood up and when Romonus reached her she pulled her arm back with that same scowl. "Fine." He just pulled his arm back before throwing a brutal haymaker at Ophis' pretty face. Her eyes began to shimmer in a much lighter shade of purple that seemed nearly pink. She leaned back to avoid the punch, but Romonus saw that coming and he raised his left leg and kicked her head with a deadly kick. Once again he hit a layer of infinity around her, not hurting her, but throwing her through one of the large chunks of the moon. Ophis using her legs braced on nothing, but she stopped as she rushed toward Romonus. "Can you stop?" Romonus, seeing that, just grinned even more as he began to glow a deep dark purple. He bent forward as his infernal divinity began to surge out of his body. He roared once again as his aura began to compress itself down around him as he drew on his demonic Tuki. He kicked off one of the sections of the moon and he appeared in front of Ophis once again. He pulled his arms back and he threw a hammer fist at her head. This time, she blocked it as she raised her arms to catch his blow. When his attack met her infinity, his infernal divinity, and the infinity reacted in an explosion that exploded out into the void, destroying Earth and Venus and throwing Mars out of its orbit. Most importantly, her arms were touching Romonus. He had broken through her infinity, but when his demon god flesh met her dragon god flesh, they both resisted. Ophis and Romonus began to push against each other in a contest of strength, causing space around them to start to strain with a groan. Ophis squinted her eyes as she began to put more force into her arms, which pushed against Romonus. As the dragon god of infinity, she was nigh invulnerable and possessed strength that very few could match. However, Romonus as a demon god was one of those beings, as he was matching her strength. In her life, Ophis other than Great Red, a fellow dragon god, had not been challenged like this. Interesting. Ophis pulled her arms back, lowered her center of gravity and punched Romonus straight in the sternum. He got thrown back through the void, forcing him to extend his fingers to grab onto the fabric of space. He coughed as he felt his entire sternum crack down the middle. "I felt that." When he stood up he bent back, popping his back. His potent regenerative factor healed the damage. "I felt that I have not felt pain since I became a demon. No one has hurt me, but you did. I know you can do it, Ophis. You can push me to my limits." Ophis sighed as she saw his face. Battle junkies were the worst for a pacifist like her. "Can we not? Please." Romonus stood up and popped his knuckles before he began to grin. "My armored, equip me." "No, Archaon, leave this me. I want to fight against Ophis, body to body, demon god versus dragon god." "By your will." With that out of the way, Romonus began to walk through the void of space. "No can do. Neither of us has put any effort, let's take this up a level. I will keep attacking until you defend yourself." Ophis, who had her arms crossed, seemed to sigh before she uncrossed them. When he looked at her eyes, they went from bored and unfocused to completely focused. "Goo dash." Before he could finish speaking, Ophis moved and arrived in front of him. Her extended hand was covered in void energy. However, it was very different from Romonus, as it seemed to be a space filled with nothingness that a mortal mind could comprehend. Of course, his mind was far from mortal, but rather than defend he took her punch with his face. Rather than an explosion, it was more like a wave of reality erasing power struck him directly in the face, erasing his head off his shoulders. Even without a brain, his nervous system and his immortal soul reacted for him. He drew on his domain of destruction as a mixture of dark crimson-purple energy covered his leg. His knee struck Ophis in the stomach, causing her to keel over as much as her previous attack. Her stomach was just destroyed. Thanks to her attack, there was nothing around them, but Romonus just added to the damage. They split from each other as Ophis looked at the empty section of her stomach. Romonus had never in his life lost his head, so this was a new experience. From the stump of his neck, a new head popped out, causing him to touch it. Ophis placed a hand over the missing section of her stomach, which filled in without bleeding. The last time Ophis was injured was when she challenged Great Red for the dimensional gap. Romonus began to smile as he held his new head. I lost my head, someone destroyed my head. I am fighting with my life on the line, this is what I have looked for. As for Ophis, she looked up at Romonus with more respect in her gaze. As she looked around them at the lack of reality, she hummed. Is this going to be a battle to the death? If it is, I am just going to run away. Romonus smiled as he looked at Ophis. You seriously are boring. Don't you feel the rush in a fight? Ophis shook her head. I rather not. How about the loser who does whatever the winner says? I win and you help me kick Great Red out of the gap. And I win and you become my eternal sparring partner. I can agree to that. With that, Romonus breathed out as a concept of destruction began to rage off of him. He combined it with the concept of death, causing it to darken, causing him to destroy and kill reality around them. He then activated his domain of battle, causing his already great power to increase. His muscles began to bulge, and his domain of magic caused all three domains to start, causing a storm of elemental power to rage around him. When he activated his void domain, it mixed with the necrotic aura of destruction and magic before his omnipotence domain enhanced all five to make him all-powerful, which would match Ophis' concept of infinity. She had infinite energy, infinite strength, durability, and more. When Ophis saw the void energy mixing with his new aura, she actually smiled. Seems you're like me. When she released her power, her name the Ouroboros dragon made more sense. Around her, he could feel some very powerful abilities, mainly infinity, eternity, nothingness, and chaos all at once. Both their auras began to push against each other in a powerful clash that caused the entire solar system to incinerate. Romonus and Ophis rushed at each other, and when their fists met, it was absolute devastation. The solar system was just gone and everything else in it was also destroyed. As for the underworld, before he had left he had reinforced it so it was still fine, but it would not be if he and Ophis kept this up. But at this point, Romonus was far too focused on his brawl. He and Ophis continued to throw powerful punches that had everything they had. Omnipotence and infinity were quite similar concepts, and when in battle, they matched each other. Romonus the demon god and Ophis the dragon god were perfect foes. His aura compressed itself around him as he raised his hands. Around his arms, this aura became volatile as it was as if he had supermassive black holes as arm braces. Ophis forced the infinity around her to compress, causing the infinity between herself and Romonus to be filled with nothingness. When they rushed at each other, Romonus lowered his center of gravity as he launched a left and right hook at her head. She raised her arms and caught his hits before she found an opening. She threw an uppercut that hit his chin with such force it forced him to look up. However, he looked down with one eye as he spun around and kicked the side of Ophis' head. Romonus put his full power in that blow, causing Romonus all-powerful to clash with the infinity. The power clashes once again broke the dimensions around them, causing them to no longer be in space. They were in the place between dimensions where they did not need to go easy. Romonus without hesitating returned to his true demonic form, which after his ascension to godhood seemed something an eldritch god would have. Seeing that Ophis released her true form, which turned out to be a giant dragon covered in dark eyes, Romonus suspected that anyone not at his level or above would have their minds torn apart to look at Ophis in this state. When they had another domain clash, this time concepts that mortals took as all-powerful began to not matter. Even Romonus in his true demon form began to lack a true form, as he seemed like a living force of death and destruction. He and Ophis rushed at each other once more as they began to warp reality, or the nothingness between realities. From his back, 12 pairs of demonic wings surged with infernal divine energy. With a twitch, he reached Ophis, striking her scaled chest and destroying her barrier. When his fist hit her chest, it caused the eyes that covered her to explode along with the scales and flesh underneath. However, he learned something interesting as Ophis used the concept of nothingness to reduce the damage she took to nothing. She did face resistance because the death and destruction that Romonus used were fighting back against her nothingness. The eyes that covered Ophis' form began to light up before she opened her mouth and blasted Romonus with a dragon breath of pure infinity, nothingness, and void. To match it, Romonus gathers energy in his hands: death, destruction, omnipotence. When both attacks clash, the result was instant as the two eldritch gods was obliterated, erased, destroyed, and killed all at the same time. The energy clash continued with neither stopping the clash. Soon, Ophis' eyes lit up as they released hundreds of blasts that joined her breath to overpower Romonus. Romonus opened his mouth as he added to his attack while all over his body, all-devouring maws began to open. Like Ophis, they add to the concept clash that continues to build up power for tense moments. Eventually, all the concepts being used lost equilibrium and they implode. This forced Ophis and Romonus out of the nothingness between realities. When the energy settles down around them, Romonus and Ophis are covered in massive wounds that were bleeding heavily. Romonus' immortality and Ophis' nothingness struggle to heal themselves as a result. They focused on their wounds, forcing them closed. When their wounds were tended to, Romonus raised his 6 arms, which began to glow as he drew on his enuncia. Ophis snarled as all over her body, more eyes began to open with the symbols of infinity, null, and void. This meant they were going for victory. Honestly, as I wrote this I wanted to avoid Ophis being in the harem, but damn, it seems it is impossible. Oh well. She's cool. Chapter 107, 2 More Dragon Gods. With Romonus releasing the power of his Venusian tattoos, his strength swelled to levels few in his universe could match, if any. As for Ophis, much like him, all her eyes now had symbols representing her concepts and abilities. With both of them now planning on defeating the other, they moved toward each other many times faster than light. Reality around them screamed in agony as Romonus and Ophis continued to fight. Romonus extended his palms like swords as his claws extended. He began to swing his arms as if he lacked bones, which he swiped and slashed at Ophis. His claws sliced through scales and flesh alike, but it was not like he was not taking damage. Ophis seemed to be learning as she flexed her fingers before rushing at Romonus. She grabbed his shoulders, impaling her claws into his shoulders before injecting him with venom. Romonus, ignoring the feeling, brought up his knee as a spike extended, which pierced one of Ophis' eyes on her stomach and into her body. Both of them brought their heads forward as they locked horns in a strength clash. Their eyes locked onto each other as Romonus opened his mouth and bit Ophis' face. With a growl, she began to try to tear his arms off from his shoulders. He reinforced his arms with his domains, causing his muscles and bones to bulge with power. He Spartan kicked her with his free leg, splitting them up, but with a flap of her wings, Ophis flew into the air. Romonus growled as he chased after her, only for the dragon god to spin around and fly toward him. With an open maw, a potent dragon breath hit his titanic form. Without a sound, Romonus flew through the breath as parts of his body were erased. Ophis' many eyes across her boy seemed to open widely as he reached her. With his arms covered in his entire power, he punched Ophis' mouth. The explosion of energy sent her massive body flying through the nothingness. She shook it off as she teleported above Romonus. She smashed into his back before biting his right shoulder. She proceeded to perform a death roll, tearing off his entire arm in the process. The pain was immense, but Romonus spun around with his remaining arm and grabbed her lower jaw. With a grunt he tore off her lower jaw, causing both of them to start spewing blood into the nothingness. Ophis released his arm while he released her jaw. She called back her lower jaw while he pulled his arm back to reattach it. Once they were healed, they flew at each other once again to continue their brutal exchange. At this point, both were hungry for blood and they proceeded to brutalize each other. Wings were torn off, the flesh was punctured, internal organs pulled out, entire sections of their flesh were run through with massive holes, and even Romonus' demon heart had been torn out of his chest by Ophis. Romonus had been just as brutal, and he tore open Ophis' chest, ran his arm through her dragon heart, ripped off her tail, and broke her spine, and both her arms. When they pulled apart, Romonus looked into the empty place where his demon heart had been. Ophis had ripped it out along with all his organs, and he had returned the favor. Both of them were floating in the void as they began to pull their discarded flesh back. In his chest, a new demon heart regrew as good as new, and the rest of the missing chunks regenerated. Even Ophis, who he had brutalized, returned to her peak state. This was the expected outcome because their concepts seemed to counter each other perfectly. Omnipotence or all-powerful, vs infinity or endless. It was hard to put the other down, but if they kept this up they might end up fighting for days, weeks, months, or even years. There would be no end, as even when she fought Great Red, the fight had been long and just as brutal as this. It reminded her that battles between dragon gods and, as she now knew, demon gods never ended fast. They just had too many damn ways to negate damage, regenerate and heal. After hours of brutal fighting, she and Romonus were no closer to beating each other than they started. Romonus could not kill or destroy Ophis, while she could not reduce him to nothingness or erase him. Once they were back in top shape, they rushed once more to get into it. The fighting did not reduce in intensity for even a second this time, and the brutality seemed to have gone up a level. While the two of them kept fighting, Great Red in the dimensional gap snorted as he remembered this. Back when Ophis moved out of the gap, he moved in because it was isolated. Now, Ophis once again was in a fight with a demon god that was as strong as they were. If he fought Romonus other than Ophis, he might lose. Ophis' concepts just matched Romonus perfectly as they countered each other. As for his concept of dreams, he would be a match for Romonus, but then again, Romonus was not using his gear or his magic. This was just a slugfest, and if Romonus used Ruin Maker, Malakota, Archaon, and the Cursed Shield, the match would be very different. As such, he stayed out of it since this was not a battle to the death. If it did turn into a battle to the death, he expected Romonus would come out on top because of the many abilities he was not using. As such, Great Red just closed his eyes to relax as this had nothing to do with him. However, his thought process did not last as Ophis tackled Romonus straight into the dimensional gap. This was not intentional, but when they arrived, Great Red panicked as if they fought here they would call the Eviatold of this universe to them. With a roar, he rushed toward the two fighting gods to get them to stop. However, it seemed that someone else was drawn to the released energy as Trihexa, who had yet to be sealed, was drawn into the dimensional gap. Now, the dragon god of infinity, the beast of the apocalypse, the dragon of dreams, and the demon god of destruction were in for a brawl. Ophis was not happy and neither was Romonus. Romonus split from Ophis and instantly Archaon began to form around his body. Ruin Maker appeared in his right hand, Malakota in his left, and the cursed shield appeared on his left shoulder. Once he was in full war gear, it was obvious that he was no longer just sparring with Ophis. He was going in for the kill. Ophis, hold Trihexa back and I deal with Great Red. Fine. Unlike him, she wasn't humanoid, so using weapons was not for her. However, now Romonus was going to kill. Archaon, now involved in the battle, felt a rush flow through him. Though his rush could not compare to what Romonus was feeling. After 22 years alive, training to fight foes as powerful as him, he finally found them. He kicked off the ground toward Great Red, who as the Dragon of Dreams had slight omniscience as he knew most of everything in his universe. As long as being dreams he knew things, but much like Ophis, he was not going to go down easy. Romonus gripped Ruin Maker's handle as he reinforced his sword with infernal divinity. With a single hand, he pulled the titanic sword back. Demon God technique, dragon clever. When he unleashed his technique, the concentrated blade of infernal divinity rushed toward Great Red. The dragon god divine moved to create hundreds of the densest barriers he could, but Romonus' technique slashed through all of them. Great Red lunged to the side as the slash struck his right shoulder, tearing into his flesh. Unlike the fighting with Ophis, these attacks were going to be harder to heal because of his weapon. Romonus flapped his armored wings as he reached Great Red. He stabbed forward only for Great Red to strike the sentient spear aside. As the dragon god of dreams, other than omniscience, he could create matter, energy, life, or anything he desired. Using that power, he reinforced his scales and changed himself to be better suited for fighting. His size was reduced lightly, making him more streamlined and more maneuverable. His scales were compressed into a biological armor, and inside his body, hundreds of nerves grew, allowing his body to move on its own. With his preparations complete, Great Red roared, shaking the gap. He rushed at Romonus, who held his arms out in the come at me pose. He started to draw on the bloodline abilities he had gained before, combining them with his elements. Around his body, a storm of elemental devastation fused with his aura, including lightning, fire, ice, water, wind, star energy, and demonic light. All of them were released as he quickened at Great Red. The dragon god roared as he refused to be disrespected like this. Leave and never return. Romonus didn't bother to respond as he reached Great Red. He shrunk down to a smaller size before he started to use his smaller size to utilize his skill as a warrior. With his battle domain enhanced by his omnipotence domain, he was truly in the zone. The powers of the 7 Excaliburs flowed through Ruin Maker, enhancing each of his attacks. Romonus pulled both his weapons back as he activated another Demon God technique. Demon God technique, Fatales. He swung his weapons in an X shape, cutting straight into Great Red's back. The dragon god roared in pain as Romonus flew in with Malakota extended. He stabbed the Malbronze spear into the nape of Great Red before blasting the inside of his neck, causing a giant wound in the dragon god's neck. From Great Red's flesh, giant living draconic heads all rushed toward Romonus. He tore his spear out of Great Red as he spun and dodged as he sliced through the many extensions of Great Red. If that was all, Romonus could deal with it, but Great Red burst apart into a pure conceptual dream energy before reforming. Romonus rested Ruin Maker on his shoulder as he pointed at Malakota. He glanced at Ophis, who had been wrapped up by Trihexa's 7 heads. Her many eyes released potent beams of infinity, tearing through the wrapping heads. She is fine. He then teleported toward Great Red, kicking the giant dragon in the head. With Great Red off balance, Romonus pulled his arm back with his demonic spear. Demon God technique, Heaven Piercer. All his power rushed into his spear as he stabbed Great Red through his head, blasting the dragon's head and skull. An internal explosion burst through his head, but at the same moment, Great Red giant fist struck Romonus in the chest, cracking Archaon slightly. Romonus stopped his momentum as he saw Great Red heal. So this is what people feel when they attack me. It was like a battle between immortals, as they did not want to stay dead. Though, if he was being honest, it was in reality more than happy at finding foes to match him. It also reminded him that he needed to not be cocky. If just Great Red and Ophis were this hard to kill, what would Dream from DC or other powerful characters be like? It made his goal to travel the Omniverse to gain power of vital importance. This fight had single-handedly relit the fire in his heart that a lack of battles was causing. By the end of this fight, Romonus would not stop his training until he was standing at the top. Chapter 108, The End of Great Red and Trihexa. Once the fire and drive that was starting to flicker in Romonus' heart was relit, his domain seemed to have been magnified tens of times over, and the aura that radiated from him began to grow in intensity. The dimensional gap itself began to tremble as parts of it started to die before being destroyed. Great Red squinted his eyes as he saw that it seemed he was fighting a different person. Romonus held his weapons to his sides as he took a deep breath and got a feel for his power. All of the gods he had consumed, and the divinities he had plundered seemed to fully be assimilated by his domains at this point. On his weapons, the Enuncia runes began to change slightly as he added another aspect. The aspect of Dragon Slayer, Dragon Bane, and Dragon Hunter. When he opened his eyes, the 8-pointed stars in them stopped spinning. Go. With that single word, he blasted off toward Great Red on his 12 demonic wings. The dragon god didn't even manage to block or brace before Romonus slammed into his side. He roared in agony as Romonus plunged Ruin Maker into his flesh. The Enuncia had turned Malakota and Ruin Maker into divine dragon-slaying weapons. Great Red's flesh steamed and boiled, causing him agony, so he twisted as if boneless and he slammed his fist into Romonus, who was equal in size to him. Rather than dodge, he raised his left arm and blocked with the cursed shield. The strength of Great Red was boundless, but he was not the only one. Romonus, with a grin behind his helmet, began to grow larger as he not only tanked the blow, but he was pushing Great Red back. Archaon took this chance, and from his shoulders metallic tentacles extended and began to wrap around Great Red's arms. The mouths at the end began to bite into the scales as Archaon used the ability he plunged from Vritra's soul fragment in the absorption line. Great Red squinted his eyes as he began to feel not just his blood, but his conceptual energy begin to be drained toward Archaon. Great Red roared as he pulled back with all his strength, which caused Ruin Maker to dislodge from his flesh. Romonus threw all his weight back as he reached truly gigantic sizes exceeding Great Red. With Archaon having trapped one of Great Red's limbs in place and draining blood and conceptual energy, Romonus took his chance. He pulled his arm back and began to apply the aspects of omnipotence, death, destruction, void, magic, and battle into Malakota. Demon God Technique, Dream Ender. When he thought that, the brightly glowing Enuncia runes on Malakota turned to pitch black. Even then, he continued to feed the spear more infernal divinity, causing Malakota to cackle like an insane thing. I will end him. When Great Red felt that, he instantly began to put up barriers formed of dreams with the aspects of unbreakable, unpierced, unbroken, unmove, and many more. He brought into being the immovable object to defend himself from this. He opened his mouth and he bit down on the metal tendrils on his arm, shattering them. Archaon growled as the lost material began to regenerate. All of the blood and energy he took from Great Red was transferred to Romonus' body. The moment that Romonus' infernal divinity tasted the divine energy of Great Red, conceptual energy, it devoured it like a hungry shark. The same occurred to the blood as his demon god blood began to devour Great Red's to enhance itself. When that happened, Romonus put all his strength in the throw, causing Malakota to fly through the dimensional gap. As it did, it tore open the gap, causing its energies to begin to fall into real space. Great Red felt fear in the technique and he wanted to dodge. But Malakota smashed into his barriers that were supposed to be unbreakable. Malakota then made it through them like they were not even there. Great Red flapped his wings to get away, but Ophis tore herself from Trihexa and released a dragon breath that hit Great Red on the back. As a result, he was stopped in place, causing Malakota to pierce his armored chest. The demonic spear hit Great Red's dragon heart, bringing with it the power of divine dragon slaying. Normally, even losing his dragon heart would not kill him. He could recreate it, but the technique Dream Ender and all of Romonus' domains made it a lethal wound. From his heart, poison began to spread through his body and soul as the Dragon Slayer effect took effect. Romonus flew toward Great Red, who was struggling to keep his head up as he was dying. Romonus reached out with his hand and placed it on his head. You are strong, Great Red. I will not forget you among your infinite selves. You win, Demon God. Romonus then proceeded to stab his arm into Great Red's chest and rip out his dragon heart, putting an end to Great Red. When Great Red's soul left his body, Romonus drew it toward him and sealed it away for later use. As for Ophis, seeing Great Red dead, she grinned as she bit down on Trihexa's center head. With her arms, she grabbed 2 more before she drew in the power of the gap and her own infinity. From her eyes, mouth, and entire body a titanic burst of power vaporized huge chunks of Trihexa. Romonus then sent Great Red's corpse into his spatial ring as one of the biggest gains of this trip. Ophis separated herself from Trihexa, who healed from the devastating damage caused to it. With a roar, it wanted to charge back to Ophis, who it wanted to devour and might succeed in time, but Romonus moved to help. He blasted off toward Trihexa before he used a new sword technique. Demon God Technique, Eightfold Path. When he reached Trihexa, he slashed 8 times like the stars in his eyes and cleaved each of Trihexa's heads off with the Dragon Slayer effect on Ruin Maker. When all 7 heads were cleaved off, the final slash cut Trihexa's chest open and its dragon heart. When he released his technique, the gap became shredded like a balloon as it no longer could keep water trapped. All this energy was flowing into real space, which was not good at all, but nothing that Romonus would do about it. When he pulled back, he could tell that Trihexa was struggling to regrow its 7 heads. The dragon heart was not healing as it should, but it was healing. So, your dragon heart and heads are secondary. It's your 7 cores that matter, almost forgot about that. He placed Ruin Maker on his back before holding his hand out. He clenched his fist and took hold of the 7 cores that Trihexa had. He then tore them out, causing Trihexa's giant body to begin to shake as without those it began to die. Archaon took this chance, and from its back, more metallic tendrils extended forward and bit down into Trihexa's exposed flesh. Archaon began to feed and drain Trihexa's soul, blood, and power. Romonus did the same to the cores of Trihexa as he drained their power for himself. Ophis, who was flying nearby, returned to her human form before watching what Romonus was doing. Her expression was not as hollow as it usually was. She would normally be happy as she had the gap back, but the gap was falling apart. Its energy that was soothing to her was escaping into real space, making her quite disappointed. She crossed her arms as Romonus and Archaon drained Trihexa of all its power. When they were done, both the armor and Romonus himself were overflowing with energy. Romonus released his demonic transformation and returned to his regular size these days of 7 feet 5 inches. He sent his gear into his soul as the body of Trihexa crumbled into nothingness as Archaon devoured it. He sent the blood he plundered into Romonus' body, as the stronger Romonus got the better for him and his brothers. When Romonus was back in his human form, he leaned back with a smile. This day, the fight with Ophis and Great Red were the first time he had been challenged. He had a blast and he knew he wanted to find more foes to fight in the future. As he was thinking, he felt Ophis float near him. She had her arms crossed as the energy of the dimensional gap continued to leak into the real world. Since the solar system was gone, it ate the next best thing, being reality itself. It would keep going until it dispersed or was dealt with. So, are you going to continue your fight with me? Because I am done. When Romonus looked down at Ophis, he had to say she looked bored. Only now did he really look at her, as when he attacked her he was mad with rage. She had long black hair, dressed in a concealing dark black and purple dress, and a sizable bust. She didn't even look like lowly Ophis at all, and much less like macho Ophis from his original universe. Are you sure? I am sure I can make your final fight fun. She just raised her arms in the air as she was dead tired. Fighting Romonus was hard because they were each other's opposites in terms of domains. Eventually, he would kill her because of his many techniques and dragon-slaying abilities. No. With a smile, Romonus waved his hand and he sat down next to her. Ophis was going to ask what he was doing when he grabbed her hand and dragged her onto his lap. He wrapped his arms around her and leaned forward to rest his chin on her head. Her eyes moved up, confused about all this. What are you doing? Hugging you. What does it look like? Why? Because you looked kinda cute. You could match me in combat, and you are similar to me in the opposite way. Consider this my apology for my previous aggression. Ophis hummed as she didn't struggle to get out of his hold. Only because you smell good. Sure. As they floated in the gap, they just took a moment to watch as the dimensional gap continued to lose power. Most of its energy was flowing through the tears in it, but Romonus knew something. I wonder if Eviatold will realize and come to this universe. Ophis with his chin on her head couldn't move her head much, but she still asked about it. Explain about the multiverse. Well, the theory of the multiverse is that there are infinite versions of yourself out there who make different choices. In my home universe, you look like a giant muscular old man who likes to eat cookies and smoke like a chimney. Great Red is a hottie, and if I do have to say, a bit smarter than this one. Since this is the first alternative universe I have been to, I don't have all the answers. I am still in the process of learning. I do wonder if I bring you back with me if there will be problems if 2 versions of yourself exist in the same universe. Ophis frowned. Who said I will go with you? Me. Consider this me trying to make you mine. I much prefer this pretty version of yourself to macho Ophis in my home universe. He hugged her tighter as he used his huge size to keep her close to him. Ophis didn't struggle, but she did huff before grabbing one of his arms and biting him. Ow. When she did that, she began to lick his blood like Vespera or Valerie. You can try it. With a chuckle, Romonus nodded. I will, but I am taking my prize. Who dash? Before she could speak, he tilted her head before kissing her lips. Her eyes went wide and not as hollow as before. When his tongue entered her mouth as he French kissed her, she felt her body burn in a way she had not felt before. When the kiss ended, he winked at her. I am Romonus, the demon god of destruction and omnipotence. Ophis, dragon god of infinity, and the Ouroboros dragon, match made in heaven, right? It seemed that Ophis didn't mind it all that much. She was bored after all and her home was gone. Chapter 109, Returning Victorious. Ophis huffed as he had just stolen her first kiss, so she opened her mouth and bit down on his arm again. Ow. Romonus smirked as that was quite cute, and she didn't try to get out of his hold even though she could at any time. Instead, they spent the next few minutes watching the dimensional gap spilling into the universe. He also decided to look into the future with all the abilities of the pillars he had plundered. When he did, he saw that much like he expected, Regal Ziva, the fierce god of the Evis, would be on his way. Not just him, he would bring with him his entire faction. While Romonus was in no way afraid, he knew that a fight at that level would be even more devastating and would put his family at risk. With a sigh, he released his hold on Ophis. He picked her up and placed her on his right shoulder, making her look down at him. We leaving? Yeah, the two of us could watch this for a long time, but we would have to get into an even bigger fight. Someone even stronger than Trihexa and Great Red is on his way. Could you win? Of course. Tell you later about those guys. He teleported them both to the underworld, which was now separated from the earth, which was gone. When he arrived, he saw that his greater demons were all working alongside their demon princes to seal off the tear in the dimensional structure of the underworld. When Romonus and Ophis teleported in, he appeared right next to Latia, who turned her head to look at him. There you are, what the fuck did you do? All his lovers turned their heads as that was what they were asking. They were even more confused as to why Ophis was on his shoulder with her arms crossed. Didn't he just attack her to kill her? What gives? He just smiled and held his head high. As he did so, Karn and Grimaldus returned to his side before climbing up his legs. When he was this large, they both fit on his left shoulder as his right was occupied by Ophis. When they got to their favorite vantage point, they relaxed. As for Azzy Dahaka, he was near the skull throne as he never doubted Romonus would win. Welcome back, boss, how did it go? Romonus smirked as he began to scratch the chins of his two fluffy killer pets. Oh, you know, fought Ophis to a standstill, then fought Great Red and Trihexa, destroyed the solar system, and caused even more damage to the fabric of spacetime. Ophis raised her hands before making a double peace sign. God's stuff. Ha 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 ha. Everyone turned their heads to look at Barbaricia, who was still in the corrupted body of Gabriel. When she noticed everyone was looking at her, she continued to chuckle. Master, did you win easy or painful? Of course, easy. Though we better get back to our home universe and fast for your sake. Venelana tilted her head. What do you mean? I will explain later, for now, time to go back. Romonus extended his arms and began to surge his infernal divinity throughout the fabric of the underworld. The moment his energy began to flow through the nearly endless underworld, it began to shake as it was saturated with overflowing power. For a few moments, Rahvdall thought that the underworld would implode under the strain of Romonus' energy. However, the shaking only lasted a few moments as the mana in the air began to merge with Romonus' infernal divinity, making the underworld take on a shade of dark purple to match Romonus. Once he upgraded the underworld, he teleported it, himself, and everything in it back to his home universe. When he did return to the Prime Universe, as he called it, he instantly got to work binding his underworld to Earth. Earth had thousands of secret dimensions where the Pantheons made their homes, or for any number of reasons. Adding one more would not be an issue, except for the size. Later in the future, he would fuse both underworlds to take complete control. For the moment he felt keeping access to this plundered underworld to just his allies would be preferable. Once he finished binding the underworld to the Earth as one of its secret dimensions, he got to work warding it from intruders. Now, unless he gave permission, no one could enter, and it would allow the underworld and everything inside to evolve thanks to his infernal divinity. New divine metals, plants, monsters, and even just the stone itself would be useful. Romonus then released his hold on the underworld as it was completely added to his Earth without any issues. He smiled to himself as that went well and without issues. He short distance teleported to the top of his skull throne and he took his seat. The moment he sat on his throne of slaughter, he smiled to himself with pride. Karn and Grimaldus jumped down to rest on his armrests, which like the rest of it were made of skulls. Well, our first trip into the multiverse went all I have to say. Itsuki rolled her eyes as if they could have stayed home. Well for you, you took all the fun out of it, Mr. Demon God. Romonus chuckled as he waved his hand, causing Itsuki to appear on his lap. She barely understood how he did that. Okay, that was kind of cool. How did you do that? Changed your location in spacetime to make you appear here. Ophis on his shoulder looked down with a nod. Interesting. He smiled to himself as Itsuki got up. Well, I'm the strongest on this planet. Not so sure about the universe as I have yet to check that out. Seekvera and Latia looked at each other as if they were the tech-savvy among them. Latia in particular because she had already made a Grimaldus, which was her best work. You know, if I wanted to, I think I could make a spaceship to start exploring our universe in depth. Our galaxy at the very least, we might even find planets like our own full of magic and new species. Romonus hummed as that did sound interesting. Well, you have an entire underworld that I have just blessed with my divine energy. Explore it, and build machines to send into space to explore it for you. Do whatever you want and start trying to find your paths to become gods if you want, or follow a different path. As for me, I think I am going to take the next few weeks. I feel I just made a breakthrough by consuming Great Red and Trihexa, and I want to focus on that. Until then, have fun. As Romonus began to close his eyes, Valerie spoke up. Romonus, before you forget Dash. He cut her off as he thought he knew what she wanted. I have not forgotten, Valerie, the wedding. You girls can keep planning them as you see fit. I will spare no expense. Ask me any questions you have. As he closed his eyes, he could feel Miria, Aquino, Chiron, Kuroka, and Vespera all walk up the mountain to get to his throne. When they were standing in front of him, he opened his right eye. What? Miria smiled as she poked his chest. You are forgetting something, that is not like you, my love. I did. He thought about it for a moment before he remembered. Ah, right. Romonus raised his right hand before all the Enuncia tattoos over his body began to glow. He then spoke a single crucial word in Enuncia. Resurrection. Instantly, a wave of reality-distorting power surged through not just Romonus' underworld, but the entirety of Earth. Romonus then sat back as he called back the souls of his targets. The souls in question are Shuri Jima, Fujimai, the mother of Chiron, and Kuroka, Miria's parents, and the parents of Vespera. However, he did not forget the younger sister of Nislord and Graphia who had died in the Great War like them. When he was done, he sat back on his throne as this was not a big deal to someone like him. Though, he was instantly smothered in warm bodies, as 5 of his fiancées wrapped themselves around him. He smiled as he returned the hug quite easily as he was huge at the moment. They let go of him as they watched and waited as their relatives came back to live. Valerie herself started to smile as if she was going to do it herself, but this worked as well. One by one, everyone Romonus called back was returned to life. When each soul he called back formed a new body of flesh and consciousness returned to them, they were a bit dazed. Though, he did make sure to have them clothed as that was something easy for him. Shuri, being the first he brought up, shook her head as she began to look around. What happened? She had just been in Shinto heaven when she found herself here. Before she could say anything, Acneo jumped away from Romonus and tackled her mother. MOM. Oof. Aquino had used a bit too much strength, but it was a good thing that Romonus had turned Shuri into a high human. He could have turned her into a demon, but rather than do that he just evolved her humanity to the point she would be hard to kill. When Shuri looked down, she saw her daughter Aquino pressing her face into her breasts. Mama, you're back. Tears were streaming down her face, which made Shuri smile. She hugged her daughter tight now that she was back. I am here, I am back. Romonus, who saw that, smirked to himself as being a god had its perks. Death being the end is bullshit, I decide what is the end. Barakiel was also his friend, so he at least returned a family together. Shuri was not the only one in a heartfelt reunion, as Kuroka and Chiron had both hugged their mother Fujimai. When Fujimai realized what was going on and the fact that she had returned to life, she kneeled and hugged her daughters. Even more shocking was that both of her daughters had 9 tails, making them the strongest Nakushas in history. You girls have much to tell me and your mate. When she looked up at Romonus, she was smiling at first, but her smile died when she saw what Romonus was sitting on. Fujimai was always a pacifist if not a fool, as she loved a man who saw her as nothing more than a sex slave. Her feeling of horror at the skull throne was expected if not welcomed. Romonus just held his head high, not feeling any shame. Kuroka and Chiron didn't even notice as they were too focused on being back with their mother. Miria, on the other hand, kept her head high as she walked down the skull throne toward her father. His name was Alaric Mdushias, the last clan lord of the Mdushias clan. He was a giant of a man, as she was 6 feet 6 inches with long purple hair in a braid similar to Miria. When he saw his daughter, he cracked a smile, as he still remembered when he died he had challenged Sufame Tariqa Leviathan to a duel to the death with the hope of delaying her until Seraphal could come to kill her. Miria had wanted to fight alongside him, but he knew that he would lose. As such, he lied to her saying he would be fine, but now it felt like a worthwhile sacrifice. When he looked next to him, he saw his wife Emmeline Mdushias, his cousin. Both had died in the Great War, with Emmeline dying over a century before him. Both of them would speak later, but at the moment they just held their arms open for Miria to hug them. However, even they did not expect the strength of their daughter. You have no idea how lonely the centuries have been to be the final Mdushias alive. Now, I am not alone. Alaric sighed as his biggest fears were confirmed. So even after all this time, you are still single? Miria's face instantly became pissed as she put more strength into her left arm. I will have you know, my fiancé was the one to resurrect you. When Alaric heard the word, fiancé, for a second he allowed himself to thank God that his daughter found someone. However, when he saw Romonus on his throne, he almost gasped. He is fucking huge. Even Emmeline thought the same, as she always thought her husband was tall. Romonus took it to another level. Romonus raised his hand and he waved from his throne. I am the one who resurrected all of you. I am Romonus Gremory Bale, but I also go by Romonus the demon god. A pleasure. Alric nodded. That explains it, so Miria. You bagged a demon, how did you meet him? Miria began to glow bright red. How was she going to say that Romonus at age 9 started flirting with her when he visited Rahvdall? Don't ask. Alric chuckled. Then I guess I will have to ask my son-in-law. Miria once again put pressure on his spine. Ask and I send you back to hell. Got it. While they had a good reunion, Vespera began to drag her feet as she walked toward her parents. From the look of it, her father was not at all pleased to see her. His face was not angry, just disappointed. You. Vespera gulped as she had killed him without even listening to his words. She had not even heard them as she blocked them out. She kept her distance from him, but when she looked up she saw his eyes were very emotionless. I am so sorry, I didn't know. Before he could speak, his lover, the mother of Vespera, patted him on the shoulder. They had not seen each other after Vespera's grandmother took her back before killing her. Let us all talk. Romonus stood up as he might as well greet his new in-laws as they would be at his wedding. Chapter 110, Settling In. As Romonus descended his skull throne, he could see that his in-laws had different reactions to his existence. Fujimai, the mother of Kuroka and Chiron, seemed to despise him already. He could tell by the stance of her tail and her trying to shield her daughters from him. A fool's errand, because no one in his world could protect anyone from him. When he heard that thought, he snuffed it out, since his pride was through the roof right now. He also remembered he still had to deal with the peerage of Surzex, including Graphia, in his spatial ring. Miria's father, on the other hand, seemed ready to rush at Romonus to hug him. When Romonus reached the base of his throne of slaughter, his 10,000 demons kneeled for him as he was their god and creator. Alaric Amdusias, the last clan lord of the Amdusias clan, walked toward Romonus with a smile. When they were standing in front of each other, he had to crane his head up as Romonus was 7 feet 5 inches. They both reached out and shook hands as future in-laws. It is a pleasure to meet such a good son-in-law. You are making my daughter happy and you brought us back to life. I could not think of a better dowry to the wife-to-be's parents. Though I do have to ask, how did you meet? Romonus smiled, while Miria began to panic as she did not want to admit how she met him. Someone stop him. Emmeline, his wife, who had purple hair much like him, grabbed Miria firmly, causing her to panic. Hold on now, Miria, shouldn't your parents have a right to know how you met our son-in-law? Romonus just blurted out for all to see. I was 9 years old and visiting Rahvdall when I saw Miria standing guard by the door. I shot my shot and got shot down instantly. Over the next 2 years, I kept trying and eventually turned her all stalker on me. A boy no older than 11. Alaric and Emmeline both snorted and began to laugh straight up. Miria turned bright red as her embarrassing secret was out to her parents, no less. Romonus, send them back to the embrace of death, please. Romonus shrugged as he slapped his legs. I am tapped out, demon god magic, too tired. Miria covered her face with her long hair. Dear Lord, kill me. Her parents started to chuckle as it was funny that a 9-year-old had better eyes than all her failed suitors. While Miria's parents accepted him fully, he looked across the rest. Shuri, when she saw the skull throne, just smiled as she looked at him. So he is your husband, Aquino? Aquino nodded with a proud smile. Fiancé, as we are talking about getting married soon. We were holding off until he could resurrect all our dead parents since we wanted you at our weddings. Plus we are a family as we are all his fiancés. When Shuri looked at all the standing around, she was confused. That is it. I expected a harem of 40 at least. Romonus sighed as a lot of people asked him that. Why does everyone say that? I don't want a harem like King Solomon, or a noble devil. Is it so wrong to have a small harem that I can cherish? Shuri smiled as it seemed he got asked that a lot. I don't mind it, I was just surprised as you are a demon god and I suspected you to be so lustful to have a harem in the hundreds, or thousands. His face fell flat when he heard that, as that just sounded dreadful. Azzy Dahaka in the back started to cackle as this was comedy to him. Please, I have enough on my plate then to deal with over 100 women. Venelana smiled as she walked over and patted him on the back. Plus, a large harem makes it tricky to make sure everyone is happy. Just look at my previous failed marriage. This way, all of us know each other 1-to-1. I could tell you exactly what the favorite color of everyone here is, their favorite food. In my old marriage, I couldn't tell you any of that. Romonus nodded as that was the same reason that Venelana's old marriage failed. I have zero idea how Solomon made it work, but the mad lad did it. I am not jealous at all, since I bet he would need to spend most of his time walking around pleasing women or making clones, and I don't do clones. Sakuya Lucifuge, who was standing next to her oldest sister Nislord, looked up at her with crossed arms. She had been named as such because her parents had been on honeymoon to Japan when she was conceived and it just fit. Hey sis, does your boyfriend need an assassin? I am up for hire. Lewd turned her head to look at Sakuya, the youngest and least maid-like between Grafia and herself. She was crass and spoke up front, but still a really good maid when she was not running her mouth. The master is not my boyfriend as you put it. He merely resurrected me and I decided to serve him to return that debt. Yeah, whatever you say. Hey, big boss. Need a trained assassin. When Romonus looked over at the small Grafia look-alike, he nodded. Sure, you can work alongside your sister next to you. I don't have maids since the house cleans itself, but if you want to come into my service I won't turn away the sisters of my sister, Grafia. Sakuya whistled. So, Grafia got hitched, huh? I was dead before that, so who is the guy? You. He raised his right hand. I will be honored, but no. My dear brother Surzex, you two are aunts since they have a son together named Milicaes. The kid is adorable if I have to say so and talented. Once he grows up a little more I plan to make him my apprentice since he deserves it. I would like to keep talking, but we can continue this in a bit. It seems someone does not approve of me. He instantly turned to Fujimi as this whole time she had been scowling at him. Kuroka and Chiron had been too happy to have her return to them, but when they focused they felt the same thing. Fujimi pointed straight at the towering mountain of skulls. It was nearly 30 million skulls and Romonus was directly sitting on such a thing. You are a butcher, a monster. No sane being would flaunt such a macabre thing as that abomination. I will never approve of you and my daughters. They need someone special, someone kind like my H-. Before she said that Chiron herself stopped hugging and shoved her mother away. Not hard enough to hurt her, more so to shut her up. How dare you? Your husband was a piece of shit, Mom. He never cared about you, he only liked fucking you. You chose him over our safety all because you were blinded by whatever you call love. Romonus may be a killer, he may be a demon, but he has never hurt us. He will never hurt us, unlike the bastard you call our father. Fujimi was shaking as she heard the horrible things her daughter yelled at her. No, your father was just busy, he loved us, loved you, if I can be brought back he can come back. We can be a family again, all of us. Barbaricia still in the corrupted body of Gabriel scoffed. Yup, she is dumb. Cagnazzo who was in the body of Uriel nodded. Quite so. Kuroka shook her head as the joy turned sour when she brought up her sperm donor of a father. Mom, for all your love, you are a fool. Father was not a good man as you so claim, he was a piece of shit that deserved to die. Romonus, can you bring his soul here? Romonus held his hand out and he reached into the deepest level of the underworld where the evil were sent. He then pulled up the human scientist who had been in one of the lowest sections of hell. When Fujimi saw him she gasped. Toshio. When Romonus held the soul of Fujimi's so-called husband he grinned. Tell nothing but the truth and only the truth. Tell me, Toshio, what did you think of Fujimi? The human scientist blurted it out. She was a good stress reliever after my research. Her being clingy was annoying as I hated cats, but I loved fucking her. Fujimi gasped as she stepped back. What did you think of Kuroka and Chiron? My pets that I was going to use in my research in time. I got Fujimi pregnant as she was the last of her species and I needed more specimens. I wanted to later see what would happen if my daughters were impregnated by other species to test the results. Even Walburga had to turn her head to look at this disgusting piece of shit. Wow, that is dark even for me. Roygun who was standing next to Walburga nodded. Yeah, and we are the devils. Hearing that just made Romonus pissed so he forced his will down on Toshio before he crushed his soul down into a soul stone. The stone was the size of a smooth pebble, so he tossed it to Fujimi. Here, his soul is in there. Throw it on the ground to break it and he will die, or make it your life's goal to bring him back. While I rather have a good relationship with you, that doesn't seem to be possible. So, consider us even. Chiron and Kuroka walked away from Fujimi as if they had been happy, but now their mood had been killed. When both of them were at his sides, Kuroka turned to her mother. You know, Mom, I will always love you, but if you choose him over us, it seems you were better off not resurrected. Fujimi looked at the soul stone of her beloved, but hearing all the terrible things he said made her sigh. She dropped it on the ground before she stomped down on it. It broke her heart to do that, but losing even her daughters would kill her. When he saw that, it made Romonus smile. I can tell you are not happy, so I will send you back to Japan to the yokai village. I hope you can calm yourself and think clearly. With a wave of his hand, he teleported her away as he said. That just left the parents of Vespera who were reacting differently. Her father didn't seem angry, just completely over it. Alaric Bale, the grandson of Zekrom Bale and Vespera's father, sighed. So you figured it out, Vespera? She nodded while looking at the ground. So why didn't you just stop and listen to me? I was telling you the truth. I'm so sorry, but I was in a blood frenzy, I didn't know what you were saying. Grandmother poisoned my mind that you raped my mother. I never even met my mom either. Her mother Parmelia Carmela sighed as she grabbed her lover's arm. They were never married even if they wanted to be. You know she killed me right after her birthright. My mother was a witch of a bitch and everyone hated her. I say we all put her behind us and forget she ever existed. Unless you have already killed her. Vespera smiled as she reached up for her hair and pulled out that section of her hair that was platinum white. After I killed Dad, Zekrom came after me, and after a battle that nearly resulted in his death, he had me turned into a demon sword. When Romonus, who is a descendant of Zekrom, tried to resurrect me, he used the body of my grandmother as a vessel. This used to be her body, so other than this strand of hair and her assets, nothing is left. Parmelia and Alaric both smiled as it seemed the cause of their ruined family was gone satisfyingly. Everyone he brought back in one way or another was returned to their family, so now he had more relatives to add to the family. Venelana was proud of her son as he had just single-handedly ended a lot of grief. How could anyone not see why her son was the greatest? As for Romonus, he sat back on his throne as his first conquest of the multiverse was complete. Now he had to make sure he was fully in control, and meet with Macho Ophis and Lady Red. Then, he would deal with Evie Atold, and then see how he could begin to leave this reality for another one. DxD was not the only thing out there, and he wanted to explore more of it. Chapter 111, Second Meeting with Dragon Allies. Once the meeting with his resurrected in-laws ended, Romonus sat back down on his skull throne before he closed his eyes and started meditating. Ophis, who had come with him out of necessity, sat down on his lap as he was comfortable to sit on and huge. In the meantime, Latia once again set off into this underworld that had just been bound to Romonus' infernal divinity. She wanted to test the new materials for her use in her artificer work. Sikvera went along with her for a similar reason, as she decided to build a real-life Gundam. While Berga went with them since her magical expertise could be useful. Aquino and Shuri, after saying goodbye to him, returned to Japan to meet with Barakil once more. He would like to see his wife return to him, and even stronger thanks to Romonus. Vespera also left with her parents as they had a long conversation to have after all the tragedies forced on them. Kuroka and Chiron, who had been delighted to have their mother return to them, felt the whole thing was soured. They decided to return to Japan just to talk with Yasaka, as Romonus all this time had not met her at all. She had stayed out of the talks he had with Amaterasu, but with his status as the demon god, the powers of the world would be trying to meet him probably. There was also mass panic in the mortal population as a giant 8-pointed star was still burning on the moon. Scientists the world over had no clue what caused it or caused the planets to suddenly align for several minutes without massive damage to them. Miria also decided to leave with her parents as she wanted to speak to them after centuries of being the last Amdusias clan member. With her father and mother back, the chances of her having new siblings in the future were not impossible. Plus she would need to include her future children with Romonus in that list. Knowing him and how he had spoken of having a big family, he would want several between his wives. Though, that was still a ways away, more than 60 years off, as they all had agreed to wait till they were in their late 80s if not early 90s for children. In the meantime, Serafal, Roygun, Rias, and Venelana decided to return to the original underworld, which reminded Romonus he would need to rename his personal underworld dimension. For the moment he would just call it the Demon God's Realm after himself. They returned to the underworld because they wanted to deal with any political trouble of Romonus becoming a demon god. Itsuki, Natsum, and Sylvana decided to return to their parents as they wanted to prepare for their wedding to Romonus. Since they were all a harem, the event was going to be gigantic. It was going to be the biggest wedding this world had seen in recent times. That was the biggest thing in the minds of his lovers, and it was on his mind as well. He dismissed Nisilord and Sakuya to allow them to return to the underworld to reunite with their sister Graphia. However, that did leave Valerie, who was always the quietest of his lovers. She was also an orphan, as her mother was just one of her father's sex slaves. When he saw her alone, he waved his hand and dragged her up to his throne. "You look sad, Valerie. What is wrong?" Valerie smiled when she was standing in front of his throne. "Nothing is wrong, I am just thinking how I will never have a father or anyone to walk me down the aisle. I have no male relatives to do it, as they were all evil and killed by Arjak." Romonus smiled. "In that case, why don't you have Seror do it? He is like my brother, and I bet he won't mind if you ask." Valerie suddenly smiled as she had met Serorg, and he was a great guy. One of Romonus' best supporters. Great idea. After giving him a kiss, she teleported away, leaving Leviathan and Lilith, who were his servants, here with him and Ophis. When he saw that, he rested his chin on his knuckle as he looked at the two women. He didn't count Barbaricia in that, as while she was in Gabriel's body, she was more of a weapon than a woman. "You two, what do you plan to do?" Lilith looked up at the towering effigy of Slaughter her master sat on and made sure to commit to memory the carnage of her world that went into making it. Seeing how Azzy Dahaka was cackling as he towered above the skull throne, the two badgers resting on Romonus' shoulders or the giant griffin at his feet reminded her of how dreadful he was. "What is your universe like compared to ours?" Romonus thought about it. "It is 10,000 years in the future compared to yours." The human world is dominated by humanity for the most part, and in this reality, Lucifer succeeded in making his devils. If you want to visit the devils, you should get in contact with my brother Cersex. As for you, Leviathan, in this world you have one living descendant, as I ate the second last one in my ascension ritual. Her name is Rahvdall Leviathan, but she is currently in a coma. If you want, I can wake her up, but she will wake up on her own. I honestly don't mind if you two leave my side, so go if you want. Leviathan asked a question. What if we try to run? Azidahaka started to madly cackle. Run where? The gap. Space. Another reality. Good luck with that. Leviathan smiled bitterly before she just bowed. I won't run, it is pointless in the end. I will visit my descendant in this world, as I didn't have any children. Leviathan nodded. I will do the same, as I want to see what my foolish dead husband tried to do. When they teleported, it finally left Romonus with just Ophis. He sighed as he took a moment to relax. However, his relaxation was interrupted by Macho Ophis and Lady Red. When the two dragon gods of his universe saw the Ophis he had on his lap, it made them laugh. Macho Ophis was in the middle of eating a lollipop and he started laughing. Now isn't that cute, you got a weaker one than me. Ophis frowned as she looked at the alternative version of herself. This guy with his gray slick back hair, shit-eating grin, black sunglasses, and tight jacket just looked annoying. Romonus sighed when he saw these two. Things happened, dude. Anyways, what is up? Lady Red smiled as she spoke. We are going to be honest that we did not expect you to leave for another universe the moment you had the chance. Even we can't do that, so how did you achieve it? Some unique magic that I have allows me to interact with dimensions. I plan to use it to leave our world once we deal with Evia told. Speaking of which, you two need to seriously power up if you want to compete. Macho Ophis thought about it as he could sense that Romonus was growing stronger at the moment. He was just taking all of the plundered domains he took to fully assimilate them with his own. Even if he forced himself to stabilize, he still had eaten thousands of gods in India, as the Devas, demons, and Asuras were numerous. Even Shiva of that alternative world, so he took his trident which he planned to feed to Ruin Maker. He had taken Gungnir and several more weapons to feed to his gear. However, he was not thorough, so he missed out on a few things which made him want to do it again in another alternative universe. How did you get so strong so quickly? By eating gods and plundering their domains to enhance my own. Sure, doing it without my unique abilities would result in damage. I just need a few days of careful meditation to fully adapt to all this power. That is why I am bringing this up. You two are stronger than the average Great Red or Ophis, so I plan to send you to an alternative universe along with me so you can absorb yourselves. That way you will be stronger and able to keep up since, you know. He pointed at Great Red's neck, which made her hold it. In the novel DxD, Great Red got one shot by Rahvdall Ziva and decapitated, leaving his corpse in the dimensional gap. She smiled bitterly as she saw that future. Yeah, that does not sound like something I want to experience. Alright then, when do we begin? He thought about it as there was no rush, as he would just buff up the wards Great Red and Ophis had placed in the gap. That way they could delay the actions of the Eevee since the Atolled were not aggressive, at least not yet. Give me about 2 months. In that time, we will begin to travel to other universes together, since I need to keep researching about the multiverse and my alternative selves. There is much that I do not know, and there is more that I want to know. Oh, and by the way, to not confuse you, I am going to call you Ophos and this one on my lap Ophis. Ophis just sounds girly. Ophos smiled. Hey, I like that. Hey, Ophis, want to be my daughter? I am stronger, obviously. Ophis frowned. No thank you, I rather not be adopted by myself. Ophos just shrugged while pulling a cigar from his pocket. Suit yourself, you won't see any of the good candy stores I know of. That seemed to get her attention. I can consider it for candy. Ha 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 ha, in that case, come on. It is candy time. With a deadpan look on his face, Romonus saw as she left him and teleported away with her new dad. As for Lady Red, after laughing to herself, she waved goodbye. See you later, big guy. She returned to her dragon god form and returned to the gap in a dragon gate. That left him completely alone other than his demons and familiars. Was he sad? No, on the contrary, there was finally peace. Finally, all alone. He stood up, surprising his familiars and demons who thought he would not be moving. Instead, he looked around looking for any spying eyes. Yes. He waved his hand and he began to rip up tons of material from the ground before he began to form it into the start of a giant demon king's castle. He managed to complete the castle in a matter of minutes, and before long he had a titanic castle made of blackened demonic steel with some corridors so tall even his greater demons had no need to shrink. Sure, he did rip off the idea of the brass citadel of Khorne. Since he had the skull throne, he might as well have the citadel. With his throne in the middle of the citadel, he turned to his pets. I will be busy for a time, you four are free to do as you want. Without waiting for a response, he teleported to one of the rooms in the giant castle before he entered. It was empty inside, so he waved his hand and completely furnished the room as a copy of his own. Once the room was ready, he pulled someone out from his spatial ring. He tossed onto the floor the sleeping form of Graphia from the alternative universe. He leaned on the wall as he looked at her, waiting for her to wake up. When Graphia slowly opened her eyes and saw him, she jumped backward in terror. He didn't do anything as he looked down at her. "Yeah, it is me. The ender of your world. I thought it would be fair for me to tell you what will happen to you now." Graphia stood up from the floor, not happy to kneel. "What? You will die, here and now. My original goal was to have my sister Graphia absorb you, but I have a better idea." Graphia snorted. "By that logic, I should be thankful." Romonus nodded. "You probably should be. Regardless, if it makes you feel any better, I will make it quick." Romonus reached for his left ear and removed his earring. With a flex of his divine authority, Graphia, starting with her legs, begins to turn into pure demonic essence. In seconds she was gone and her soul was fused with her own demonic energy, ending her life. She had no chance of resurrection, and he used this to upgrade the earring his sister-in-law gave him. When the earring was complete, it turned into a pitch-black freezing thing. He raised it to his left ear and clasped it back on. There we are. With that out of the way, Romonus sat down on the bed with Archaon still on. He grabbed Malakota and Ruin Maker, set them on his lap, and he closed his eyes to start meditating. He had truly had a great feast, and it was time to assimilate it. Chapter 112, 2-month preparations. Once Romonus enhanced his earring that had been gifted to him, he sat in his room unmoving like a cultivator for an undetermined amount of time. Thanks to him always using time dilation formations in his construction, and his status as a demon god, he could go a long time without moving. This was the first time he truly tried out a long-term meditation or cultivation, but he gave it a shot. He started by circulating his infernal divinity through his body and soul as he started to purify himself of the influence of the many gods he had consumed. As he sat, many months began to fly past. He also tried to better synchronize his domains together and to fully assimilate the devoured divine essences of the many gods he slayed. The process took him nearly 3 months in closed-door cultivation, as he was going to call it. He didn't become a cultivator, but he used their method to not just recover to his peak, but get even stronger. When he finally opened his eyes, he exhaled a stream of pure infernal divinity as he was finished. Done. He got off the bed and he shook himself off as he felt a bit stiff. He walked out of his room, and when he did, he used his contract with Azzy-Dahaka, Karn, Grimaldus, and Mephiston to his side as it was time to leave. He had things to do, and even with time formations, he didn't want to waste time. "Barbaricia, Scarmiglione, you come too." He didn't have to wait long before all 5 arrived at his side. The 2 Malbranche kneeled while his familiars ran to his side. With them all gathered, he began pulling his shadows and demons into his shadow. He would need to find a way to combine his demons and shadows, as having both was going to be annoying. Instead, he would need to create new death demons or shadow demons that were a mix of demon crafting and necromancy. "How long was I in meditation, Azzy?" 10 minutes. "Good, did you all have fun?" Azzy scoffed. "We had 10 minutes to explore your edgelord castle. Of course, we had no fun." When he looked at Karn, Grimaldus, and Mephiston, they nodded as that was true. "You will get time in the future. In the meantime, I have things to do. I am a busy man after all." He spread out his senses to see what his family was doing. Ophos and Ophis went on a candy binge as father and daughter, his partners, were spending time with their parents. He could see they began to plan for a massive wedding with their families. Itsuki's parents were currently crying as their little girl had been aged in a time chamber and was getting married already. They felt it was too soon, but their daughter was 21 years old, not 15 as she would normally be. Serorg, on the other hand, instantly agreed to walk Valerie down the aisle as she requested. Happy at this, Valerie went to the best tailors in Europe to get a perfect wedding dress. Romonus smiled as he teleported to Bale Castle, as he had a promise to keep. When he arrived, he did so in the office of the Lord Bale, which was currently Serorg and Magdarin. When he arrived, they were using 2 computers to go through all the paperwork they needed. They raised their heads from the screens when they saw him. Magdarin smirked. "Yo, finally here to do your job." Romonus nodded. "That is my plan." Serorg instantly stood up to leave. "Fucking finally, 'cause ruling is ass. Though, when did you get so big?" He smirked and teased his cousin. "When I became a demon god, when did you become so small?" Serorg shook his head as he gave a fist bump to Romonus on his way out. "By the way, I don't mind walking Valerie down the aisle, I am honored." Romonus patted him on the shoulder. "Just invite me to yours, and before I forget." Romonus waved his hand and he instantly treated and cured Miss LaBelle of her sleeping sickness, as while she had yet to fall asleep fully, she was getting there. "I would return to your home to check up on your mother." Serorg wondered what Romonus meant by that, but when he saw the smirk on his face, he gasped. You did it. That I did, here. Romonus teleported Serorg to his estate as his cousin had little to no demonic energy. He would change them soon, but until then it could wait. As Magdarin he stood up and began to make his way out. Thank you, Romonus. He won't forget what you did for him. Neither will I. With that, Magdarin stepped out leaving Romonus to take his seat as the Lord/King of the Baal clan. Barbaricia and Scarmiglione stood by the door to protect him. Karn, Grimaldus, Mephiston, and Azidahaka while shrunken down also guarded his office more for appearances. Romonus pointed his finger at the desk and caused it to grow to match his size. He then sat down, took a deep breath and got to work. Once Romonus settled into his role as Demon King, he began to deal with the management of House Baal. It was easy enough for him as any issues were dealt with by him sending shadows or demons to deal with the annoyance. By this time, Nisilord and Sakuya had reunited with his sister-in-law Graphia, and after spending time with her their nephew Milicas, and Surzex, they returned to his side as his maids. With Sakuya, he turned her into a demon as he did for Nisilord and allowed her to act as his assassin. To make Graphia happy as well, he once again resurrected her parents Lord Lucifuge and Lady Lucifuge, which reminded Graphia, Nisilord, and Sakuya that he was without question a god. Sakuya and Nisilord swore to serve Romonus for the end of time, but he considered a debt he had to pay. While his allies grew in number, a few truly brain-dead nobles were taken care of by Sakuya, demons, or shadows. In the meantime, his fiancées and their families gathered together to plan the wedding as his lovers wanted to surprise Romonus. To respect this, he granted them the secrecy they desired. That was not to say that they ignored him or them as over the next month, they gathered together in his office which he expanded to deal with his large bulk. They asked him many questions about the wedding. Venue was not an issue as the whole underworld was his, it was mostly about the style of wedding, food, and guests. To make them happy, he answered all their questions, and when they came to him asking for a date he never said no. With his lovers all wedding crazy, Ophis became the only one not interested. When she was not out with Ophos, who considered himself her father, she stuck by his side. He was technically her mate now and they would spend time together. She wasn't nearly as innocent as the Ophis from Canon as she had quite developed emotions. Though, she was petty and liked to drink his blood. Ophis was experiencing a new thing as it was a new experience to have a parent even if the parent was just a manly version of herself. Romonus even kept his word with Lady Red and Ophos as they would go to weaker universes of the multiverse to harvest them for power. He always invited his lovers with him as he did not want to leave them behind and they sometimes accepted his offer. Though, they were more focused on their wedding than multiversal harvesting so often he went alone with his partners. When he finished a campaign with his shadows and demons, he would stabilize himself by indulging in dual cultivation with his fiancées, or Ophis when they were busy. It allowed them to get stronger without needing to go with him on a campaign. Nisilord and Sequoia didn't start trying to get in bed with him as while they were open to having sex with him as taught by their mother, he didn't want to force anything. As such, he relied on his fiancées, Ophis, or he would cultivate in isolation to deal with his surging power. When he went on a war against a weaker multiverse, he made elixirs from the alternative selves of his lovers. He even made some of the gods that he felt suited them so even while he was off fighting wars against weaker universes with Lady Red, Ophos, and Ophis when they didn't go with them. Sakuya and Nisilord always joined his campaigns so they too got stronger, though not through sex with him. At the 2-month mark since he ascended to godhood, and after he had harvested 50 alternative worlds in the multiverse, he gathered on the moon with Lady Red, Ophos, and Ophis, his familiars, and his 12 Malbranche who now all had hosts. 6 males and 6 females with a variety of races from Onis, devils, angels, demigods, or yokai. They all kneeled as they waited for instruction. With 50 worlds harvested, it meant he had used 50 worlds to make himself stronger. So much had changed, but his wedding was in a week so he wanted to get this meeting out of the way to spend that time with his wives-to-be. On the moon where the 8-pointed star that he used in his ascension ritual still burned everyone gathered. Lady Red and Ophos as his allies were overflowing with power after feeding extensively on their alternative selves. Romonus had to help them stabilize their power, but at the moment they were for the most part ready to deal with the Eevee like mere pests. Well, how do you two feel? Lady Red thought about it as after feeding on 50 of her alternative selves, she was several magnitudes stronger than before, and at times she struggled to contain it. I feel better than okay, I feel magnificent. She started releasing an aura of conceptual energy which he had to help her force down. Ophos took a puff of his fancy cigar as he usually had more control than his sister. I second that, though I do have to say I am curious what you plan to do with all the souls you have been collecting. After fighting 50 alternative worlds and massacring them, he had billions of souls stored away. He had 50 world cores which he was going to be using soon. For his souls, he had a little more than 350 billion souls and they were all screaming to get out. That also included skulls which caused his skull throne to surge in size, a reminder of the brutality of his conquests. To begin with, I plan to create a few high-quality hybrid shadow demons and use the bunch to make a philosopher's stone. The rest of the souls I will use to feed my shadow demons that I will make. I rather have a smaller legion than an army of billions of demons and shadows. Ophis, who was standing next to him, had come along with them in their battles, but she was happy enough to give all the rights to her father, who she had accepted at this point. She was happy to get stronger by drinking Romonus' blood like a vampire, but he did drink her blood as well. Especially mating with her new mate, which she had to admit felt great. As she stood next to him, she turned to Ophis, her father. I do have a question. If we do anything of Trihexa, she is still sealed off by the seals of God. Lady Red and Ophis turned to Romonus, who thought about it. I could unseal her and use my power to subjugate her if that is what you want. Lady Red tapped her chin as she thought of her sister, who had been sealed by God. That seal was still being applied, but they had just ignored her thus far. You know what, do it. You can have her, as she is practically mindless for the most part. Rahvdall chuckled as he no longer needed this universe Trihexa, as he had his share of the other 50 from the weaker universes they had ravaged. He had accomplished his goal of becoming a dragon god, the evil dragon god of forbidden knowledge and curses. As a result, he no longer just had 3 heads, he now had 5, much like Dragon Lord Placidosax. Karn, Grimaldus, and Mephiston had also become nightmares of extreme power after they had fought endlessly against weaker universes. As Romonus gained power, they gained power, and the same went for all his gear. They had fed on so many legendary weapons that they were beyond powerful in these lower-level universes. It was like he was bullying weaklings, but he had yet to find another reincarnator even after harvesting 50. I could use my magic to grant her a mind, but I am not sure if we have any use for Trihexa. Lady Red scowled as she looked up at the 5-headed evil dragon god. She is still our sister, even if indirectly. It is worth it to have her on our side. As he held his hands up, as he didn't want to make Great Red, or Lady Red as Romonus called her, mad. She was a dragon god before him, and no matter how he had acquired his title, she had far more experiences than him. Don't hate on me. Romonus shook his head as he didn't need to deal with this. Everyone relax, we will help Trihexa deal with her madness and have her as an ally. Plus, having another dragon god can't be a bad idea. To get this out of the way, let's do it now. Romonus focused on the seals of God as he had absorbed 50 gods through the multiverse. He had truly gone all out, and he was stronger than ever. If he wasn't careful, he could blow up this whole galaxy. It was all thanks to his omnipotence domain, which had been enhanced 50 times by absorbing God 50 times. It didn't seem like a lot, but for him, that was a lot of power. He quickly found the seal of Trihexa at the end of the world. With a mere thought, he destroyed the seals of God and absorbed their energy before he teleported the still unconscious Trihexa to the moon. Trihexa, as he already knew, was even larger than Lady Red in her true form, as she used to only be 100 meters long. Now, after growing in strength substantially, she was closer to 300 meters long. Even then, Trihexa was 500 meters long, which made the dragon god of primordial darkness and the end a massive creature. Once out of the seal placed on her by God, her 7 beastly heads began to open their eyes as her dragon heart and 7 cord fired to life. Before she could even think of violence, Rahvdall, Lady Red, Ophis, and Romonus all instantly forcefully changed her mind from a bestial state to a more sentient one. Romonus even used the power of God over life, which was what gave Valerie control over the life and soul codes to upgrade Trihexa a tad. By the time he was finished, rather than looking like a mix of many animals into a noble-looking 7-headed dragon, Trihexa passed out from all this, as they had changed a creature that ran on pure instinct into a sentient thinking creature. With Trihexa taken care of, Romonus smiled as he pulled something out of his spatial ring. He knew that Tobio, Sylvana, Chiron, Miria, Aquino, Valerie, Itsuki, Cookie, and Natsum, as part of his peerage with his demonic pieces, were all growing stronger with him. He took out his brave saint playing cards, or as he called them, his demonic saints. He surged his infernal divinity into the cards as he bound them to his soul, meaning he now had 13 more slots to grant those he chose a way to benefit from his rapidly growing power. There we are, another one of my forgotten projects shows real use. He sent the demonic saint cards back into his soul along with his unused demonic pieces. He would most likely use them for his lovers, as some of them had an unfair advantage by being part of his peerage. Though he could use any extra ones to use on some of his extra servants. For the most part, most of his preparations were complete and he could focus on his wedding. Plus, he had indulged too much in the evil that came with being a demon god, and it was time to stop. A period of peace would probably be for the best, which meant he would probably become something like a demon monk to reject evil. It made him laugh, as he would never do that, but regardless, it was time to become married. Chapter 113, A Demon God's Vow. Once Trihexa had been dealt with and was no longer a brain-dead beast that only sought destruction, Romonus turned to Lady Red and Ophis. I am going to leave her to you two, since you two are her siblings. I already did my part by helping give her a brain. Lady Red turned to Ophis, who shrugged. You are the sister, you should do it. I have my child after all. Ophis shook her head as her counterpart was extremely shameless. More shameless than anyone she had ever met. Lady Red sighed as she placed her hand on Trihex's shoulder. If you two are going to strong-arm me into this, then fine. She opened a dragon gate to the dimensional gap before dragging Trihexa into it. She wouldn't be back, so Romanus turned to Ophos. Do you think you are ready? Ophos nodded after puffing on his cigar. More than ready, all we need to do is wait for the Eevee to make their move, or we make the first move. Romanus thought about it as either way, it is a battle that would either be a stomp or harder than he thought. Let us wait, I still have my wedding after all. Ophos nodded as that was all the underworld and supernatural community were talking about. Every major power from every pantheon would attend as Romanus invited them all. Especially those who had helped him become a demon god. That was all that was on his mind as his lovers had forbidden him to see them for the week leading up to it. He knew they were getting ready, but he wanted to be surprised. At the moment the entire underworld was in shambles as the wedding was going to be at Lucifade. Last he checked, Latia had released her army of machines to clear out the ruins to build up a titanic Gothic cathedral of a church in his honor. It was going to be a grand place of worship to him, so he allowed his lovers to build it how they wanted. He smiled as he turned around to address Ophis. Ophis, want to join in the wedding? She shook her head as she ate a donut. No. I do not need a wedding. He smirked. You sure? When you start asking for one I am going to be busy. Ophos turned to her with a thumbs up and a grin. Come on, go for it. Join the girls in their wedding planning. I will walk you myself. Ophis turned to Romanus, who smiled at her. I would like if you joined. Ophis looked back and forth between Ophos and Romanus before she shrugged. Only because there is cake, fine. Make sure you don't spy, it is bad luck or something. I think. She then teleported away to join the rest of Romanus' wives-to-be. When she was gone, Romanus smiled as it seemed he just kept winning. Well, since she left I am leaving too. Ophos took a puff of his cigar as he was curious. Where will you go? Romanus thought about it as he could return to House Bale, but he had to make a stop. No, I have something to do. Azzy, Karn, Grimaldus, Mephiston, you four are free to go for the day. The same goes for you 12. Have fun, but don't go around slaughtering people or something. They bowed deeper before Romanus teleported away to the underworld, specifically to the Gremory estate. When he appeared in front of his childhood home he looked up at it before he walked in. When he opened the double doors he was spotted by some maids and butlers walking around. They were about to line up to present themselves, but he merely waved his hand. There is no need, continue your work. With his order, they gave him the space he wanted as he walked through the mansion he grew up in. He took in the sight before hanging his head high. He kept walking through the hallways of the manor before he made it to Zeoticus' office. The doors were closed, but he could tell his father was inside. Before he walked in, Romanus took a deep breath as he knocked on the door. Zeoticus, who was sitting at his desk typing away at a Magitech computer that combined magic and technology, raised his head. Who is it? It's me, Romanus. When he heard his son's voice, Zeoticus opened his mouth to speak, but he held himself back. Come in. Romanus opened the doors and stepped inside with Archaon still equipped. For a few moments, neither knew what to say before Romanus sat down on the chair. He had to reinforce it as Ruin Maker, the cursed shield, and Archaon weighed 15 tons altogether. When he was seated, Romanus spoke first. How are you doing? Zeoticus lowered his head. Better than before, but I could be better. I heard of the wedding. Romanus nodded as he kept quiet for a few moments. Hard not to, the entire underworld and supernatural communities the world over were informed. Not all were invited, but a giant number were of every faction. That is actually why I am here. Has Rias talked to you yet? She has. She came here last week to ask if I would be willing to walk her down the aisle. Are you here to ask the same thing? No, if she asked you and you are yet to respond, that is for you and her to decide. I was here to extend the invite to Asterion. While I am here, what is your thought on the matter? What is going on in your head? Tell me with full honesty, whatever it is, I will accept it. Zeoticus nodded as he closed his computer and thought of things. Want to know what I think? What is going on in my head? Two things go through my mind on repeat. The first is pure self-loathing because you are right that I fucked my marriage over. If I had been able to see what was happening to put a stop to it, maybe things would have gone differently. The second is an extreme aversion to you. I did so much for you and you betrayed me like this. Even the armor you wear was paid for by me. To me, I did so much for you and you stole my wife, your mother, from me. Why? Romanus looked his father in the eyes and he knew that was true. He didn't look away as he remembered how things went downhill. I did try to give you a chance. That day when we had that talk, I told you to apologize and try to get her back. I even spoke to my mother a few hours after and tried to tell her to give you a chance. Do you want to hear what she told me? Do you? Zeoticus nodded. What did she say? Romanus waved his hand and he recreated the day he and Venelana had the talk that changed their relationship completely. When Zeoticus saw a younger Romanus and Venelana talking, he listened to what Romanus said to Venelana. I talked to Dad about your troubles and I think he wants to work on things. Zeoticus saw how Venelana in the recreation seemed to scowl. You shouldn't have. I think I do, since I at least owe it to you two to try to mend things. Venelana paused for a few moments before she turned away. I don't want to go back, Romanus. I felt you understood me more than he ever will. Is that so wrong, Romanus? To want a man who appreciates you and doesn't ignore you for years time. Even if he is your son, because I know what I want and it is not him. Even if he changes his act now, what will be the point? Just because he wants his cock to work again he will change. How pathetic. For how long? A decade, 2, 3, 4, or even a century. Eventually, things will return to as they have always been, as people do not change that fast. Romanus cut the imagery as he could see Zeoticus was looking even more depressed. I did try to at least give you a chance. I was 11 and I was still trying to help you. Venelana just gave up on you like you gave up on her. Though, I will say I thank your honesty for saying what you feel. Zeoticus leaned back as he sighed. I guess you are right. Zeoticus took a few moments to gather his thoughts together before he made up his mind. I will be going for Rhea's sake, since she is still my daughter. I rather not watch my ex-wife marry my son, but if the alternative is to miss her wedding, I will stomach my disgust. Romanus nodded. I can accept that. Just as he stood up, Zeoticus spoke up. Romanus, I have something to tell you. Romanus was already standing, so he turned to wait for the answer. If I am being honest, I don't think you and me can remain as father and son. I am not disowning you, since we will always be blood, but if I am honest, I loathe everything that your relationship with Venelana represents. Since it reminds me of what a failure I was, and what I could have done. It seems that feeling will never go away, but you make her happy. More than I ever could, so I will be there, I will be respectful, but I think our relationship will never be the same again. Romanus lowered his head before he raised it high. If it means anything, I vow to make sure they want for nothing. Zeoticus sighed. I know you will. With that taken care of, Romanus opened up a portal before he stepped through. This time, he appeared at his Demon King castle. He climbed up the mountain of skulls before he took his seat on his throne of slaughter. When he was seated, Romanus held his head high with a sad smile. He didn't blame his father, as it was only fair to hate him for stealing Venelana. Though, he had to admit it hurt to be effectively disowned in a way. However, he accepted it as it was the consequence of his actions. Now, he just had to wait for the promised day of his marriage. For the next 7 days, Romanus didn't move from his throne, did not meditate, did not sleep, and did not think. He just sat there with his mind empty as he allowed time to pass him by. In the meantime, at Lucifade, Latia had asked her uncle to aid her, and together they were rebuilding Lucifade in a Gothic style. In the center was a titanic Gothic cathedral, not only for the wedding but as a place of worship for Romanus. Romanus had no holy symbol, as the stars of chaos in his eyes didn't count. As such, Latia had made one for him, but she wanted him to see it first. With only 7 days to finish, she was on a time crunch, but she would get it done through time dilation fields. She wanted her wedding with Romanus to be perfect, since she was not the only one getting married. She and all her friends, who would soon become her sisters as well, were offering all their support. From here, she could see Sylvana and Vespera commanding their undead to aid her machines. Even Ophis was here, using her status as a dragon god to not just enhance the buildings made, but to make sure nothing could damage them. Ajuka, who was giving her mostly free reign, decided to speak up as he looked at the cathedral that was already over a mile tall, taller than the human Burj Khalifa. It was taking a lot to build it, but the demon engines that Latia was commanding were doing it. Are you happy with what you built? Latia nodded. Of course I will. 7 days with time dilation fields is plenty, since I don't need sleep and things are almost done. I had to build several mansions for the guests, since this is going to be a multi-day event. It will be grand and majestic, and it needs to be the greatest. Nothing less will satisfy me. Ajuka nodded. That is a very devil-like thing to say. We are creatures of passion, and if you want the best, you will get the best. Though, why have you told Romanus to stay out of the planning? Venelana, who was watching the speedy construction, spoke up. It was my idea. Romanus rarely gets surprised, so we want to surprise him. All of us have been preparing for this for 2 months with our families. We want to give him a good wedding and to enjoy being a husband before he has to do anything else. Good to know. They only had to put the finishing touches, and when it was ready, Romanus would be in for the best day of his life. Chapter 114, A Final Talk. When the night before his wedding arrived, Romanus opened his eyes after several days of inactivity. As he sat on the throne of skulls, Karn, Grimaldus, Mephiston, and Azzy-Dahaka had been waiting for him to move. They had not left his side, but he had not ordered them to stay either. As he flew toward him and landed on his lap. Romonus glanced down at the evil dragon who was looking up at him with 5 pairs of eyes. Romonus was even smiling at the moment. Come on, big guy, you want to get ready, don't you? Romonus nodded as he held his hand out to Azzy, who landed in his open palm. Yeah, I might as well take a bath. A bath in the sun, right, since regular water won't clean your skin. A good old star bath will make you shine bright. Romonus laughed as he started petting Azzy's many heads. Romonus then placed him on his shoulder as he picked up Karn and Grimaldus into his arms. The 2 angry creatures, from the look of things, were wondering why he was so cheerful. Come, let's enjoy my last night as an unmarried man. He started walking down his throne with Mephiston behind him. Azzy wondered about that. How are you going to do that? Going to a human strip club would just suck, since human women can't compare to supernatural ones. Your wives-to-be are the best of the best, and it is not like you are dreading your wedding. Romonus waved his hand and opened a portal to Earth. He didn't appear in any populated place, and he just picked a random mountain in Africa. When he and his familiars looked up and saw that it was a full moon, he chuckled as he looked up at the 8-pointed star that still burned on the moon. It was a reminder of his ascension, and he wasn't going to fix it since it made the mortals panic. He wasn't going to rule them, as he wasn't a god who desired to oppress mortals. Mephiston lied down, so Romonus took the chance to rest his head against his soft plume of feathers. The griffin was 30 meters long, 98 feet, so he was a giant, which made Romonus 7 feet 5 inches height seem small. As he relaxed, Karn, Grimaldus, and even Azzy jumped onto his chest and enjoyed the quiet time looking up at the moon. Romonus took a deep breath as he rested his head against his familiar. You 4, along with our Canon, Ruin Maker, and my cursed shield, are the ones who know me the best. You are all linked to my soul, so you know the secrets I hold. What do you think? Speak your thoughts. Karn raised his head and looked at Romonus. All the years Romonsu had known his honey badger, he never heard him utter a word or thought. Just cold silence, but if it was a request, he broke his silence. It is in the past. His voice was unnaturally calm, lacking even a hint of emotion, but that was false. That calm was a lie, as it merely hid the true simmering violence that Karn felt every second or every day. He restrained his rage until the time he needed to release it as a boiling wave of wrath. Romonus ran a hand down the large badger's back before ruffling his head. Thanks for your honesty. What about you, Grimaldus? Grimaldus tilted his head as he thought about it. The fact you are a reincarnator is of no importance to us. Andrew and Romonus are the same. Why are you so sappy before your wedding? It is not like you. Grimaldus' voice sounded a mix of robotic intelligence and a growling beast. The opposite of Karn's eerie calm. I guess you can say even I get emotional thinking of me getting married. What about you, Mephiston? The griffin raised his head before resting it on the ground. I think you should be more happy, but what does it matter what we think? The only one who can determine what you feel is you. Azzy nodded with all 5 heads. What they said, so stop brooding and go get ready for your wedding. I will in a second, just let me brood for a little while. Azzy decided to allow Romonus to do just that. They all just took the moment to enjoy the view of the moon and stars, as they would soon be exploring the unknown. New realities they would crush or subjugate on their adventures. Romonus smiled as he closed his eyes and gave a prayer and message to the one who gave him this chance. Rahvdall, thanks for everything. If not for you, I would still be a mortal weakling working as my former mother's boy toy, so thanks for that. Thank you for reincarnating me, thank you for giving me the Sparta bloodline, and thanks for the Annuncia. Everything I have is thanks to you, amen. He didn't expect a response, as Rahvdall told him he was going to be preoccupied, but he got a response. No need to thank you, you have done more than enough for me. When we meet again, let's do so as friends. Romonus smiled as he placed his hand on his heart. Until then, Rahvdall my friend. Until we meet again, Romonus. When the link was cut, it was going to be their final meeting for many years. Romonus stood up and he took a deep breath as he was now free. He never felt like he had been controlled, as Rahvdall was not that kind of guy. Once the final communication with his former boss and god of reincarnation, Romonus stood up. Come on, let us go get ready. He teleported along with his familiars to his Demon King castle where he was going to get ready. Before he got dressed, he did what Azzy recommended and he teleported himself to the sun to take a star bath. He used the extreme heat and pressure of the sun to deep clean himself before his big day. Once he finished with his star bath like Han Shao, he took a regular bath with superheated water just to make sure he smelled excellent. Once he was clean, he then created an intricate wedding outfit that he modeled after the heavenly demon cultivator robe, since it just fit. It was a very intricate thing, but he was going to go all out for his wedding. He then made the hard decision to cut off his beard, returning his face to its clean-shaven look. He almost cried when he did that, but he could grow it back at any time. He also cut his hair a bit, and once he was dressed he gave a bath to Karn and Grimaldus, who didn't need it, but they should look their best. He helped Mephiston prune his feathers and comb out his fur, while Azidahaka decided to repeat Romonus' star and water bath. Once everyone was ready, Romonus looked himself in the mirror one last time. He sighed as he looked at his face that lacked his manly beard. It is just for today. Azzy, who was sitting on his shoulder, looked away with all 5 heads. Oh, the travesty that has been inflicted on my friend's face. Oh, the horror. Romonus ignored him as he opened a portal to go to Lucifade where the wedding was going to take place. He did so outside the city as he didn't want to accidentally ruin the surprise. It seemed he did the right thing as waiting outside the gates of the reconstructed Lucifade were 2 Necrons. They appeared to be designed like Necron nobles, and when they spotted him they kneeled. Lord Romonus has arrived, informing Mistress Latia. One of Latia's Necrons began communicating with her, so Romonus waited. He didn't have to wait long as the Necron finished its communication. Lord Romonus, prepare for teleportation. Sure. The Necron walked toward him, placed its hand on his shoulder and teleported him and his familiars where he needed to go. When the teleportation ended, he appeared in a large room that seemed to be a changing room to get ready. He wasn't alone as he saw Graphia, Nislord, and Sakuya here. They were not the only ones, as besides the 3 maid sisters, was someone he had not talked to in a while. Viviana. What are you doing here? Viviana, White Dragon Empress, the rival of Itsuki and a good friend of Romonus, was here. She was dressed in her usual punk rock outfit, but it seemed something was off. She seemed a bit down, all things considered. She was sitting down, and when she saw him she chuckled. What are you wearing and where is your beard? You look like shit. He scoffed as he looked excellent. Wow, thanks for the vote of confidence. Anywho, what is up? Graphia looked at Viviana before she walked toward him. With her were her son Milikas and Asterion, Marcina's son. Marcina had been invited only as a maid, so while her son would go to enjoy his brother's wedding, she had to work. It was Venelana's petty revenge for the breakup of her previous marriage, and thanks as well since she found someone leagues better. Even if the one she was marrying was her son, who gave a shit. They were a devil and a demon, so incest was just a fun time, and gods had been doing it for thousands of years. Romonus, Latia put us here to make sure you were ready, and I can see you are not. Romonus looked down at himself as he felt he was perfect. What do you mean? I shaved, and I bathed twice, and I even trimmed my hair. Graphia pointed at his beardless face. And that is a problem, Latia, and a lot of the girls love your beard. So you got to grow it back, and this is not a traditional wedding, so ditch the cultivator robe and put on Archaon. Latia says you look best in heavy plate armor. You want me to grow the beard back? Graphia nodded. Latia placed us here to make sure you didn't do things like this, and what is with the cultivator robe? I thought it would look nice and show I am putting effort. She shook her head. Make sure to put Archaon on. Latia didn't want this to be a traditional wedding as it would go against your tastes, so make sure to armor up. Romonus turned to Azzy, who from the look of it was shrugging. He placed a hand on the robe he put a lot of effort into and changed it back to his black leather suit. This one wasn't his usual bloodborne suit and was a black leather robe and suit. He also used magic to grow back his beard, which Graphia began coming out. She didn't mess with his hair as his haircut looked good. There we are. She reached into her pocket and pulled out some cologne that Magdarin had made. She sprayed his neck, wrists, and his chest. Now you're ready, make sure you put on Archaon and you're ready. He started chuckling as he expected the girls to want him to dress up in a suit or something. Are you sure this is what they want? Nislord nodded. It is Master, Latia, Rias, Venelana, Itsuki, Miria, Sylvana, Roygun, Serafal, Valerie, Vespera, Aquino, Chiron, Sikvera, Rias, Natsum, Kuroka, and Walburga were quite clear that they wanted you to wear Archaon. Ophis didn't care what you wore and said she wouldn't care if you came out naked. She doesn't care about a lot of things. He smiled as he sounded like her. Right, I guess Archaon is the best. As he said that, Archaon began to emerge from his soul, encasing him armor. At first, Archaon was silent, but soon the armor began to sniffle. Honestly, I am so happy they care about me so much. My armored, your family cares about me. Archaon could barely keep himself calm, and soon he was straight up crying. Romonus had never seen that, so he started patting his shoulder plate. Graphia shook her head as she looked at the crying living armor. Latia did help to make you, so she felt you should be included. Now stop crying. Archaon shut off the waterworks and went quiet. Once Archaon was silent, Graphia looked up at Romonus. How do you feel? Proud and happy, how else am I supposed to feel? Graphia patted him on his armored arm. Like that, enjoy your wedding day, just like I enjoyed my wedding with Surzex. Now get out there, Sunamore. She was calling back to when she and Romonus had fought off several cultivator groups in China and acquired he now destroyed True Longinus. Are you still focused on the opposite spelling? We had to do that for the cultivators. She chuckled as she hurried him along. Stop whining and get ready. She grabbed Asterion and Milicias by their hands before she began walking away with Sequoia and Nisselord. That just left Viviana, who seemed to want to talk to him. When everyone was gone from the room, he turned to her. He sat down on one of the chairs as it seemed to be serious. Viviana, anything on your mind? Viviana stayed quiet for a few moments, but in the end, she couldn't keep it quiet. Can you tell me why you haven't tried to get with me? Am I not pretty enough, or do you just not see me that way? Because we have known each other for years and you have never hesitated before. I didn't want to do this on your wedding day, but I felt I should bring this up before we drift away. Romonus thought about it as he felt they were really good friends. There was a lot of tension between them, but he had been so busy that it never came up. I didn't think you saw me that way. You never said it, so I didn't either. She got to her feet and she walked toward him. When she reached him, she got onto his lap and looked him in the eyes. It caused her many chains to jingle, and so did her heavy breasts. Yes. I have known you for years and I keep coming over to your house not just to see Itsuki, but to see you, you dummy. Why did you think I didn't like you? He just smiled. Guys are dumb. Yes, you guys are. Anywho, I am walking you to the aisle. Usually, it is a wife thing, but I will do it myself. Consider it a gift to my best friend Itsuki. Fair. He nodded. Yeah, it's fair. Good, come on then, the groom has to be the first to arrive. She grabbed his hand and helped him to his feet. She then walked over to his right side and started walking him toward the altar where the wedding would take place. Chapter 115, Final Vows. Long chapter today. Viviana smiled as she held Romonus's right arm. She was reminded of how many years had passed with him smiling at her, giving her friendly looks, and never even making a move on her. She almost thought he had forgotten about her, but it was better late than never. She looked up at him as they walked toward the altar where he would wait for his brides. You know, Latia and her uncle worked hard on making this chapel. It doubles as a church for you, the demon god of destruction. She doesn't plan to spread a religion of you through the human world though, as she knows you don't care about that stuff. She made this city both a tribute to you, her husband. She will leave it here in case anyone decides to turn over to your religion. If that doesn't make her the best, I don't know what else does. Making a whole chapel for her husband. He nodded as he could feel the sentiment. Latia is a special woman, I do have to thank my father for that. He got us together and she has been a blessing. Look no further than Grimaldus. Viviana turned to his right shoulder where the living automaton Grimaldus was resting. I still can't believe she just made him. How is he alive? Grimaldus ignored her as he only spoke when needed. This time, words were not needed. As for Karn, he was resting on Romonus' left shoulder while Azzy was currently sitting on the head of Mephiston, who was walking at Romonus' side. It would make no sense for his familiars to not be included in the wedding because they were a big part of Romonus' life. They stopped talking when they both arrived at the doors leading to the altar. Viviana let go of his arm as she looked up at his face. When she looked at him, Romonus was smiling. It wasn't one of his usual prideful or battle-lusted smiles, it was a genuine and soft smile. You ready? He patted her on the shoulder with a nod. Of course. When he opened the door, Viviana grabbed his arm once again as they stepped inside. When he did so, he looked inside at what he could only call a Titanic altar. The chapel was nothing like a Christian or Catholic church, as it seemed to be a mix of Gothic and grim dark imagery. The bricks it was made from were pitch black and the place was lit through several burning phosphex fires burning in an eerie green-purple glow. When he looked up at the altar and saw the cross, he had to say Latia knew him very well. The religious symbol she designed was an 8-pointed star with a demon skull in the middle wrapped in chains, with the skull being an imitation of his demon form. The chains ended in the mouth of the skull and it radiated a demonic aura. Just that was surprising enough, but he then focused on all of the guests who had been invited. He raised his armored hand and addressed the guests. I would like to thank everyone for making it. This will be the largest gathering of the supernatural ever. As Viviana led him to the altar, he saw the person who would officiate the wedding was Shiva. Shiva these days normally shape-shifted to appear a young middle school boy, but this time his wife had forced him to be serious. At the moment he looked like a handsome young man in his early 20s, with dark blue hair and blue skin, wearing a dark blue suit with his trident in hand. Around his neck, he had his cobra, Vasuki, and he had a small smile on his face. When Romonus stepped up to the altar, he extended his armored hand to Shiva, who shook his hand. Shiva, you are going to officiate things? Latia asked me. She felt if anyone in this world deserved that honor, it was the strongest, not including you dragon and demon gods, of course. I agree, you are more than deserving. Romonus turned around with his cloak billowing behind him. This time he looked at the crowd and saw a wide mix of people from every supernatural community, even those that didn't like him. Among the guests were the clan lords, who now knew that there was no such thing as Satan or Old King faction. they knew only the demon god faction remained because, in the past 2 months, any that tried to plot against the demon god were murdered by shadows or demons. Among the clan lords, he saw Lord and Lady Phoenix who had brought their children. Riser who Romonus had all but forgotten how he felt as he did not want to get on the bad side of the demon god. Rahvdall bowed politely when he met Romonus Gaze and Rahvdall who seemed a bit nervous to be this close to the demon god. They were not the only ones here as he could see Azazel who was taking pictures, Armoros, Ben Amun, Sahariel, and Tamiel. With them was Shuri who had her phone ready to see her daughter and husband. He didn't see Alaric, the father of Miria, but he saw his wife Emmeline Amdusias who was also waiting to take pictures. He didn't see Barakiel since he would be with Aquino and the rest of his wives-to-be and their father. He saw his brother Serzex, Graphia, Sakuya, Nisilard, Milikas, Lord and Lady Lucifuge who had been resurrected, and Fujimai. Sitting along with Serzex was his peerage including his 3 mentors Surtur, Suji, and McGregor. McGregor was patting the shoulder of Surtur who was crying lava as he still remembered how small Romonus was just a few years ago. He has always been a big softy. Fujimai was sitting with the guests from the yokai faction with Yusaka, her daughter Kunu, and Magari the leader of the Nikomata in Kyoto. She was with Fujimai who had been like a daughter to her so having her back was quite great. Romonus could see his friend Ancestor Deming sitting alongside a few other cultivators from the Ghost Corp sect. He also had a few humanoid undead and corpse puppets who were dressed in fancy robes. He also saw Arjak in his werewolf form along with several of his werewolves and some vampires from the defeated Carmela faction. Arjak had a grin on his face as he saw his friend about to marry. Lady Citri and Sona were here dressed quite fancy as they waited for Lord Citri to emerge with Seraphal. Sona's thoughts right now were conflicted because she had no idea how her weird sister was going to get married before her. It was not fair and that made Romonus laugh in his head. Then were the guests of Erewhon, his Celtic death god friend with several Dullahans including Kiva who seemed just like the other wives or mothers who were ready to take pictures. Among the guests, he saw Amaterasu and Sakuya sitting together with the 5 sons of Amaterasu along with the leaders of the principal clans of Japan. There were hundreds of guests and most of Romonus didn't know as he could even see Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, Ares, Aphrodite, Artemis, Apollo, Hephaestus, Demeter, and Dionysus. Persephone wasn't here and for good reason as he had killed her husband. The Greek gods didn't want to be here, but when Latia sent them an invite, she said refusal would be an act of disrespect so here they were smiling like nothing happened. Odin, Freya, Thor, Magni, Modi, Idar, Loki, Baldur, and several Valkyries were here all sitting in their section. In another section, he saw Horus, Ra, Ta-Aten, Isis, and Osiris Egyptian gods. In another section, he could see Quetzalcoatl and even the Jade Emperor and a few gods from the celestial court. It was like Latia invited everyone, but Romonus was not going to turn this into a red wedding. No one would die today, even Zeus as he was here as a guest. All this happened in moments as Romonus looked through the entire crowd. He then broke his silence as he raised his hands. I said it before, but welcome. I see gods from the world over and I have to say I am proud for you all to be here. I know I may not be exactly popular with a few of you, but that doesn't matter right now. Here, all are guests and no one shall be harmed, Zeus. When Romonus locked onto him, Zeus froze in fear. Just like Zeus was nothing to a dragon god, he was nothing to Romonus. On a happier note, I first would like to thank my friends and family for helping me in my ascension. Arjak, Chen Deming, Azazel, Barakiel, Ben Amun, Armoros, Ajuka, Falbium, Arjak, Erewhon, Avivaton, Shiva, my brother Serzex, my sister-in-law Graphia. My 3 mentors Surtur, McGregor, and Suji. You all made my ascension to godhood smooth and I thank you. Now, all stand. As he said that all the guests stood up from their seats as they waited. Viviana looked up at Romonus and smiled before she stepped down to join her dad, Azazel. Once she was with him, Shiva stepped forward. With that out of the way, let us begin the ceremony. The brides may enter. Karn and Grimaldus jumped off Romonus' shoulders landing on Mephiston's back. The griffin then walked off the altar to stand at the side as he didn't want to be in the way. Romonus stood tall and proud as the double doors opened. He waited patiently as the musicians began playing some custom music that seemed to match the gothic and grim dark atmosphere. The Phosphex fires burned brighter as Latia, Romonus' first fiancée, stepped inside with her father Zurab Astaroth. When he saw Latia, he almost laughed as she wasn't wearing a dress. She was wearing a custom set of Sister of Battle armor. The armor was bright white, with a veil on it. Her hands were empty as she walked side by side with her father who was dressed in a dark green outfit with a long clock behind it. When the guests all saw Latia, they then looked at Romonus wearing Archaon and felt that this just matched. When Latia and Zurab reached the altar, Latia's father handed her off to Romonus who held his hand out. When she took his hand and stepped up on the altar, she smiled up at him. Expecting a dress? I was. Did you know I tried to come here in a fancy cultivator robe? I even shaved my beard for this. Latia shook her head. Honestly, never touch the beard again. I like it. Latia and Romonus quieted down as his next wife began walking through. After an extensive tournament of rock paper scissors, next was Rahvdall. When he saw her, he once again almost had to laugh as no wedding dress. She was wearing what he could only call her milky spiral magical girl cosplay, just with a much longer skirt covered in plates of armor. It reminded him of Saber from Fate, and it just suited her personality and status. Her father Lord Citri, who was walking with her, wanted to sigh because his daughter was so odd. However, seeing how Latia and Romonus were dressed, it seemed they just had a thing for armor. When she reached the altar, he handed his daughter to Romonus, who pulled her up. You look great, Rahvdall. Latia once again designed everything. I honestly love this outfit, and getting married as a magical girl just feels right. Latia smiled at Rahvdall. I know. They quieted down again as after a short talk, next up was Sylvana along with her giant of a father Vivitan. She was wearing her soul armor Ernaline, which was Archean's sister in creation. As Sylvana stepped into the church, the guests now were positive that Romonus and his wives were just weird. At weddings, they expected to see extravagant dresses and suits, but instead, these people were dressing up in legendary sets of armor. However, Romonus and his wives-to-be wouldn't change it since this is what they liked. Once Sylvana reached the altar, Vivitan nodded to Romonus and handed his daughter off. He then went to join Lord Citri and Zurab in the father section. Sylvana, are you ready to be my wife? I wouldn't be here if I wasn't. This week we kept our distance for the surprise was hard. We aren't used to being away from you. Rahvdall and Latia nodded as they agreed. They were used to talking to Romonus daily, so even a week away from him was sad. Now they would never be apart from him. Once Sylvana stood in the row opposite Romonus with Latia and Rahvdall, Aquino walked into view with Barrakiel. Unlike her sister's wives, Aquino walked in wearing an all-black wedding gown that flowed like silk. All around her body were enchanted gemstones, and her dress itself was covered in tiny diamonds of purple and black. When Aquino came into view, Shuri instantly started taking pictures of her daughter. When Romonus saw her alluring and fancy dress, he gulped. She looks amazing. Aquino also had the biggest pair of breasts in his harem, only rivaled by Vanillana and Vespera. As for Aquino herself, she had the biggest smile on her face as she held a bouquet of black and purple roses grown by Magdarin. Barrakiel had a large smile as he was giving his daughter away to Romonus, someone she loved and cared for. When he reached the altar, he released her hand and began releasing a few tears. Take care of her, Romonus. Of course, Barrakiel, my friend. He then joined the rest of the fathers as Romonus pulled Aquino onto the altar. Look at you, Aquino, standing out like a queen. Aquino held her head high as the enchanted crown in her hair shimmered. I am marrying a demon god. As a Nephilim, I thought I should look the part. When we were discussing it, I wanted to dress in a proper wedding dress. Does it look good? It looks beyond amazing, like you. She smiled with a wide, beautiful smile. I love you, Romonus. I love you too, Aquino. I love all of you. Aquino then stood next to Latia, Rahvdall, and Sylvana. Once they got quiet, the next two entered as Kuroka and Chiron walked in together. Kuroka was wearing an all-white kimono in a wedding style while Chiron wore all black. They were holding hands with their tails swaying in joy. Since their father was a piece of shit and their mother didn't like Romonus, they walked each other. Romonus loved how they looked with their contrasting colors, reminding him how lucky he was. When they reached the altar, he held his hands out as Kuroka handed him Chiron's hand. Chiron handed him Kuroka's hand. It was both cute and kinda sad they had a piece of shit father, but then again he was soul dead now. You two look adorable, my kittens. Kuroka chuckled as she looked up at her husband. Well, soon-to-be husband in a few moments. We do, don't we? Before meeting you I didn't think I'd be getting married like this, but if I am honest, I am glad I am. Chiron normally said one-word answers, but she didn't do that this time. Romonus. Thank you for saving our lives and our species. We owe you a lot. You don't owe me nothing. We will be together for eternity, so let us make the most of it. As he said, they both joined Latia, Sylvana, Rahvdall, and Aquino. Romonus raised his head and he was once again left speechless as Rias walked in with Zeoticus. Rias, much like Aquino, walked in a wedding dress, but it was a blood-red dress. She was covered in enchanted rubies with a crown of them in her hair. From her ears, she had 2 purple rubies as earrings and a whole necklace of them. She looked stunning, and from the look of it, Riser was biting at his tongue as she was supposed to be his fiancée. As for Zeoticus, he had cleaned himself up, he looked better than he did these days and he had a smile on his face. He wasn't going to let all the past bullshit affect him right now, as this was Ryasake and Romonus. At the end of the day, they shared blood and they always would share blood. Just like Aquino, she held a bouquet grown by Magdarin. They were roses, but they seemed to be made of solid crystals and they radiated a warm, fiery aura. It seemed like she was holding solid fire flowers which highlighted her crimson hair and ruby-covered body. Xerxes began crying tears of joy as he took as many pictures as he could. As for Romanus, he stood prouder than ever as he could tell many were jealous of his wives who were the best of the best. That fed his demonic pride as his largest sin was pride. When Xeodicus and Rheus reached the altar, he reached out and placed a hand on his father's shoulder. "Thank you, father." Xeodicus smiled, ignoring all their issues. "Of course. Rheus, Romanus, be happy. Both of you." He raised his hand and handed Rheus over to Romanus. He took her hand as his twin sister stood by his side watching as Xeodicus walked to join the other fathers. Xeodicus held his head high so he would not act pathetic as he had done before. It was time to man up and accept what had happened. Rheus and Romanus didn't say any words as they needed no words. They looked at each other with smiles on their faces. Words would be reserved for later, for now, Rheus stood next to her best friend Aquino. Their black and red hair and dresses clashed in a beautiful contrast. Just like Chiron and Kuroka, and they even gave each other a fist bump. Once they stood in line, the next of Romanus' brides walked in and this one caused the biggest ruckus. It was Venelana and she stood with her back straight holding the arm of her father Demonidas Baal. Everyone knew she was the mother of Romanus, but this was not the first time this had happened in devil culture. As such, very few people cared as many gods had similar incestuous relationships. Venelana, unlike Rheus or Aquino, wasn't wearing a colorful dress, she was wearing an all-white one looking like a regular bride. She stood out the strongest as the lack of colors or bright gems put all the focus on her. Her expression was one of pride. As she walked down the aisle she met people's gazes. There wasn't a hint of shame at the fact she was here to marry her youngest son. To Romanus, there was no bigger power play than what his mom was doing. When she reached the altar he held his hand out with a smile. "Mother. Son." When he took her hand from his grandfather, Demonidas smirked. This was interesting. He then walked down to stand next to his friend Avivaton. Once Venelana was at his side he lowered his head to look at her. "You look ravishing, my dear." "Thank you. I heard everything you told Latia. I am glad you are wearing our Canon. No better wedding outfit for you exists. Trust me, he is happy to hear you say that. I do have to say the white dress suits you. A devil wearing white feels like such a power move. Glad you got the message, now let's stop talking." Venelana then joined Rheus and Aquino as they were the ones wearing wedding dresses. Once she was on the altar, the next to join Romanus was Roygun. Roygun wasn't alone as her father was walking her down. Lord Belphegor was a lot like his daughter with a pair of ram-like horns, just much larger. He was also very tall and looked quite serious, but he had no expression. Roygun was dressed in a blue and purple set of demonic knight armor. He was honestly expecting her to wear a dress, but in a way, this suited her better. When Roygun reached him and the altar, her father just grunted and handed her hand to Romanus. He then walked over to join the other fathers, but what confused Romanus was that her father wasn't mad or anything. Can he talk? Yes, he just doesn't like to. Right. I would say a lot more, but I love your armor. Thanks, it was my dad's which Latia sized for me. She then walked over to Seraphal, her best friend. They both smiled at each other as another two of Romanus' brides walked in. This time, it was Vespera and Valerie, with Vespera being walked by her father. Valerie, as agreed, was being walked by Serorg since she had no other male family member. They also were the vampires of his harem, and in the case of Vespera, she was wearing her set of hound-shaped armor. The armor was modeled after the berserk armor and Shin, who were standing next to Tobio. Valerie, though, was wearing a fancy dark blue and red vampiric dress. Since Kuroka and Chiron walked together, they chose to do the same. Vespera held her hound-shaped helmet in her right hand as she held her father's arm with her left. She stood side by side with Valerie, who was holding onto Serorg, thankful for taking the time to give her away, since her father was dead, killed by Romanus. She smiled as she wasn't sad about that. Her dad was abusive to her and her dead mother. As for Vespera, she had experienced something similar, but she had killed her dad herself by mistake. It was good he accepted her apology. When they reached the altar, Vespera and Valerie took Romanus's hands as they were handed off. "My queens of blood. Valerie, you are the reason everyone standing here is immortal and as strong as we are. Vespera, thanks for being my sword for that time." Vespera chuckled. "Queens of blood. I like that. What about you, Valerie?" Valerie smiled. "That works for you, but me." Valerie was nice even after all this time, but she was the moral compass of the group. Even Rheus wasn't all as nice as she once was, as power had that effect on people, devils in particular. Though Romanus felt Valerie was selling herself short, as she could be quite brutal in a fight. Regardless, they both got into the line of his wives as they didn't want to stand around for hours. After Valerie and Vespera were unexpectedly Ophis. She was being walked down by her father/alternative self Ophos, who was smoking a fancy cigar as usual. Ophis was also not dressed any different, and when they reached the altar and Ophis handed her to Romanus, she yawned. Is it over? Soon. Good. She then walked off to join the rest of the girls, making him chuckle. That was just like her, but the next one was Miria. Just like Latia, Roygun, Vespera, Silvana, and Seraphal, she came in her armor. It was the same armor her father used to wear, and now here he was walking her down the aisle. He seemed happy but disappointed she wasn't in a wedding dress. However, when he thought of his violent daughter, it just made sense. When they reached the altar, he made a slight joke. Here. Careful, she bites. She is your problem now. Miria was in too good a mood to snap at him, so she didn't. Shut up and get in line. Fine. When he walked off, Romanus looked down at Miria. Happy you listened to that 9-year-old kid. She blushed as she wasn't ashamed of it, just telling that story in the future would be. Yeah, I am. She let go of his hand and joined her sister's wives as they were almost done. After Miria, the next to walk up was Sikvera, walked by her father Lord Agar's. Sikvera was an actual wedding gown. It was emerald green, and just like Rias and Aquino had emeralds and other gems. When she reached the altar, Lord Agar's handed her off to Romanus with a smile. When can I expect my grandchild? Sikvera snorted. Give us another 6 decades at least. Lord Agar's then walked away with his head held low as he was excited for a grandchild. He would need to wait a while still, but while he walked off, Sikvera went to stand next to Latia. That just left it. Suki walked by her father Goru and Natsum walked by her father. Goru was crying because his little girl was getting married and also jealous of Romanus, as in his youth he too wanted a harem. As for the father of Natsum, he was just confused and kind of angry at the whole harem thing. Though, there was nothing he could do at this point. As for Walburga, she just strutted up to the altar by herself in a gothic Lolita dress. Even if she was Romanus' slave and servant, she deserved to be up at the altar. Once all 17 of Romanus' brides were up at the altar, that seemed to be it, but Romanus wasn't done. He waved his hand and dragged Viviana, who was sitting with Azazel, to his side. We're forgetting one more. When Viviana landed on his side, she was surprised as she looked at Latia the planner. She held up her left hand and projected each name in Romanus' harem. And that makes 18. Romanus, that is still rookie numbers. You need another 7 at least. Romanus sighed. Shut up you. Latia smirked. Never. Shiva smiled as he slammed his trident into the ground. If everyone is here, we are ready to begin. Romanus and his 18 fiancés and brides are all lined up, with Ophis using magic to help Viviana into something good. Once she lined up, that made the number 18. 18 seems small for a fanfic, and even more so in lore of DxD devils. Ha 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 ha. Chapter 116, A Marriage to Last an Eternity. Once all of Romanus' fiancés and Romanus himself were facing each other, Shiva raised his hands to begin the address. Today, we are all gathered to officiate the marriage between Romanus and these lovely ladies. They have all decided to join him in marriage. Now, I ask you, Romanus, demon god of destruction, are you prepared to love, honor, and protect every one of the women who all have chosen to marry you? He nodded. I am ready. As long as my name is Romanus, I will be ready. I will be there for each and every one of them. I vow on my honor and my godhood that I will endeavor to make you all feel like goddesses in my eternal life. Shiva patted him on the shoulder as he asked him directly. Romanus, do you take Latia as your wife? I do. Shiva then turned to Latia, who was standing tall and proud. Latia, do you hereby take Romanus as your husband? She nodded. I do. Join hands. Romanus and Latia stepped forward and held each other's hands. To Romanus, this ceremony, no matter how long it took, was worth it, as it made it clear that he was responsible for their happiness as they were his. In that case, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. He was about to bend down, but Latia began to levitate before she reached him at eye level. She wrapped her armored arms around his neck before she kissed him. The moment they shared their kiss, Romanus just felt different. Calling Latia, who was his first fiancée throughout his life, his wife, felt right. Latia then pulled back from the kiss, and a smile as bright as gold. Now, I am the first wife after all these years. Once they were husband and wife, Latia landed on the ground and released his hand. She then walked back into her spot as Romanus moved down to face Seraphal. Shiva smiled to himself as he prepared to say something different. Seraphal, do you take Romanus as your husband? I do. Romanus, do you take Seraphal as your wife? I do. Then, I announce you as husband and wife. Unlike Latia, he went down to one knee to kiss Seraphal. She could fly if she wanted, but she wanted her prince and husband to do this. She also got to look at Romanus wearing his prized armor Archaon. Seraphal walked forward and stepped onto Romanus' giant armored knee. She wrapped her arms behind his head before she kissed him in a very gentle and loving kiss. I love you, Romonus. Does that make me Rahvdall Bale? It doesn't ring well. Keep your last name as Leviathan, just take it as a middle name. If that is what you want. I will. Once Rahvdall stepped off his knee, he stood back up as he turned to Sylvana. Shiva smiled once more as Sylvana and Romonus stood in front of each other. Ernaline and Archaon both silently wept as their hosts prepared to give their vows. The two living sets of armor ether ally patted each other on the back. Shiva looked over to Avivitan, who was on the brink of tears, and Chauheim, who was taking pictures of her lovely daughter. Sylvana, do you take Romonus as your husband? She nodded as she looked up at Romonus. I do. And Romonus, do you take Sylvana as your wife? I do. They both stepped toward each other, and despite Sylvana being taller than average, even she was small compared to his gigantic size. As such, she jumped into his arms, showing just how much they loved each other. Romonus already felt like a king, but rather than hog him, Sylvana backed away. They could talk forever after this day. Once Sylvana was back with the now married girls, Roigun stepped forward in her shimmering armor. Shiva once again asked the same question. Romonus, do you take Roigun as your wife? I do. Roigun, do you take Romonus as your husband? I do. Shiva once again did his job well. Then I pronounce you husband and wife. When the two shared their kiss, Roigun ran her hand across his face. With a smile, she stepped next to Rahvdall before Aquino moved forward. Aquino's black dress caused all eyes to go on her. Her mother Shuri was beyond happy to see her daughter married to the love of her life. Just like she was to her husband Barakiel, now that their family was together, it just made everything better. I will put this part of the chapter on hold. This is harder than writing a battle with how many wives Romonus has. His harem is small compared to some fanfics, and it is still annoying. Sheesh, damn you Romonus. Once Shiva had officiated each marriage to Romus and he had exchanged his vows with his now wives, Romonus turned to the guests. I thank all of you, family, friends, or just honored guests. I thank you for being there for the best day of my life. I have nothing more to say unless any of my wives have something to add. Out of his wives, Latia had been the one to plan everything, so she was the one to speak up. As my husband said, I thank you all for being here for our special day. I know it couldn't have been easy for some of you, Zeus. At this point, Zeus felt he was just invited to be made fun of. He didn't even dare make a face as he smiled. Not at all, I was honored to be here. Romonus crossed his arms as he didn't believe him. He had killed and used the corpse of Hades as part of his ascension ritual, so Zeus must be seething inside. Regardless, Latia continued to explain what would happen. Now that the marriage ceremony is over, the next part will begin soon. I know, my sister wives and my husband won't want to stick around for a week or month-long event, so this wedding ends today. The next part will be a dance between all of the married couples, including the father-daughter dance. I know all of the fathers will want to have that memory for the future. After the dance is over, all the guests can enjoy the buffet or leave. Romonus did add something. If anyone wants to talk to me though, you can come to me. That will be all. All of the thousands of guests rose to their feet as Latia's Necrons opened the double doors. One of the giant noble Necrons spoke up to the guests. The dance shall take place in another location. Prepare to teleport. As the Necron said, he and the rest of his brethren raised their hands as a burst of bright green enveloped the room. Every single one of the guests was teleported to a gigantic ballroom. Once again, through the use of space expansion spells, all of the guests could fit. Plus, at the sides was an enormous selection of foods from every culture the world over. Latia had not spared a single expense for her special day. Romonus then spoke up to address the guests. If you are not married or just don't want to dance, that is also fine. If you decide that you don't want to participate, you can just enjoy the meal, or if you desire you may leave. He looked throughout the crowd, but not one person dared to leave. If they didn't want to dance, they instead went to enjoy the buffet like Ophis. Ophos was also not one for dancing, so he instead joined her at the dessert bar. Romonus then looked over at his wives with a smile. Go on, enjoy your dances. All of them walked off from him to get that memory with their fathers. Of course, this did leave Valerie, Kuroka, and Chiron with him, as they didn't have fathers. Instead, Kuroka turned to Chiron. Sis, want to dance? Okay. They both held hands as they wanted to have fun at their wedding. They did not need their father to have fun. As for Valerie, she didn't ask Saror to dance and instead turned to Romonus. Can you dance with me? Of course, your word is law. He smiled as he extended his armored gauntlet to her. She took his hand, and despite Archaon being a lethal divine armor, to her, he was family as well. Romonus, though, shrunk down from his staggering 7 feet 5 inches to his previous 6 feet 10 inches just to make it easier for her to dance. They both walked off into the middle of the dance floor, and seeing that many others began to do the same. The musicians for this day were once again Necrons who prepared to play some of the instruments they had on hand. When the machine started playing, many assumed they would be terrible, but Latia once again proved her genius. The music the automatons played was mesmerizing and it started the dance in earnest. Romonus gently took Valerie despite the fact she was far from fragile. Compared to most beings in his world, she was unkillable because of her demonic grail as he named it, which had fused with his demonic piece. When he became a demon god, his infernal divinity had merged with it, empowering it and Valerie. Now, he began to dance with Valerie, the reason for his busted immortality. No matter what he did, he would always be grateful to her as she was also the one who drew out the most bloodline talent from them all. Thanks to her, his wives were easily the strongest beings aside from him in their world. Even Shiva would lose to his wives because of how many elixirs he had given them from their alternative selves. Though as he and Valerie danced along with the rest of the guests, he saw her eyes start to tear up as they moved through the dance floor. "Why do you cry, dear? You should smile. These are tears of joy, not sadness. You saving me was the best thing that ever happened to me. I thought I would die alone, but now I have friends, I have a husband, I have everything I could want. I am crying at the blessing I have. I am happy to hear you say that, Valerie. You are honestly too pure for me, too nice, but I hope your kindness never dies. You will become our moral compass at the rate we are all going. Then I will strive to make sure all of you never lose track of your kindness. Even if it is a small spark, I will keep it alive for you, Romonus. For all of us, because even a little bit of kindness will go far even in the darkest of hearts, my demon god." He smiled as he continued to dance with Valerie as he could take this time. In the meantime, Latia, Rahvdall, Roygun, Aquino, Vespera, Silvana, Miria, Vanillana, Sikvera, Rias, Natsum, Itsuki, and Viviana all got to dance with their fathers. Ophis and Ophos wouldn't dance, while Berga had no father and she hated dancing. Azazel though seemed about to cry as he didn't think this would become his wedding to Viviana. Though he was happy that she considered him her father, showing how much she cared for him even if she wouldn't say it. The dance became the largest party after the wedding as every single guest who was married or engaged participated. Even Zeus and Hera, who had not danced like this in millennia, put aside their bitterness to share a dance. When the father-daughter dances ended, Romonus then had a dance-on-one with each of his wives. When all of the dances ended, Romonus spent the rest of the time meeting with the guests. He spoke to his friends like Arjak, Ancestor Deming, Erewhon, Sarorg, Ajuka, and Falbium. He even had a conversation with Zeus where he told the king of the Greek gods that he would not kill him or mess with his pantheon. Romus went after Hades out of necessity, and he didn't need to kill gods throughout his world. He even spoke to Loki, but he did make it clear he would spare him in exchange for Fenrir. Loki didn't struggle much and agreed to give him Fenrir to spare his life. After his talk with Loki, he then met with each god king and they all swore to never seek trouble with him. He accepted their words and he gave his word to let them rule themselves as long as they didn't look for trouble with him. However, when it came time for him to talk to Riser, the Phoenix kid didn't have the stones to speak up. Plus, Rias was older than him by several years through the time chamber, making them see him as a kid. However, as fun as the wedding was, soon came the time for it to come to an end. After a final goodbye, Romonus teleported away with all his wives to enjoy his honeymoon. With that out of the way, he had married all 18 of his lovers, and knowing him that number was set to grow in the coming millennia. Not sure if this is good news, but the end of this fanfic is relatively approaching. Around ch. 200 I would say. I won't make that the goal, but it is a good estimate. Chapter 117, Happy Married Life and 25 Years Later. Following the end of the wedding, Romonus and his wives went on their honeymoon, which went on to be inside the demon god realm, which was the underworld that Romonus had been feeding the essences of each alternative underworld he conquered. As a result, it was the biggest separate realm connected to Earth, and the monsters and plants that called it home had become truly monstrous things to be able to survive the sheer pleasure of Romonus' infernal divinity. Speaking of Romonus, while he and his wives enjoyed themselves at his brass citadel, which also doubled as his demon king castle, he chose to bind the demon god realm even closer to his soul. In doing so, he effectively formed his own heaven, but he felt it made more sense to call it hell. In binding it to his soul, it was no longer bound to Earth and could only be accessed by those he allowed. It became not just a separate realm, but also a soul realm that would grow along with him. That did have the desired side effect of making his soul far stronger, as he now has his realm that would protect his soul. His wives ended up loving that, as the feeling of being enveloped in his soul realm was pleasant to them. They did begin to make his demon king castle more like a home, as when he made it, he just made it for the fun of it. To do so, they teleported their house from Britain, which they then fused with his castle. This meant all of the rooms and other living arrangements were fused into the castle, giving the inside of the demonic castle a welcoming air for their family. Once their living situation was taken care of, they truly let loose as they enjoyed their married life. That did involve a lot of sex in different parts of the castle, and as Rias promised, she dressed up as his secretary and roleplayed by giving him a blowjob and tit fuck while he sat at his desk managing the underworld. He had to admit that made his work easier, but it got even better when Vanillana joined in. That wasn't the only case of extreme sex, but sex was not all he did. He used his completed demonic saint cards on some of his wives. For his evil pieces, he currently had Chiron and Miria as his rooks, Valerie and Aquino as his bishops, Tobio and Silvana as his knights, and Itsuki, Cookie, and Natsum as his pawns. It meant he still had his queen piece open along with his mutation pawn and a regular pawn remaining. His mutation queen and pawn both had been severely mutated by his infernal divinity, meaning whoever received those would become stronger than ever. Even the regular pawn he had used was mighty, but he left his evil pieces alone. Instead, he began to use his cards to enhance his lover's abilities through the demonic saints. He had a queen, jack, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, ace and a joker card. Meaning, he had 3 mutation pieces as he had 2 mutation evil pieces and a brave saint joker card. His lovers did not refuse, so he began to use his cards. He turned Vanillana into his queen, Vespera into his jack, Serafal into his 10 card, Roygun into his 9 cards, Latia as his 8, Rias as his 7, Sikvera, his 6, Kuroka his 5, and Walburga his 4. As for Viviana, he chose to use his ace card on her, so he still has his joker, 3, and 2 free for later. When he did that, all of his lovers effectively stopped being devils and became demons. All of their abilities were enhanced just like those he had used his evil pieces on. Now, all his harem was on equal footing, however, Ophis was not included in that. Since she was a dragon god, he didn't think there was any need to change that. Just as he was going to do something else, Ophis grabbed his joker card and infused it with her essence before binding it to her soul. That effectively made her his joker card, which made it into a demonic dragon god with her dragon side being dominant. He was quite surprised to see that, but he welcomed it. With his demonic pieces, demonic saints taken care of, he went back to enjoying his married life. He stayed out of politics and kept to himself for over a year, doing nothing more than truly relaxing with his wives. He gave his attention to every one of them as they deserved to be treated like queens. For that entire year, he and each of his wives made the most of their time being married. At the end of the year, they returned to the underworld. When they returned, Romonus the demon god, and his wives the demon queens took control of the 72 pillars and the entire underworld. While Romonus controlled the underworld, he honestly couldn't care less about ruling the pillars. He took a hands-off approach until someone stepped on his toes, which required his demons or shadows to deal with it. Not many had the balls to do so, and those that did were just too stupid to do so. With the alliances of his allies and his overwhelming power, Romonus stabilized the underworld, which without his orders chose to unite rather as clans, as an empire. The fallen angels, werewolves, vampires, cultivators, and Dullahans joined in, which made Romonus' next action feel right. Just as he had said, he changed the 4 Satan system to the 7 great demon princes. He allowed Falbium to retire as he had promised, leaving the position as Asmodeus empty. As such, he began to put people he trusted as the 7 princes. He didn't let his brother retire, so he stayed as Lucifer, but he gave him more vacation days. He placed Serorg as the new Mammon, making Serorg the first Satan Mammon. To replace Falbium, he allowed Azazel the honor that he was not expecting. However, he accepted that with 7 Satans they wouldn't have as much trouble. To replace Falbium, he put Arjak in place, which the werewolf king accepted with honor, making Arjak the new Asmodeus. Serafal chose to step down, but she kept her Leviathan last name as Romonus liked it. However, the position of Leviathan was taken by her father Lord Citri. Ajuka remained as Beelzebub, and Romonus took the position of Satan and Demon King. The new 7 great demon princes took over controlling the underworld in his stead. To make ruling less of a chore, each demon prince had their teams work through paperwork or bureaucracy. The old council was disbanded and replaced by a council made up of all the allied races of the alliance. The old devil council was angry, but when they tried to complain they were merely executed. With the new system of ruling in charge, all the efforts of the Underworld Alliance were on rebuilding their strength. To do so, Azazel and Valerie created new fertility potions for cheap that made it a guarantee for devils, fallen, and any other race to get pregnant the first time. That caused birth rates to skyrocket, including far more hybrids than before. Sona, through the support of her sister, built her school to accommodate all of the new children being born through the underworld. Social class didn't matter, and neither did race with the rise of hybrids. Such schools were set up in every city, with Lucifade, which was a giant city built in honor of Romonus, housing the largest one, named Demon King Academy. It was on the nose, but Romonus didn't care. For the next 25 years, Romonus, his wives, and his friends led the underworld to progress. They even helped the surviving remnants of the extinct clans to repopulate by the order of Serorg Mammon. 25 years was a long time, and a lot had changed for everyone, especially Romonus and his family. Asterion Gremory, the younger half-brother of Romonus, walked toward a towering castle gate. Standing at the front were 2 greater shadow demons, the fusion of shadows and demons. These days, Romonus has fused both armies to create the perfect fusion of demon and shadow. Asterian's black hair was long and flowing while a neat beard covered his face. He was tall, much like his brother, at 6 feet 6 inches. Unlike Cerzex, he didn't mind drinking a potion made by his older brother Romonus to get taller. It got him great success with his harem, but he didn't follow the example of his father. That was a quick road to failure, as Zeoticus showed. As he approached the gate to Romonus Demon Castle, the shadow demons pushed the gate open for him. Asterian made his way inside the castle before taking the teleport gate manned by several Necrons. When he opened his eyes, he found himself not in a giant throne room, but a regular living room. Here, he saw Romonus sitting on a giant couch as they watched TV. Asterian smiled as he saw his brother, Romonus, now 65 years old. The use of time formations, and how often they raided the multiverse, made it so they aged more than was expected. Despite their age, with their infinite lifespans, it was as if only a few days had passed. There were also some new people here that Asterian had not met since his brother and his wives had become reclusive in Romonus' soul realm. One was a blue-haired, blue-eyed, horned woman who was Tiamat, Romonus' queen. The other was a small black and silver-spiked wolf, which was Fenrir, Romonus' mutation pawn. The other was someone Asterian recognized as being Ingvild Leviathan. She had been brought here by Leviathan herself after healing her from her sleeping diseases. Asterian placed a hand over his chest before he gave a short bow. Out of respect for his brother. Brother, sisters-in-law, it has been far too long. How are you all? Romonus didn't stand up as he turned to see his younger brother. Everyone else in the room did the same, as it wasn't just his wives here. Romonus brought up a fat cigar up to his lips, which he cut with a wave of his finger. He then lit it up with a puff of fire before he took a drag before he exhaled the smoke. We have been well. We were enjoying our quote-unquote retirement. We have grown rather bored of raiding other Earths and universes. Sitting at the mini-bar, Ophos raised a glass of powerful alcohol. True that, we planned to end the Eevee, but after killing them in another multiverse 500 times, they stopped being a bother. We even discovered the dark multiverse, and that was fun. Lady Red, sitting next to him, took a light drink from her glass with a nod. True, it did lose its charm, and then we chose to have our mini-vacation. Which turned into 40 years. Ophis, who was with Romonus, turned to her father and aunt with a smile. It wasn't just a vacation, we were training. Someone else sitting with Romonus spoke this time. Exactly, we barely had time to relax. Lady Red turned her head to look at her and Ophos' sister Trihexa, who was currently sitting next to Romonus. She wasn't married to him, but she was one of his new girlfriends. After Lady Red had trained Trihexa to be a sentient creature, she sent her to live with Romonus. Trihexa had a spiky crown of horns, pale white skin, and 7 pupils in her eyes. When Asterian heard that, he sighed as he looked at his brother. Brother, you have grown lazy in your old age, haven't you? Romonus shook his head as if he had been working hard just on something different. He continued to drag on his cigar before turning to Latia. Latia, tell this stupid boy what we have been working on. Latia, who still looked as perfect as she always did, smiled. I and all of our magic experts have been working on a way to turn the dimensional gap's energy into a way to leave our reality. Not our multiverse, as we have already destroyed over 500 of those. Another 100 dark multiverses as well. We did all the research we could on the multiverse and learned all we needed. This is a little-known secret, but Romonus, as he is now, is so strong that in one of the dark multiverses, he blew up a small galaxy cluster when he went all out. Asterian rubbed his head as that was far too much. Now that is insane, are all of you that strong? He saw a bunch of smiles as none of them had been slacking. Each one had fed on hundreds of gods, and their alternative selves. Among Romonus' family, the strongest would be Ophis, who threw her demonic dragon god status with her concepts and abilities. The ranking of them all was contested and ever-changing, but Northwest one had come close to beating her. Though, with Asterian here, Romonus made his choice. He stood up and shook his head. All right then, let us deal with the Eevee now and put all our efforts into leaving this reality. All of his wives and lovers got up along with Ophos and Lady Red. Even his familiars in Azzy, Karn, Grimaldus, Mephiston, and Fenrir had been added to that list. It was time to end the Eevee, who were not even a threat. With them dead, they would put all their efforts into traveling out of Dragon Deus, as it had grown boring. It was time for the outside realities to tremble at the name Romonus. Does anyone know any good Berserk fanfics? They all get dropped or suck. Chapter 118, Message and Update. This message is coming out of nowhere, but I feel I have to give an update on why I suddenly dropped off the map and stopped writing 100%. A couple of months back, I ended up hospitalized for a severely infected abscess, and I was nearly dying. After I got out of the hospital, I was kinda out of it, since I kinda was dealing with the fact that I almost died because I had not wanted to go to the hospital, as I thought it would pass on its own. Newsflash, it was not something that would just go away. Now that I am in a good headspace, I have decided to give this fanfic its continuation. however, I will be removing the Elden Ring arc since that entire arc kinda killed my interest, so instead, we will be stepping into the Fateverse for a start, rather than Elden Ring. Chapter 119, Leaving Dragon Dais at last. My bad. I said I would be coming back sooner, and I didn't. My real life has been chaotic to say the least. But I finally got around to writing again. Should try to keep up somewhat stable uploads. Forget about the Patreon for now, I don't have enough forward chapters for it to be worth it. Once Romonus stood up from the couch, Asterion nearly fell to his knees when he felt just a small portion of Romonus' intent. It wasn't his aura, merely a small part of the contained power flowing through Romonus' divine flesh. Romonus walked up to Asterion and patted him on the shoulder. When that happened, Asterion could swear he could see literal oceans of blood and gore behind Romonus, as Chindeming would say, a mountain to piece the heavens of skulls. I see you haven't slacked off, brother. That is good, never stop training. Asterion nodded before gulping down the saliva in his mouth. I strive to follow your example. Romonus grinned. Good to hear. Asterion, as one of Romonus' brothers, had access to Valerie's modifications. Still, even through that cheat, he could not compare to Romonus, Rias, or Cerzex, his half-siblings, as he would always lack the power of destruction. His mother was also of commoner blood, not from two noble clans, like the Gremory or Baal clans of Venelana or the Gremory of Zeoticus. Even without that, he was still strong on his own, just not as powerful as Romonus, who was still the only demon god in his world. The way he had achieved godhood was unique to himself, so no one else could use it. Then Romonus increased his great power by raiding 600 alternative Earths. He had consumed many versions of God, causing his omnipotence domain to reach new extremes. He had many battle-related principles he created and plundered from each god he killed. Though he still had not found any other reincarnator like himself, he assumed their realities were just rare or harder to find. He also didn't find any in the 100 dark multiverse Earths he had destroyed. The past decades had not been peaceful, but only a few truly knew of what he, his wives, and his companions had been doing. They had been increasing their strength through slaughter, but that was just a small price to pay, and no one truly cared. Not just that, they were so close to leaving Dragon Dais in some capacity. Romonus turned to Latia, who was the best artificer he knew. After all the years, her hobby had become a true aspect of her powers. Latia, you think your device will work? She seemed to scoff at the idea that he was doubting her. Of course it will, we will get that ready so you can go deal with the Evie told for the 601st time. By the time you get done, I am sure we will be able to activate the device to take control of the vast power of the dimensional gap. You, Azzy, Ophis, Ophos, Lady Red, and Trihexa will be able to supply us with all the reality warping power we need to send us where we want to go. Good. Karn, Grimaldus, Mephiston, Fenrir, Azzy, let's go. While 5 familiars moved to his side, he equipped Archaon and the rest of his gear. On his back, Ruin Maker, the psychotic greatsword, Malakota the stoic Malbronze spear, and the cursed shield, always craving violence. His closest partners and companions, along with his familiars. Once he was armored, he teleported in a flash of infernal divinity along with his familiars. Romonus had killed Evie and told so many times across hundreds of alternative realities that they were as insignificant as any other being he had met in Dragon Dais. Even in the realities where he encountered his variants who had become gods, they died to him with ease. He had not yet encountered a female version of himself, but some of his variants had enraged him to no end. One of them was a pacifist and a slight to his divine name. Another was a spoiled coward, noble loser, so he tortured that variant slowly. Though there was one of his variants he respected despite the fact that he still killed him. That variant was born like Serord with little demonic energy, but that variant wasn't content to be ridiculed. Born without the Baal or Gremory clan traits, he was seen as a joke, but he just used the ridicule as motivation. He read through all of the magic tomes he could get his hands on, and eventually, on his 18th birthday, he did something so awful that it earned Romonus respect. He tricked Rias and sacrificed her, absorbing her essence and soul to restore his demonic energy. As his twin, her sacrifice had caused all the demonic energy he should have had to come back in a flood at double the amount. His clan abilities returned, and before anyone realized, he assassinated Zeoticus in secret. He then devoured his soul before he tricked Venelana and devoured her soul as well. When Romonus had found that reality, his variant was insane, muttering about voices and echoes, as his method was flawed. Romonus stopped reminiscing about the 600 variants of himself he had killed and consumed. Instead, once he appeared directly above the plane of the Evie and the Altolda gods, he glanced at the war-torn planet with disinterest. He had seen and destroyed it many times before, and he even used several cores of this planet to enhance his gear. As he landed on his shoulder and moved his 5 heads to look at him. How are we doing this? Blow it up, go in guns blazing, send the demons. Romonus glanced at his familiar with a smile. Send in the demons this time. Romonus spread his arms out wide, and on the planet, his massive demonic legion began to emerge. No longer limited to just 10,000 now, his legion now numbered 100,000. Each demon that appeared on the planet was a mix of demonic energies and shadows, making them appear to be made of solid darkness. 100 greater demons of great strength, 1,000 demon princes working as commanders, and 100,000 demon knights all releasing a constant aura of death. His shadow demons were offshoots of himself, making them exceptionally powerful and immortal like himself. You know what to do: kill the living robot men, leave the gods and fleshy people alive. If anyone attacks you, kill it. Once his orders were given, he sat down in the void of space, looking down at the planet. It would not take long at all. He hoped that by leaving Dragon he could find worthy foes. He was sick of facing weaklings and fools. Back in Dragon Deus, Latia and the rest of the group were inside the dimensional gap, standing on a gigantic, floating circular gate made of a purple glowing metal. The metal was pure orichalcum that had been mixed with Romonus' divine demon blood. That metal was then forged by Romonus, who then gave it to Latia, who had been working on this gate for years already. All over its surface were runes and glyphs in Enuncia, as leaving this realm or world was harder than moving to another reality. However, by taking control of the dimensional gap and through the power of Romonus and the other gods in their group, they were sure to escape. At the moment, Latia, Aquino, Walburga, Rahvdall, and Sikvera, who were the best magicians in the group, were checking on the gate's integrity for any failures. Lilith, Leviathan, and Ingivold were also doing their part as everyone worked. Trihexa, Ophis, Ophos, and Lady Red, as instructed by Latia, were using their divine conceptual energy to fuel the gate. All four of them had their hands on an apparatus that was absorbing their energy, which was being stored in the core of the gate. Latia glanced up from the screen she was typing away at. I have checked everything 5 times already and everything is in order. Aquino glanced at the tablet she was holding, as the material wasn't harmed by the gap or the powerful energy of the dragon gods. I agree. We just go to turn it on, I guess. Once she said that, everyone gathered around as this was exciting. Rias glanced around at everyone, as it truly was a lot of people. When we do leave this reality, where will we go first? Can we even control where we go? Venelana felt that was a good thought to have. That is a good question. Can we decide where we go, or will it just randomly drop us off somewhere without a means to return? Rahvdall didn't think that sounded safe. It could be dangerous, as for all we know, we could be dropped somewhere dangerous. I guess Romonus knows what he is doing. You would be right. She jumped a bit before she turned around, and she saw Romonus standing right behind her. Karn the honey badger, Grimaldus the robot wolverine, and Mephiston the giant griffin were with him. Karn and Grimaldus were standing on his shoulders while Fenrir and Mephiston were at his sides. Rahvdall rolled her eyes as she looked up at him. Your armor weighs over 15 tons, and you are 7 feet 5 inches, and yet you move so silently. He smiled as he patted her on the head. Just really good energy control. Now, Mother, to answer your question, because of the nature of my domains, I should be able to control our destination for the most part. Consider our first opening of the gate as a test. I will link my senses to the gate, and I will control where it will open. Once I determine it is safe, we then go through it. Simple. Who gets to go in after it is safe? Everyone turned to Viviana, who was standing in front of the giant gate. He thought it was obvious. Me, of course, as I have to determine how dangerous it is. After that, you can go any time you wish. Viviana smiled as she heard that. And here I thought you would have said something about you going alone to test yourself. He snorted. And risk getting lost away from all of you. Hell no. Regardless, Latia, how are we looking? She typed away a bit more at a touch screen before she began to charge up the device. Ready, all we need is for you to give it a boost, and I will turn it on. Here. She tossed him a headset, which he put on to link his senses to the gate. With that, he got into place in front of the gate. He held his hands out, and a stream of super-concentrated infernal divinity began flowing into the gate. Latia saw the energy levels increase to astronomical amounts, so much so that she worried the device would break. Activating the gate now. Romonus continued to feed the gate his energy as she activated it. When that happened, the vast energy of the dimensional gap seemed to be absorbed into a tiny point in the middle of the giant gate. Romonus and everyone braced as in the center of the gate, a singularity made of all the gathered energy of Romonus, Ophis, Ophos, Lady Red, Trihexa, and even Azzy, who helped. It had the colors of the dimensional gap, and it was unstable at first. Latia hit a key on her touch screen, causing all the Enuncia runes to activate, stabilizing the gate. With it stable, it became a solid light purple gate that stayed open without any flickering. Romonus and the others stopped feeding the gate their energy as the gate was now open. He then closed his eyes as his senses melded with the machine and the gate. When he checked where the gate opened, he saw that it opened in what he could only call the realm between realms. Through his power of Enuncia and magic, he began to search for a world, realm, or reality. As he began to move through different dimensional coordinates, Latia ran a few diagnostic scans on the gate to see how stable it was. In the meantime, he continued to search for somewhere physical. When Latia was finished, she turned to him with a smile. "It is stable, just waiting on you." Once Romonus got control of the gate, he began to make use of the gate's power to shift through countless positions and coordinates. For the most part, he just saw wide empty space, but after a bit of searching as he moved his hands, he controlled the gate with his mind. He seemed to have found something. He slipped past some of the cosmic events around the coordinates before he found it. A planet, one that looked just like Earth, but not exactly either. He zoomed in on the planet, and he felt it. Both life and a mind in the world. What do we have here? He sent a layered scan of that world, and he smirked. Guess I am in luck. I found fate.